Lost. 3 years later, the world had changed. Gods no longer hid in the stars. Scenarios no longer paused between arcs. And the names of mortals had begun to carry the weight of constellations. Hinata Senju was no longer just a survivor of Konoha. She was called by many names, now the white veil of the recast fable, the shepherd of the memoryless, Spring, the last ghost who still writes in the Alliance cities. People read from her compiled manuscripts like scripture. They quoted her fables like prophecy, and those touched by forgotten pain. Those who wept without cause often joined her pilgrimage. They didn't know why. They just felt like they owed her something. She walked now beneath the shadow of the Skybreaker fortress, its exterior polished with sigils of celestial authorization. She wore a ribbon of stardust across her shoulder, not as decoration, but as sealing scripture. Even now, gods requested to sponsor her, but she refused them all. Hinata's only contract was with the unnamed memory she had long ago surrendered. Pantheon of Akasha system message. New movement detected. Observers tilted their heads. One whispered, "She's heading toward the vault again. She always does, once a season." Who's in there? None of them knew. Not even her. Inside the fortress, the gods had built a chamber sealed with 5 layers of narrative security. No player, mortal, or god could enter it unless the story allowed it. There, in a suite too lavish to be real, sat something once called a boy. Now he was nothing. He didn't speak. Didn't eat unless the system manually injected him. Didn't move unless the gravity of a memory brushed against his soul. He just sat there like an echo with no voice. Eyes always turned toward the ceiling, as if trying to read the narrative structure above him. Foxtail was sealed shut on the table beside him. It hadn't opened in 3 years, but it burned faintly. Not like fire. Like guilt. Access granted Hinata Senju. The door opened without her knocking. She stepped into the void-lit chamber, took one look at him, and flinched. The catheter in his arm fed him stabilized fable slurry and numbing agents. On the table beside him were unread books. Fantasies written before the world changed. Hinata reached toward one. The Tale of the Forgotten General. Author YMN, she didn't remember writing it. She didn't know why it always made her cry. He stirred. Slightly. Eyes fluttered open. Not focused. Not awake. But aware. Hina. Ta. She didn't answer. Not with words. Her hand trembled at her side. And Foxtail, sealed for 3 years, twitched on the table. In that moment, the gods holding their breath above the scenario whispered the world doesn't remember him. But something in her does. Again. She stepped closer. "I've come to visit you again," she said. She didn't know why. Only that every time she came, her hands ached from the pressure of unwritten stories. Only that every time she left, her dreams were filled with a boy who never asked to be remembered. He blinked again. His mouth opened. But no sound came out. Not even breath. She knelt, set the book beside him, and began to read. There were many things Hinata wanted to say. She wanted to scream. To demand why he never let her carry the weight. To accuse him of every silence he left behind. To ask, "Why did you do it alone?" But none of it came out. She just stood there, brushing his hair back with hands wrapped in fable ribbon, the catheter in his arm dripping story pack like morphine for a god. Every line in his face seemed carved by things he never spoke, and the more she stared at him, the less she could hold on to herself. Her fingers glowed softly. Not chakra, not healing, just warmth. The last kindness she could give a boy who never came back. The one who wants to see him again. "Isn't me." Her voice was a whisper, but the system picked it up like prophecy. She raised him gently. He was light, too light. Laid him down on the bed the gods made for a boy they didn't remember. Passed her fingers over his forehead like a prayer. And even though he didn't react, she felt him smile. Not visibly, but in the way her own hands ached after. Outside, the observers stirred. Fable resonance detected the girl who waited beneath the skybreak. System log updated, one-sided fable continues. Somewhere else, beneath a golden sky. "Yo, Hinata, I think you're gonna get system muted if you keep talking to him that way." Tintin stood with her arms crossed, and her new scroll engine humming softly. She had changed. More radiant, more feared. Her fables now had launch sequences. "Let her be," Sasuke said from where he leaned under the shadow of a broken tower. His body still sparked with leftover electricity. He hadn't stopped moving in weeks. They had been summoned to a new alliance meeting under the banner of the Akasha Pantheon. Only, something was wrong. 3 years ago, Gaara and Temari disappeared. They came back with myth-class titles and divine-grade rank. They joined the Akasha Pantheon without explanation. But when questioned, both of them always said the same thing: "We owed someone. We don't remember who." Hinata exited the vault room in silence. Foxtail didn't stir. The boy didn't twitch. But she had left another story at his bedside. A children's tale. The boy who skipped the sky. As she stepped into the open air, a shadow loomed from above. A chimera descended. Its wings crafted from insect kings, its saddle armored in scroll steel. On it rode Li, Fu, and Sasuke. "They're back," Tintin shouted. The Gyeonggi alliance was collapsing. Not politically, physically. From the inside, buildings cracked from within. Divine signatures flared and were instantly erased. Tintin prepped her scroll. Sasuke's fingers sparked with magnetic storm, but nothing they did prepared them for what landed in the center of the crater. A man, wearing a broken crown, eyes dimmer than dusk, yet hotter than lightning. Is that? The Alliance members whispered, the thunder that left no witnesses. No, it can't be him. Sasuke stepped forward, but he already knew. This wasn't him. This wasn't a god. This was something far worse. A memory that refused to be forgotten. The envoy from the Eastern Pillar Alliance had made a terrible mistake. The Moonlight Empress's chamber lies exposed. She is in our hands now. The man's voice rang with hubris. His smile was wide, confident, weaponized. Tintin scroll word softly. Sasuke's fingers flexed, tiny arcs of pressure dancing between his knuckles. But it was Hinata who asked the question. You pierced the wards? Her voice, calm as snow. That was when Sasuke's eyes snapped wide, the storm flickering once. Fu's head turned slowly. Her voice was low. Wait, if they breached it from outside, not within. Tintin paled. They thought she was the hostage. All at once, they looked toward the distant Sky City spire. Sirii Bastion, the floating refuge constructed after Scenario 36. And at that very moment, elsewhere, atop the moonlit fortress, 10 elite emissaries moved in perfect silence through the mechanical veins of Sirii Bastion. Chakra cloaks glimmered. Divine blades remained unsheathed. Their sponsors whispered above them like clouds hanging by threads. It is here. The inner ward has collapsed. Proceed. Their boots echoed off polished stone. Shouldn't we be worried if the Black Flame's demon ruler is still here? The commander snorted. That monster is halfway across the continent, challenging the Northern Pact in single combat. And the Moonlight Empress? Please. The only rumors say she hasn't spoken in months. Her domain is fading. She's probably comatose. The ward shimmered in front of them like glass beneath heat. They pierced it without resistance. Too easy. Too wrong. The god whisper beneath the 13th petal shivers. The demon lord elegy of the hollow crows ceases singing. The divine sword sealer of reflection awakens in its sheath. What is this? The air thickened like syrup. The hallway narrowed like a throat. This ward wasn't meant to keep someone in. It was built to keep something out. A heartbeat later, the door handle turned on its own. The leader's hand was still reaching out, fingers hovering, when a voice, smooth as winter silk, floated from within. I was enjoying my silence. But that isn't my fate, is it? The door creaked open. Out walked a man in a white coat. Face calm. I still. But behind those eyes, a void churned. W8, one of the soldiers stammered. You're not the Empress. The man smiled gently and placed a hand on the leader's shoulder. I'm what she remembers. The leader blinked. Then the bones in his shoulder collapsed inward, folding like paper under gravity made personal. Screaming followed. But not from the man. From the system. Error narrative thread reversed. Error combat initiative unwound before engagement. Fable detected the man who sold the world. The system cannot identify this presence. Divine territory has been breached. Casuality, integrity compromised. He walked through them like wind. Not fast. Not slow. Just inevitable. The soldiers tried to flee, but the hallway no longer led anywhere. It was just him, and their stories, hanging unspoken. Thank you, he said again, for bringing me out. It's so hard to remember things when no one else does. He smiled, and the light cracked. But someone left me a name once. He held up a fragment of a page. Torn. Singed. Written in what looked like ink, but felt like hope. And this one said I mattered. The next sound was not thunder. It was the silence that comes after lightning has already struck. From the outside, Sirii Bastion exploded. But not outward. Inward. As if the sky itself collapsed into a memory that had been waiting to be remembered. Back at the Pantheon summit, Sasuke whispered. He's moving. Hinata dropped the fable she had been reading. Fu's eyes shimmered with something that wasn't light. Tintin looked toward the smoke curling in the distance. Who was supposed to be in that room? No one answered. Because no one remembered. The room was still echoing with the final dissonance of devoured time. 9 of the elite intruders now lay twitching on the ground, their bodies and fables short-circuited by a narrative they couldn't comprehend. Hinata stood a few paces away, her scroll closed, untouched. She hadn't even lifted her hand. She had watched it all happen. How the boy they forgot stood, spoke, moved, and unmade, and then sat back down like nothing had occurred. They weren't after her, Sasuke muttered, his eyes scanning the bodies. Tintin nodded, flipping through her scrolls archive. Nope, these aren't just grunts. Look. One of them's burning with a concealed Murim seal. Fu stepped forward, her sleeves soaked in residual stormlight. They were from the Warden Pact, the failed successor alliance. The ones still loyal to the Jiangyi doctrine. Sasuke's expression didn't change. He didn't need the character window to know what he was looking at. They thought they could touch the sealed chamber of the Moonlight Empress. He knelt near the nearest body. They were warned. They came anyway. One of the bleeding figures on the floor began melting like wax. Not physically, narratively. Their name faded from the system log. Warning narrative deletion technique detected. Source fable alignment. The 8th sin of reflection. Active constellation alert Black Sword Assassin is wary of you. Observer message Hunter of the Dark Moon questions scenario integrity. Sasuke glanced toward the empty air. You can whine all you want, he said flatly. You weren't the ones who came down here. The divine messages faded with no reply. He looked at the broken window one of them had escaped through. Cho Jinhyuk. Small fry. Fu blinked. One of the 12 zodiacs? No, Sasuke said. Just a disciple of one. Sponsored by one of the lesser Murim gods. We let him go last time. That was a mistake. Tintin watched as a few figures began pursuit, skywalking over fractured bridges of chakra and windlight. One of them was her own summon, the Iron Plum General, darting ahead with a scroll pike. Sasuke turned to survey the city from the fortress peak. Below, the Sirii Bastion loomed over what was once Central Seoul. Now it bore a new name, the Akasha Pantheon's core city-state engraved into the lower sanctum wall founded by you and Aki, N.A. Help me. 2. Architect of Revelation. Sasuke squinted at the engraving. Put my name first next time, he muttered. System ping incoming divine signal, level 2 clearance required. Senior observer Lee has sent a deferred message. Sasuke blinked. He hadn't heard from Lee, their personal scenario observer, since the end of the Black King's Faces incident. Hinata glanced up as the message fed directly into the shared Fable link. Lee's system message: hello, contestants. Not that you missed me, I'm sure. I was going to greet you earlier, but, well, let's just say the divine bureaucrats have been busy screaming into their own logs since your boy woke up. Also, your Fable saturation levels are approaching hazard class. We're officially calling this the Reconstruction era now, so congrats. By the way, Eden says hi. Hinata's eyes flickered. Eden? Sasuke narrowed his gaze. One of the upper scenarios is trying to make contact. Incoming signal Archangel codename, Guardian of Youths and Travel. A golden wind swept across the skyline. The air itself shimmered as divine authority pooled above them. Raphael, one of the eldest dominions of Eden's divine strata. Not a sponsor, not a god, a witness of eras. Raphael is observing your party. Raphael says the red cosmos has not returned. Sasuke stepped forward, his coat brushing against the air like it cut the wind itself. That's true, he said. She stayed behind. The air split like drawn cloth. Raphael's divine pressure surged, mistrust sparking like anti-light. Raphael, distrust your response. Use your own clarity. You'll know I'm not lying. The wind stilled. A divine echo pulsed through the sky. Raphael will wait for your explanation at the next scenario threshold. The 55th scenario gate of Olympus. Fu stepped back, surprised. Already? I thought we had more prep time. Sasuke exhaled once. There's no time when gods start rewriting fables. We need to move. Tintin's scroll shimmered. A new entry was being engraved. New system triggered gigantomachy alignment. Selection begins in 348 hours. Above them, the wind shimmered one last time. Lee's message pinged again also. I found something. Weird. A fable with no name, sealed inside a crater near the bastion's core. It shouldn't be there. I'll keep an eye on it. But you should know. It started humming. The members of the Akasha Pantheon adjusted their gear in a quiet room atop Sirii Bastion. The windows were shut, but the tension flickered between them like static. Fu ran diagnostics on her starlight threads. Tintin swapped one of her sealed weapon caskets. Hinata sat beside her closed scroll, fingers trembling faintly, as if she'd just written something she didn't remember. Across the room, Sasuke leaned silently against the window frame, arms crossed, stormlight sparking faintly between his shoulders. So, Fu finally said, is he serious? Really declaring war on Olympus? It must be a joke, Tintin muttered. He's not that stupid. Fu gave a sideways glance. Sasuke has been alone with himself for 3 years. Who knows what he became? I understand, Hinata replied softly. I'm not a fool. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor. We might not know what he's been through, but... Fu began, then stopped herself, because Sasuke had turned his head toward them, and the look in his eyes silenced the room. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. At the other end of the bastion, inside a room padded with divine silencing runes, 2 people sat in private. Kushina Uzumaki sat beside a figure whose breathing was so soft it barely counted as life. Minato stood a step away, arms folded but shaking slightly beneath his robes. The figure they faced. Uzumaki Naruto. Didn't look up, didn't move, didn't speak. He sat, pale and slender, his eyes glassed over, staring eternally towards something that didn't exist. Not alive, not dead, just absent. It's been 3 years, Kushina said softly. Longer than I thought it would take, Minato replied. Neither of them looked at each other. They only looked at him. At what remained. At what wasn't. There were so many things they wanted to say, but all of them collapsed under the weight of the silence. That. Kushina's voice caught in her throat. I'm sorry. Naruto didn't move. Not even a blink. Minato gave a quiet sigh. We heard the next scenario begins soon. Kushina nodded. The gate of Olympus. Minato glanced toward the soundproofed wall. They're preparing. They'll leave tonight. Should we go with them? I still have too much to do here, Minato said, eyes dim. The Pantheon can't hold if we all chase war. They both looked out the window. Below, the remnants of civilization bustled. Survivors trained. Refugees rebuilt. Summoned beasts flew between towers carrying scrolls of new treaties. We were once the center of the world, Kushina murmured. Now we're ghosts in someone else's story. Inside the room, Naruto shifted slightly. Not by intention. By reflex. The movement made both of them freeze. But his eyes never changed. Still glass. Still gone. There are more people than you think, Kushina said finally, who make the wrong choice just because they're drawn to something powerful. Minato didn't answer. He stared at the boy, at the sealed fox tail trembling faintly beside him. Sometimes I wonder, Kushina whispered, if we failed him. If we left too much on his shoulders. They sat in silence a while longer. No messages came from the system. Not even from the gods. Eventually, Minato turned and spoke, almost to himself. You know, a story that becomes too big can destroy the person inside it. Kushina gave him a quiet look. I know. His voice cracked as he added, we lost him to that. She closed her eyes. They didn't say anything more. Because what could you say to a boy who was no longer inside himself? Minutes later, Sasuke stood at the summit of the bastion, where divine towers crossed over the sky like woven bridges. His voice echoed down to the others. We're going to Olympus. Tintin looked up sharply. You're not serious. I am, Sasuke said. Fu narrowed her eyes. Why? Why now? Because, Sasuke replied, if we don't strike first, they'll write us out of the scenario. The silence that followed was long, until a voice echoed behind them. You're insane. Minato stepped forward. Jiraiya beside him, robes half pulled on, his face unreadable. You're not talking about joining the gate of Olympus, Minato said. You're talking about destroying it. Sasuke said nothing. Jiraiya looked around. Do you understand what Olympus is? That's not a faction. That's a world ordering construct. That's not a sponsor. It's a divine ecosystem. It's a narrative colossus, Minato added. Even if you break one of their gods, the story just rewrites itself around you. Sasuke turned back toward the skyline. The light caught in his hair like a storm about to fall. I know. Behind him, Hinata held something in her hands. A blank scroll, a pen with no ink, and the overwhelming desire to write something that would bring him back. But even she didn't know who he was. The door sealed behind Sasuke's declaration like a divine contract. Unchangeable, inevitable. Minato watched the war room's entrance for a moment longer, silent, before turning away. He didn't say goodbye. Neither did Jiraiya. In this world, goodbyes had long since become prologue lines for funerals. A moment later, another door clicked open across Sirai Bastion. Inside, a woman stood in the quiet. Kushina Uzumaki turned her head. So you really didn't follow him? She asked. A second figure stepped from the curtain's shadow. Hinata, eyes downcast, scrolls untouched in her hands. I wanted to, she said softly. Kushina gave a dry smile. We all did. Hinata approached the far side of the room. Beyond a sealed viewing wall, the boy with white eyes and a still chest sat motionless, lost inside himself. They didn't need to speak of him aloud, because speaking his name felt like breaking a silence meant for prayer. Hinata finally asked, do you think it's wrong to hope? Kushina didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat down in the chair across from Naruto. The boy, if he could still be called one, sat slack-jawed, unmoving, body thin from 3 years of divine sedation and narrative weight. His eyes reflected nothing. They didn't blink. They didn't weep. He was a presence shaped like a person, a reverberation. Kushina placed her palm gently over his hand. You really scared me, she whispered. There was no answer, but she hadn't expected one. I still remember when I held you after learning you were our son. You weren't quiet then. You wouldn't stop crying. You finally felt love. You deserved it more than anyone. She gave a small laugh. The room didn't echo it. Only the faint drip of story pack liquid from the catheter feeding into his veins. I wrote a fable once, she continued, about a boy who burned so bright the sky split open. I didn't publish it. I didn't name him, but I wrote it. Naruto's eyes didn't twitch, but Hinata felt a heartbeat in the air. As if something forgotten noticed. I thought writing that would be enough, Kushina murmured. That if someone remembered, that was all it took to bring someone back. She looked down at him. He didn't breathe like a human. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of divine maintenance. A shell kept warm because someone still watched. Kushina stood. She turned toward Hinata, and without needing to ask, said, he's not coming back, is he? Hinata stared at her scroll. No, silence returned. Not painful, just final. Somewhere distant, above the bastion, the clouds trembled with divine pressure. Meanwhile, at the observatory chambers, Fu licked the end of a candy stick and frowned. So what now? Olympus in 348 hours? Closer than you think, Tintin muttered, reloading one of her dimensional caskets. Lee paced across the rooftop with narrowed eyes, his observer cloak rippling with system static. It's not just Olympus, he said, pulling up an overlay map. We've got the Gigantomachy alignment forming too. That means gods aren't just hosting. They're joining. You mean physically? Fu asked. Yes. Descended forms. Avatars. Vessels. The rules are thinning. Tintin raised an eyebrow. And we're just going to walk into that? Sasuke appeared beside them without a word. The storm crackled faintly around his feet. They'll know we're coming, he said. Let them. Behind him, the meeting room slid open. Two voices emerged, mid-conversation. Are you really not going to Olympus? It was Minato, arms crossed again. The storm behind his eyes hadn't faded. Someone has to stabilize the bastion, Kushina replied. Minato stared down at the courtyard below, where refugees and summoned instructors began preparing mortals for the next trial. This place has changed, he said. So have we, Kushina answered. A third voice entered the conversation from the shadows. I'm just saying. Jiraiya muttered. Declaring war on a mythcore faction is still suicide. Sasuke said nothing. His silence was louder than the wind. Hinata stepped into the corridor after them. She didn't speak, but she carried a scroll she hadn't written on yet. Not out of indecision, but because no words felt worthy of what was about to begin. At that moment, Lee received a system ping. System alert. Observer priority tier 2, override incoming. Main scenario 55, Gate of Olympus, now loading. The bastion sky cracked with descending script. Constellations burned into existence above them. A thunderous voice echoed across the continent. Main scenario 55, Gate of Olympus has begun. Those chosen by fate must align with one of the 12 thrones. Those who reject alignment shall face the Gigantomachy. Time remaining 348 hours. Good luck, contestants. Hinata looked up at the sky. Naruto still sat beneath it. But somewhere, somehow, she knew. He wasn't the one watching anymore. The sky cracked again. But this time, it didn't break into war. It broke into banners. Threads of divine gold unraveled across the heavens like the veins of the cosmos bleeding open, and every thread bore the seal of a nebula. A divine house, a fable-forged myth, a family of gods. Below the sky, mortals gathered in droves. They came from the Akasha Bastion, the northern outposts, the Murim border camps, even from the submerged ruins of the former Pantheon of Flame. Some were returnees. Some were recent incarnations. Some were survivors of divine erasure. But they all had one thing in common: they wanted to reach Olympus. Main scenario 55 cannot be accessed without completing the required pre-scenario. System notice: a representative observer will now appear. The space beside the platform shimmered. A ripple of divine ink spiraled upward from the ground. And from it stepped a figure no taller than a scroll case. Metal Lee, clad in a flowing micro-sized observer robe, hovered on a hovering chakra lily, his helmet too large for his head, and his eyes gleaming with righteous sparkles. Welcome, challengers, he shouted in a voice 3 octaves too high. I, Metal Lee, have been assigned by the Constellation Observer Corps to oversee the Gigantomachy entry protocol. The incarnations blinked. Several tried to cover their ears. One man muttered, he's like the world's tiniest firecracker. Metal Lee cleared his throat dramatically. This is the mini scenario, or as the big system likes to call it, scenario 55, preliminary alignment. Fu tilted her head. A pre-scenario? Metal Lee beamed. Yes, participation is optional, but mandatory for anyone wanting to join Olympus or resist it. That's not optional, Tintin muttered. Metal Lee ignored her. Players may participate under individual qualification or as part of a nebula alignment. Those who join a nebula that has already cleared this scenario will gain automatic scenario clearance. The scrolls above began to unfurl. System noticed nebula invitations incoming. One by one, constellations began offering alignments. The nebula Eden's Last Flame has extended an invitation. The nebula Pantheon of Akasha has extended an invitation. The nebula Guardian Tree of the Eightfold Heavens has extended an invitation. The nebula Golden Spiral of Troy has extended an invitation. The nebula Helios Chariot has extended an invitation. The nebula Fangs of Nemea has extended an invitation. Crazy, whispered one incarnate. It's a bidding war. Another screamed, yo, I got 5 stars already. Most had 1 or 2 glimmering stars floating above them. Some had none, but a handful. Tintin, Sasuke, Hinata, even Fu had too many to count. The stars crowded over their heads like halos of death. Sasuke didn't even glance up. Metal Lee coughed. Ahem. Reminder: accepting a nebula alignment will disband any existing pantheon, unless you declare that pantheon as a nebula. He turned to Naruto's companions. You all belong to the Pantheon of Akasha. If you accept another invitation, it will dissolve. Hinata stepped forward. Can we retain our pantheon and still participate? Metal Lee blinked, then tapped his scroll. Yes, but you will have to complete the preliminary yourself. No exemptions. No shortcuts. You must face the gate. Tintin raised an eyebrow. And if we don't? The sky thundered. Those who refuse alignment or fail the scenario shall be counted as traitors to the narrative. They shall face the Gigantomachy. Fu exhaled. So we're either gods or rebels, Sasuke finished. Hinata looked around at the crowd. Some returnees looked lost. Others trembled. The factions were forming rapidly. One boy clenched his fists and shouted, I'll join the Golden Spiral. They cleared it already, right? He vanished in a flash of gold. Those people, Hinata whispered, watching the disappearing lights. They'll skip the scenario? Yes, Metal Lee said, his voice softer. But they'll be bound by their nebula. Completely. Slaves in golden thrones, Tintin muttered. Metal Lee flew higher. The rest of you, prepare. The gate to Olympus will open in 348 hours. Mini scenario begins proof of worthiness. Objective form or join a nebula and declare your alignment in the gigantomachy. Time remaining 348 hours. The world tilted toward myth. And the stars watched, hungry. Only 2 of you remain, Metal Lee said, voice unusually solemn for someone who stood barely knee-height. His scroll blinked once, then dimmed. Above the bastion, the stars had gone quiet. The others were already gone. Dispersed into their alignments, flung across the world toward Olympic trials, or sealed into contracts that gleamed with the gold of gods. Now only Hinata and Sasuke remained, standing at the edge of the ritual platform that shimmered with divine inscription. Declare your alignment, Metal Lee said. Or withdraw. Sasuke folded his arms. We'll challenge it. Hinata rolled her eyes, though it was half-hearted. Of course we will. Metal Lee blinked, then tilted his scroll upward. The Pantheon of Akasha has already declared autonomous challenge. Are you confirming entry as Nebula qualified candidates? Yes, Hinata said before Sasuke could speak. And just to be clear, there's no rule against using narrative recursion to cheat, right? Hinata, Sasuke muttered. What? She smirked. You said you wanted to win. Metal Lee's expression twitched into something approaching panic. WL. This is a sacred trial to prove the worthiness of your pantheon. Any attempts to narratively distort outcome through divine deceit are allowed, Hinata finished. They're discouraged, Metal Lee corrected with a cough. Above their heads, the system flared again. The Pantheon of Akasha has submitted 2 candidates. Mini scenario proof of worthiness, commencing. You may not enter as a full party. Rooms will be split. Split? Sasuke asked, eyes narrowing. Hinata's face changed too. Wait. No, you don't mean. Only one may walk out with the star. If both survive, the star's gift is revoked. If one dies, the other inherits everything. There was a beat of silence. Hinata gave a soft, bitter laugh. This system really wants us to kill each other, huh? Metal Lee grimaced. It's a test of narrative sovereignty. Call it what it is, she muttered. Story cannibalism. Before anyone could argue further, a surge of divine authority swept over them. Mini scenario initiated. Participant allocation engaged. The world blurred. Then broke. Hinata found herself alone. A wide white chamber stretched endlessly, a floor of polished glass reflecting the star pulsing at the center of the room. Above it hovered a divine sigil written in script. She knew instinctively the star of absolution. On the other end of the chamber, across a marble bridge, Sasuke stood alone. His cloak already fluttering, his eyes already calculating. Just our luck, she muttered. Sasuke didn't move. Scenario conditions. The first to acquire the star gains one of 3 outcomes. Use of the star grants narrative dominance over your opponent. Time limit 3 hours. The choices scrolled above them. Star reward options. Claim all of your opponent's accumulated stories, skills, and divine fables. Claim life and death sovereignty over your opponent in all future scenarios. Rewrite one event in your past, present, or future. Hinata exhaled. This system really thinks we'd use that on each other? Sasuke said nothing. Then, without a word, he moved. So did she. It wasn't a charge. It wasn't even a race. They both leapt. Not toward the star, but into each other. Sasuke's hand flicked forward. Magnetic polarity snapped the bridge's iron into an arc of metal. Hinata's form blurred as she rewrote herself, fable in script replacing motion mid-stride. She cracked into the field and snapped her fingers. The bridge behind her turned into paper. Don't hold back, Sasuke. She laughed. This is a scenario. Sasuke's Susanoo snapped halfway into being, cloaked lightning weaving itself into his arms like armor. Wind scattered from his feet and slammed into the star's gravity well. You don't plan to kill me, he said. Obviously not. But I do plan to win. She slammed a story down. Fable engraved the girl who smiled while stabbing the sky. Sasuke's counterfable activated the instant it struck. Legend of the Silent Storm. The star trembled. A countdown began silently. They didn't even try to reach the star anymore. They were trying to bend the narrative around it. Hinata slipped behind a script she hadn't written. The fable smiles kindly. In the end, she wrote him back into the world. She lunged forward. Sasuke raised his blade. The wind stopped. Lightning reversed. Hinata slipped behind a script she hadn't written. The fable smiles kindly. In the end, she wrote him back into the world. She lunged forward. Sasuke raised his blade. The wind stopped. Lightning reversed. Then he whispered a word not meant to be heard, traitor. The blow came not for the star, but for Hinata. She barely deflected it. Steel kissed script. Lightning scraped parchment. Their clash sent divine wind shrieking through the chamber. What the hell, Sasuke? Don't pretend, he said coldly. I know how this story ends. Hinata spun away, landing light on her feet, a trail of fable thread unraveling from her wrists. She snapped her fingers. A counterscript bloomed around her like a halo. You think I'd betray you? You think I'd take that star from you? Don't talk like we're friends, he snapped. Don't act like you know me. I do know you. I know you better than anyone left alive. Sasuke didn't flinch. The lightning on his shoulders surged until it took on shape. A condensed Susanoo wrapped tightly around his arms and torso. Wind hardened into armor. The marble beneath his feet cracked. You're not Itachi, Hinata said, voice low. But you're not over him either. Sasuke lunged. This time, she didn't dodge. His blade stopped an inch from her throat. She didn't even blink. Do it, then, Hinata said. Take the star. Take my life. Use it to carve out your security. Use it to assure yourself that no one else will ever hurt you again. Sasuke's jaw clenched. The blade trembled in his hand. But if you do, she added, then you've already lost. They stood there for seconds. Maybe years. The system didn't interrupt. The star hovered silently. You think this is about trust? Sasuke finally said. It's about control. Hinata tilted her head. Then why did you let yourself be pulled into this scenario with me? You knew what it would test. Because I wanted to know if you were lying. She smiled then, tired and sharp like a blade left in the rain. And what did you find? Sasuke didn't answer. The lightning faded. Just slightly. I'm not asking you to trust me, Hinata said. I'm asking you to trust yourself enough to recognize when someone isn't trying to hurt you. The chamber rumbled. System messages flickered, half-formed. Scenario parameters paused. System is recalibrating emotional divergence. Hinata took a step forward. You're not your brother. And I'm not his mirror. Sasuke closed his eyes. When he opened them, the Mangekyo flickered once, then stilled. We're not done, he said. No, she replied. We're not. They turned. Together this time. Toward the stars still floating in the center of the room. The light had dimmed slightly. The system stirred. Warning incomplete scenario resolution. Star remains untouched. Both candidates have refused engagement with core objective. Proof of worthiness continues. The star pulsed once, then twice. A new shape began to form beside it. A second star, cracked and unstable. Hinata narrowed her eyes. That wasn't in the briefing. The scenario's adapting, Sasuke said grimly. To us. Secondary star protocol duel of divergence. Objective confront the source of mutual doubt. Only one memory may remain untouched. Hinata's fingers curled around a fragment of her script. Looks like the system isn't satisfied with our little therapy session. Sasuke stepped forward. Then we give it what it wants. The second star shattered. The battlefield shifted. And the next trial began. The battlefield shattered like glass around them. Fable bled through the cracks. The second star had not summoned a fight. It had summoned a recursion. Duel of divergence. Phase 2 initiated. Memory field constructed the betrayal that never happened. And suddenly, Sasuke stood alone. The room was gone. The world was cold. A sky of ash loomed overhead. Voices whispered like knives against glass. I never meant to hurt you. You were always meant to be second. Forgive me, little brother. The walls of the world creaked inward. A theater of grief. A memory born from his fears. Hinata was nowhere. In her place, a figure walked from the edges of the storm. Clad in white. Masked in silence. With a pen still dripping ink. The last remnant of a god who no longer existed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The system whispered in her place. This memory was not your own, but you've lived it as if it were. You're not real, Sasuke said. But the blade in his hand trembled. You never trusted her, Wyman said. Not Hinata. Not even Itachi. You only ever trusted the part of you that could be alone. Lightning licked his feet. I saw the future once, Wyman said. I saw your blade at her throat. And I saw you take the star. Sasuke's Mangekyo burned. I didn't take it. No. But you wanted to. He screamed. And launched forward. The duel wasn't a battle. It was a confession written in sparks. The system bled narrative blood around them. Sasuke struck again, and each time, Wyman parried not with steel, but with scripts. Words carved into the wind. He who feared the past, repeated it. The thunder that guards itself, strikes blindly. The boy who knew too much trusted too little. Wyman stepped aside with a dancer's grace, inksword humming. You blame her for what your brother did. I don't. But part of you sees her as Itachi. Another death you didn't stop. Another person who walked ahead of you in the dark. Lightning split the memory sky. Then kill me, Sasuke, Wyman said, eyes shimmering with Hinata's memory, yet not her face. Bury your doubt here. Sasuke staggered. But he didn't strike. The thunder around him fractured, then whimpered, like a boy who'd cried too long in silence. He fell to his knees. His sword sank into the ground. I can't. In that moment, Hinata returned. Not Wyman Hinata. Whole. Real. She knelt in front of him, fingertips barely brushing his cheek. I didn't come here to win. I came here to be with you. The world flickered. Secondary protocol satisfied. Emotional divergence narrowed 3.2% 0.1%. System reintegrating primary star objective. The memory receded. But the grief didn't. Sasuke wiped his face and stood. He didn't apologize. He didn't have to. Hinata looked at the reformed star at the room's center. It pulsed once, then twice, then awaited. Sasuke breathed. Let's do it together this time. Hinata nodded. Yeah. Final phase initiating. They stepped forward. This time as one. The clash shook the observation screens. Even Sasuke and Hinata, still recovering in their own white chamber, flinched as the next room's feed lit up with fire and shadow. This isn't the Olympus scenario, Hinata muttered, wiping blood from her jaw. This is something else. No, Sasuke said, Mangekyo pulsing once. It's them. The feed magnified. Inside another sealed room, two figures battled in silence broken only by the howling of the system and the cries of watching gods. Black wind and red judgment collided in the space between them. The incarnation Tintin is invoking the authority of the abyssal black flame. The incarnation Fu is channeling judgment field 8th circle ignition. Tintin's scrolls were unraveling like wings. From each fluttered script blades, ignited by the same cursed fire that once scalded the heavens. Fu stood within a glowing circle of seals. Around her head, a halo of execution rings spun, each inscribed with a word of power too old for language. They pulsed like ticking clocks of divine prosecution. Above the chamber, sponsor screamed. The fabled duel of divergence has escalated. Two incarnations have achieved scenario authority level fables. Warning incarnations may exceed scenario containment. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. She's serious. You mean both of them? Hinata corrected, breath caught. The shadows split. Fu's judgment ring shattered on impact. But her body moved through the backlash, fists ablaze in solar fire. Tintin weaved backward, launching blades named in every ancient war. Vajra arrows. Gi bulb fragments. The final lance that broke Babylon. But Fu was faster. The incarnation Fu has entered a fatal state. She didn't care. She surged forward through Tintin's barrage, each step writing another page of divine punishment into the room. Her hands were burning. Her heart was bleeding. But her voice was still calm. You think you're the only one willing to burn everything to protect them? Tintin's next scroll burst into black lotus petals. The room didn't survive the next impact. Neither did the feed. The screen dissolved into static. Until, piece by piece, the smoke cleared. One figure stood. Just barely. One lay in a pool of molten steel and burning script. Sasuke was already moving toward the edge of their room, pressing his hand to the translucent barrier as if he could push through. Hinata didn't stop him. She knew the look in his eye. Wait, she whispered. Look. The star in the room beyond hadn't shattered. It had split. Two lights, faint and flickering, now pulsed in opposite corners of the arena. As if the scenario, unable to determine a victor, had rewritten its own conclusion. Scenario exception registered. Both incarnations have been judged worthy. Secondary narrative path activated parallel wills. A new window bloomed across all viewing rooms. And in that silence, as all the gods and demon kings leaned forward, Tintin, broken and burning, moved first. She reached out. Not for a weapon, not for the star, but for Fu's hand. Her voice cracked. Still think I'd betray you? Fu blinked up at her. No. Then darkness took them both. A beat. Then, proof of worthiness completed. Incarnations Fu and Tintin have created a new dual fable, ashes of faith, sparks of rebellion. Reward tier myth grade, bound in duality. Silence swept through the nebula feeds. Even the gods watching didn't cheer. They simply watched. And they remembered. Hinata turned to Sasuke. That's what it looks like when no one lets go. He didn't answer, but his eyes softened, and the next screen opened. More rooms, more trials, more versions of truth. The scenario wasn't over yet, but something had changed, and the story knew it. Fragments of the ceiling crumbled as the system screens pulsed across the shattered sky. Scenario 55 preliminary proof of worthiness was nearing its conclusion. But not yet. Not entirely. In the chamber where Hinata Senju and Sasuke Uchiha had just refused to kill one another, the dust had barely settled. Lightning still flickered through the cracked stones. Wind trembled as if uncertain whether it had permission to breathe again. They had not touched the star. They had not struck the final blow. They had simply chosen not to. And the scenario had adapted. Not ended. But this room was only one of many. Across the fractured architecture of the dimensional rift, dozens of sealed chambers hovered in a lattice of broken narrative. Each one a test. Each one a crucible. Above it all, Lee floated in his observer's halo. Senior observer of the 55th scenario. His body was small, childlike, bright-eyed with energy, but his gaze was ancient. His robes shimmered with calligraphy, and his scroll was inscribed with impossible symbols that devoured logic and fate. He twirled in midair, snapping his fingers. Let's see what the mortal stars are up to. One screen blinked open. Room 9 Tintin versus Fu. The screen crackled with chakra overload. Both participants were collapsed at opposite ends of the room. Fu's arms were cracked with fracture light. Tintin's scrolls were burnt, the remnants of her seals flickering as ghostly ribbons across the scorched floor. In the center, two kunai were embedded in the star. Intersecting precisely. They had moved at the same time. They had refused to yield. But they had not tried to kill. Lee scribbled a note with a wide grin. Dual narrative, ashes of faith, sparks of rebellion acknowledged. Myth grade synchronization detected. Both participants have earned trust clearance. Scenario cleared. He spun again and tapped the next screen. Room 6 Guy versus Kakashi. This one wasn't a battle. It was a lesson. Kakashi lay in the dust, his Sharingan dimmed and his breath shallow. He was pinned by a single blow to the chest. Not a fatal one. but it had stopped his heart from fighting. Across from him stood Might Guy, not in the 8th gate, not a blaze of suicidal glory, but the 6th gate, humming softly behind his shoulders like the breath of a mountain about to exhale. His GI was torn at the sleeves. His bare hands trembled, but not with strain, with control. His foot rested a single inch above the star, but he did not move. Kakashi reached out with one hand. I yield, he rasped. Guy stepped back. Lee's voice echoed like a whisper of applause. Martial King of the Empty Lotus acknowledged. Fable awakened, he who moves without flame. Scenario cleared by complete, overwhelming mastery. Woa, Lee shouted, clapping his hands in the sky. My teacher is so cool. Look at him go. He twirled and brought up the next screen. Room 13 Minato versus Jiraiya. The star sat untouched. Minato stood quietly with both hands in his pockets, watching it glow. Jiraiya leaned against the wall, injured but not defeated. Neither had moved since the room sealed. Still think he's coming back? Jiraiya asked, half laughing, half mourning. Minato didn't answer. He stared at the star, and for a moment, it reflected something else. A boy, blonde hair, wide eyes, full of fire and questions. The reflection faded. I'm not here to fight you, Minato said. Then why are you here? To make sure someone remembers him. The system buzzed gently. Scenario parameters violated. No combat initiated. Memory recursion detected. Emotional anchor, the one who watched from the gate. Scenario temporarily suspended. Lee scratched his head. They'll come around. Maybe. He flipped a scroll and spun into another chamber. Room 4 Might Guy versus Scenario itself. This one wasn't registered. Not by the system. It wasn't a duel. It was a declaration. The chamber was empty. Guy stood alone in a field of rising lotus petals, his eyes closed, his breathing rhythmic. With every breath, the petals rose higher. The floor was gone. The walls. Gone. Even the star had dissolved. He wasn't waiting for the scenario to test him. He was testing it. And the scenario was losing. Scenario error, no valid conflict structure detected. Entity Might Guy has rewritten martial law within his chamber. Fable manifest, the world without flame, the king without mercy. Clearance granted through self-rewriting narrative override. Lee blinked. Okay. Wow, that's a first. That's a really good one. He opened the final sealed screen. The one he'd been waiting for. Naruto Uzumaki, but no battle played out. Naruto was not even in the scenario. There was only silence. Naruto's body. Just a shell now. Sat cross-legged in the center of a pristine room. His eyes were blank. His body unmoving. A star pulsed quietly in front of him, but there was no recognition. No motion. Lee floated closer to the screen, face solemn now. He's still not back. The system flickered. Shell integrity stable. Narrative self-awareness missing. Compensation on hold. Lee whispered, come back soon, boss. Then a final screen lit up. Not part of any room. Not part of the scenario. A crater. Sealed, untouched since the Bastion's founding. Inside, a nameless fable was humming louder than before. Lee frowned. That thing again. He turned to the system, eyes narrowed. Mark it. Reinforce the seal. If that wakes up early, we're all dead. Then he clapped his hands. All right, everyone. All chambers confirmed. Scenario 55 preliminary proof of worthiness complete. Participants will now be elevated to Nebula qualification status. Eligible for Gate of Olympus. The stars opened, and the Pantheon Wars began. A smaller figure hovered beside him. Metal Lee, barely the size of a system cursor, his coat far too large for his body. His hair was tied in an energetic bun, and he buzzed with overly loud energy like a freshly promoted trainee observer. Metal Lee looked up at his senior. Senior observer Lee. Does that mean boss can't get rewards? Lee didn't answer. Metal Lee tilted his head. If his body's working. Why can't he move? Lee didn't answer that either. Because he didn't know. The boy sitting in that chamber had once shattered a sky. Had once rewritten the language of gods. Had once walked into the maw of 1,000 young and rewrote their womb from the inside out. Now he couldn't even blink. Lee exhaled. Come back soon, boss. Then another alert blinked onto the screen. Not tied to any participant room. Not linked to the current scenario. A crater. Sealed. Ancient. System alert forbidden seal 0, Sigma breached. Location Bastion Core, depth 9. Object? Nameless fable. Lee's brows knit together. Again. He muttered. He turned his attention to the side monitor, where a pulsing wave of untagged narrative light shimmered beneath the bastion like a heartbeat. The fable was humming louder than before. An artifact of uncertain origin buried long before even the first scenarios. Metal Lee gulped. Should we poke it? Absolutely not, Lee snapped. But what if it's... If it wakes up before the narrative net is fully deployed, everyone's dead. That's not exaggeration. That's math. Metal Lee blinked, then began typing frantically in the system panel. Mark is volatile. Reinforce with Omoikane grade containment chains. Cross-link to outer boundary detection grid. Lee rubbed his forehead and muttered to himself. Why does it always get louder when he's like this? Then, with a clap of his hands and the shake of his sleeves, he turned back to the scenario screen. All right, everyone. Let's get ready to welcome the team. Outside, the party had just exited the transmission gate. The vast expanse of the interstellar city, the gate of Olympus, loomed before them. Countless floating islands rotated slowly in the astral void, linked by radiant filaments of divine narrative light. Spires of light bent into themselves like spiraling feathers. Towers dripped with fables. The scenario had no sky, only the abyss of stars, shifting like breath. The group emerged with varying degrees of grace. Sasuke stood tall, wind ghosting around him like the breath before a storm. Hinata landed lightly, script thread coiling around her wrists. She scanned the horizon with narrowed eyes. Neji, Lee, Tintin, and Minato stood together, battle-ready. Guy stood apart, arms crossed, muscles humming. And behind them, like a ripple of golden cloth. Wha? A ball of chaotic energy crashed into Rock Lee's leg. Senior Lee, squeaked Metal Lee, clinging to his mentor's ankle like a grappling hook with pigtails. I logged the portal jump. I filed the observer footnote entry form A77B. Rock Lee gently peeled Metal Lee off his calf. You have improved your latching speed, young observer. Thank you, sir. Metal Lee saluted midair, spinning once. Tintin blinked. He's smaller than a frog scroll. Sasuke glanced once. Why is he here? I'm the apprentice scenario handler. Metal Lee said proudly. Supervisor Lee assigned me to guide you into the interstellar grid. Naruto, of course, wasn't among them. Guy's eyes searched the group again, his posture tightening. Where is he? Hinata looked away. He didn't come. Lee's voice echoed over the transmission screen above the plaza. Correction, he's not absent. He's asleep. Guy furrowed his brows. Asleep? Metaphorically. He's a shell. No awareness. No movement. Not dead. But not participating. Neji asked, then is he safe? Lee didn't answer that. Instead, he turned to the others. You've arrived at the threshold of Scenario 55 Gate of Olympus. This is where worlds collide. All participating pantheons are required to register their scenario faction alignment by the end of the cycle. Metal Lee projected a glowing set of instructions. You have 348 hours to complete the preliminary subscenario. That's the Gigantomachy alignment test. Only those who pass the mini-scenario will be eligible for the full scenario path. Tintin raised an eyebrow. We're picking sides already? Yes, said Sasuke. And we're not siding with Olympus. Guy stepped forward. His coat rippled, slightly burned at the edges. The air around him shimmered. Not from divine grace. From martial heat. The sixth gate. The gate of view. Glowed faintly beneath his ribs. Let them come. Lee winced. Let's not antagonize an entire pantheon on arrival. Metal Lee perked up. Too late. Scenario-wide announcement incoming. A divine sigil bloomed in the sky. Announcement declaration of duel receive. Challenger faction the Bastion. Recipient Olympus. Host deity Zeus. Lightning cracked through the sky above. A throne of storm clouds turned its gaze. Lee facebombed behind the glass. Minato sighed. That's war, then. No, said Sasuke, his Mangekyo flickering once. That's justice. And behind them, beneath the Bastion's core, the forgotten fable hummed louder. Not yet awake, but dreaming. The portal let out a hollow chime as it dimmed. Access denied. Olympus is currently sealed to visitors. Next available entry 6 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes. Sasuke stared hard at the fading spiral of energy, his eyes dimming. Hinata's breath caught beside him. That's it, she whispered. We wait a week. No one answered. The silence stretched across the plaza, broken only by the rustle of banners and the low murmur of surrounding incarnations haggling for entry to other divine domains. Lee Gilyoung glanced toward the group, then at the status screen in his hands. It won't open until the Gigantomachy. What's that? Neji asked. The next scenario. Tintin scrolled rapidly through the local registry feeds. Olympus is hosting it. They're calling it a world-shaping myth event. Winners get nectar. High grade. At the word nectar, everyone's eyes turned toward Sasuke. Because it wasn't just a prize to them. They needed it. For Naruto, he sat in a sealed room beneath the Bastion's foundation. Blank-eyed. Motionless. His body was alive. The system confirmed as much. But the self that should have responded, the self that should have blinked, or shifted, or sighed, was simply gone. Narrative self-awareness missing. Compensation on hold. Sasuke had stood there once, gripping Naruto's shoulder like he could will him back. That had been days ago. Now, even he didn't try to speak. Just outside the screen, Metal Lee hovered quietly beside Rock Lee's broader frame. The miniature observer clutched a notebook in his hands, his expression unreadable. Still not back, Metal Lee whispered. Rock Lee nodded. Not yet. A fable pulsed beneath the earth. Sealed, humming with threads not yet born. They didn't speak of it. Back at the plaza, the group stood beneath the glowing schedule board of the Starscript system. A commercial blared through the air. Scenario 55 Gigantomachy, the reclamation of Olympus. Witness the rebirth of divine order. Images flashed in the sky above Poseidon raising his trident. Titanic silhouettes rising from Tartarus. Armies of demigods falling into formation. 3 winners will receive grade. A nectar brewed from the roots of ambrosia. Entry fee 100,000 coins. Survival rate unlisted. Perfect, Sasuke muttered. That nectar. Hinata's voice was thin, almost hopeful. You think it'll work? It's the last thing the script mentioned before Naruto collapsed, Neji said. That a divine fluid might anchor the soul. Tintin frowned. And if it doesn't? We try something else, Sasuke said. But first, we win. A deep chuckle rolled from the edge of the square. Not bad, said the voice. You've got spirit. They turned. Atop a wide marble basin shaped like a lion's jaw, a man sat with one foot in the fountain and a massive spear resting on his shoulder. His skin was weathered like stone, and his hair was pulled back with a rough warrior's knot. Snake-fanged armor coiled up his arm. A warrior god, a divinity, and one that Hinata recognized first. Zhang Fei, she whispered. The spear glinted. Been a long time since I heard my name like that, the man said with a grin. Konoha crew, huh? You've got the look. Li stepped forward into projection mode. Confirmed. Mid-great divinity Zhang Fei of the Changban charge. Affiliation unaligned. Danger level high. Don't worry, Zhang Fei said, watching Sasuke. I don't bite unless paid. Sasuke didn't look away. You guarding Olympus? Not me. Poseidon's handling that mess. He spat into the fountain. Zeus is playing dead until the final scenario. We need inside, Hinata said, stepping forward. We need that nectar. Zhang Fei raised a brow. The blonde one. The wind boy? That your shell sitting under the bastion? Everyone stiffened. Zhang Fei chuckled. Word travels fast here. You want nectar? Earn it. Win the scenario. Then that's what we'll do, Sasuke said. The divinity grinned. You've got fight in you. I like it. The party gathered near the scheduler terminal. Rock Lee flickered into view above them, arms crossed. You have 6 days, he said solemnly. Use them. We'll need relics, Tintin said. We're undergeared. Hinata nodded. Then we split up. Sasuke reached into his cloak and tossed Hinata a purse of coins. Auction district. Take the kids. Find anything rated for divine tier resistance or soul retention. Got it. Neji, Tintin. Go with her. Rock Lee pinged approval on the system. Route confirmed Sector 17, Celestial Auction Chambers. As they dispersed, Sasuke turned and made eye contact with Guy. The martial king stood like a silent mountain behind them, his hair tied back, green vest hanging heavier now. His body thrummed with restrained chakra. No longer raging like his youth, but deeper, denser. The others need relics, Sasuke said. But I need a fight. Guy smiled. There's a trial sector nearby, unlocked by nectar ambitions. I'll take you. Metal Lee waved as they disappeared into the mist. Elsewhere, the bastion rumbled faintly. Naruto still didn't move. A single message pulsed above his head, waiting for the nectar. Beneath him, the crater where the nameless fable was buried shuddered slightly. Lee glanced down from the observer window and said nothing, because somewhere in the silence, the fable was humming again. The pale stars of Olympus hadn't shifted. Access denied. Olympus is sealed by Poseidon in Zeus' absence. Next entry window 6 days, 23 hours, 58 minutes. The party lingered near the marble gate, watching pilgrims and warbands gather. Tintin's voice cracked first. What now? Neji said nothing. His eyes locked on the shimmering barrier, already calculating entry trajectories, breach potentials, warpath probabilities. Hinata stood at the edge, her fingers curled around a worn page torn from Naruto's old journal. He hadn't moved in days. Not even once. 1,000 miles below, beneath the bastion. Naruto Saturday eyes empty. Limbs still. A heartbeat without a mind. Shell detected hollow vessel. No soul signature. Compensation withheld pending core reboot. The team had believed he was injured. Believed he'd retreated into his mind again, like after Scenario 40. But there was no mind left to reach. The soul was gone. Only a vessel remained. Hinata didn't know that. All she knew was that something inside her cracked when she looked at him. Like the world had forgotten what he was. They were told nectar could restore broken essences. So they believed it. Because they had to. Because the alternative was too much to bear. She stood alone on the temple threshold of Poseidon's plaza, staring into the locked star portal. That's when the system flickered. A notification she'd never seen before. An unnamed observer sends you a message, her breath caught. The tale of duality rests with kindred. He will need it. The message was unsigned. No icon. No sponsor seal. It didn't even come through her usual divine feed. Yet something about it felt familiar. A voice that belonged to grief. To memory. Naruto? No, not him. But not far off either. Wyman, the voice was hers. Hinata didn't know what the tale of duality was. But she felt it. The pull of it. Like a tether threading through her chest, guiding her away from the path the others walked. She stepped back, fingers trembling. The next moment, the system trembled too. Incoming hostile entity, unknown alignment. Sasuke's eyes snapped to hers. What did you do? I didn't. Then the sky cracked. A rippling black figure stepped through the realm's thin boundary, dragging with it the scent of cinders and old ash. Its presence alone corroded the platform tiles. It had no face, only a mask. Pale and slashed. And around its waist hung strings of warped, hollow skulls. One of them had whiskers. Sasuke reached for his blade. Stop, Hinata said, not sure why she said it. The thing looked at her. Soul Hunt Directive echoed incarnations of abandoned ascension. It was here because of Naruto. It was here to erase them. Because he was wrong. The body lived, but the soul was gone. And in the eyes of the star script, such a thing was abominable. That was when another ripple appeared. Calm and cold. A bleat rang out. The flames stopped mid-motion. A woman stepped through the mist, shrouded in pale fur. Her limbs bent like limbs shouldn't. Her eyes were split, black and gold. A shadow of a lamb followed behind her, weeping silently. A wolf stood beside it, grinning. Divinity detected the kindred. The twin aspects of death. The soul hunter turned, hesitated. Kindred's voice echoed in every direction. This one belongs to me. The hunter didn't retreat. Not yet. A flurry of blades formed around its fingers. Leave, the wolf said. Or be torn. Silence. Then. Snap. The thing vanished, consumed in Kindred's breath. Sasuke didn't lower his sword. You saved us. No, Kindred said. I came for the girl. Hinata stepped forward. The lamb looked up at her. The wolf sniffed her wrists. You carry the scent of someone who once fed the stars. Hinata blinked. What? The wolf looked at her kindly. You are his memory. The lamb wept. Kindred reached into the mist and pulled free a sealed book bound in rope. It shimmered with twin seals. One gold, one black. The tale of duality. The one you love will need this. I don't understand. You will. Then Kindred vanished. The book hovered for a moment, then fell into Hinata's hands. It was cold to the touch. Hours later, the team regrouped. Sasuke eyed the book in her hands, but didn't press. Instead, they made their way to the Kindred's realm. No longer Eden. Now it was the domain of dying stars. And there, at the gates, Hinata looked back once. The shell of Naruto still sat, unmoving, beneath the bastion. He would not wake. But perhaps, someday, he would remember. Because when the tale of duality opens, so too might the fable of who he was. Hinata didn't understand the message. She still didn't understand it. Even after Kindred left her with the tale of duality, she held the sealed book as though it were breathing. It felt cold, like something sacred and wrong all at once. She didn't even recognize the name Kindred when she heard it. Not fully. It wasn't one of the Shinto gods. Not one of the demon lords either. And yet, it had authority. A voice that didn't demand her obedience. It invited her. He will need it. Those words echoed again and again. And though she didn't know what it meant, she believed it with the same desperate instinct that had once told her to step between a kunai and Naruto's throat back when they were just Jinin. The others didn't know she was hiding something now, and it hurt, keeping it from them. But she had to, because they still believed they could save him, because they had to believe that, because the truth would shatter them, because the truth was, there was no soul to save. They reached the outskirts of the bastion's portal chamber an hour later. Sasuke, Neji, Tenten, and Guy regrouped near the edge of the portal gates. The others had already begun gathering supplies for the upcoming sub-scenarios. The mission was simple: recover divine nectar to feed to Naruto, believing it could awaken him from whatever coma had seized his body. But Hinata already knew the truth. This wasn't Naruto. It was a shell, an echo. When he exuviated, when he shed his form and disappeared from the scenario, he left behind a puppet. An empty body still tied to the star stream's accounting, still showing as alive. The system didn't know he was gone. The world didn't know. Meanwhile, the others were arguing with Poseidon's stewards for entry to Olympus. Access denied. Olympus scenario locked. Begins in 6 days. They had no choice. And so they turned to the only other possibility: Kindred. If the gods of Olympus wouldn't give them nectar, then perhaps death itself would. Kindred. The twin aspects of death were ancient even before the system had names for gods. They resided not in Olympus or Yomi, but in a drifting plane called the domain of dying stars, a realm suspended in the chasm between ends. Most did not survive visits to Kindred. Fewer still were invited. They arrived by invitation. It was Guy who led them. Calm, resolute, no longer the blazing fire of youth, but the martial stillness of experience. In the 6th gate, he was not burning bright, but steady. No longer a man who ran forward blindly. Now, the martial king of the school of the empty lotus. He had broken Kakashi's spine in a public tournament, not out of malice, but because the story required it. And in the new world, that mattered more than strength. Guy didn't say a word when they arrived at the gates. The wolf greeted them. The lamb watched silently from the stars above. Kindred didn't speak at first. They simply opened their realm. And inside, the travelers saw what they thought were stars, only to realize they were dying suns, each containing a soul that could not return. One burned brighter than the others. Naruto's shell, at the center of it all, waiting, still, empty. Dying star analysis: no soul signature detected. Repair protocol incompatible: no consciousness tethered to this form. Star fluid requested. Soma. Veda's authority needed. The voice of Kindred's system rang out through the void like a quiet judge. Why won't it work? Tenten asked, her voice shaking. Kindred turned. The wolf answered. Because you are trying to feed breath to a story that no longer breathes. But he's right there, Neji snapped. His body. His chakra. His name. The name remains, the lamb said softly. But the boy is gone. In the distance, a figure entered the void. At first they thought it was a god. No. It was Surya, the supreme god of light from the Vedas. And he came with a single offering. Soma. In his hand glowed a crystal vial. Liquid starlight flickered within it like flames sealed in glass. I can give you this, he said to Hinata. It might bring him back. Hinata didn't speak. She just watched the boy, the one who had once burned brighter than all of them. Surya's smile was not kind. I only asked for one thing. He turned to Sasuke. Help me ruin Olympus. The others looked at one another. Sasuke clenched his fist. Why? Because Zeus made a deal. He promised a weapon forged from the bodies of 20 worlds, then refused payment. Olympus must fall. And if we say no? Tintin asked. You'll find me across from you at the next scenario. And if we say yes? Then the nectar is yours. Surya's words hung in the void. It was Hinata who spoke next. We'll take it. Everyone turned to her. I know he won't wake up, she said softly. But we have to try. Surya smiled. The glass was passed. But Hinata never moved to open it. Instead, she turned away, still clutching the tail of duality. In her heart, something deeper stirred. A voice no one else could hear. Tell him when he returns that he chose this. She looked down. The book's cover was cracked, but a single line had appeared: one who dies as two may return as one. She whispered the words to herself. And in the far reaches of the dying stars, one of them blinked. Just once, barely enough to notice. But it blinked. And Hinata knew. This wasn't over. Nocturne. The gates had closed. Above them, banners unfurled across the sky, threaded with fables older than kings, older than gods. Olympus had declared itself. And Sasuke declared back. A sealed duel. A declaration of war. A trial against the 12 thrones themselves. But war didn't begin with swords. War began with stories. They descended into the trial sectors in silence. The interstellar pathways bent around them. Gleaming bridges made of myth script and spatial divinity. A realm held between constellations. At its center, the trial sector for the Gigantomachy alignment test. And within it, a divine seat waited. Empty. Until now. Sasuke arrived. You're late. A voice called out, relaxed and cruel. It echoed off the stone like smoke clinging to old blood. A man sat on the edge of the arena's viewing platform, spear resting against his shoulder, the curve of his armor biting into the air like venom. His body shimmered with godlight, but not celestial. Something older, wilder. Sasuke knew him. He didn't like him. Zhang Fei, Sasuke muttered. The god grinned. That's the second time you've said my name without dying. I should be flattered. Sasuke stepped forward. Trial keeper? Don't worry, Zhang Fei said, dragging his hand through the basin. I'm not your enemy. Not today, anyway. Sasuke didn't lower his guard. He'd seen enough of Olympus tricks. But it wasn't Olympus who answered. The arena shifted. Heat bloomed across the floor. And light. So much light. Cascaded from the sky, like judgment falling without mercy. Then came the third eye. Incoming entity myth-class god. Surya, the scorching authority of the 12 suns. A figure descended. Not by flight. By pressure. He landed like a star collapsing. And suddenly, the entire world tilted. Sasuke reached for Reijinshu on reflex. His chakra flared instinctively, but it was like trying to shout into the void. Then the voice came. You're the one who declared war. Sasuke didn't flinch. I declared justice. Surya stepped forward. The marble cracked under his foot. Call it what you want. Olympus will call it sacrilege. Zhang Fei smirked from the basin. Told you they'd send someone spicy. Why are you here? Sasuke asked. Olympus hasn't opened yet. The scenario has. Surya's third eye gleamed. And I'm not here for Olympus. Sasuke narrowed his eyes. Then what? You want nectar. The silence between them pulsed. Even the script hesitated. You know why? Yes. Surya raised a hand. A single bottle formed in the air, shaped from sunlight and script wire. Nectar grade, ambrosial core of Olympus. It hovered between them. Sasuke didn't move. But you can't have it for free. Sasuke knew. There was always a price. Always a fable. What do you want? Surya smiled, eyes golden and sharp. Burn Olympus. Above, the star script cracked. New sub-scenario formed: divine conspiracy. The seeds of rebellion. Objective: destabilize the 12 thrones. Reward: 1 unit of divine nectar. Potential upgrade: Soma. Sasuke barely blinked. You want Olympus burned from within? No, I want it shaken. You break the thrones, the stories collapse. Why? Because Olympus is a lie. That stopped him. Explain. Surya tilted his head. They used to be gods. Now they're just managers. Curators of rigged myths. They silence those who remember truth. Rewrite those who rebel. He walked forward, bottle of nectar flickering with each step. I've watched this system rot from the inside. I've watched the script warp to protect Olympus from its own destruction. It needs a correction. And you think I'm your sword? Surya grinned. No, I think you're the wound. Far below, Naruto's body still sat unmoving. But the fable buried beneath the bastion stirred. Hinata, still clutching the tail of duality, gasped as the book shimmered. Black and gold seals flickering like breath caught on the edge of awakening. Something had heard that deal. Back at the arena, Sasuke stood still. Wind flicked around him. Static clung to his coat. Fine, he said. But I want two things. Name them. 1 nectar. Enough to wake him. Granted. 2 when Olympus falls. When the 12 thrones scatter. I get to decide what rises in their place. Serious eye narrowed. The third eye pulsed. Then he nodded. Deal. Contract formed the Ashen Pact. Witness Zhang Fei. Binding narrative seal applied. Sub-scenario divine conspiracy accepted. Surya turned. The bottle floated into Sasuke's hand. Don't drink it now. It only works if he still wants to live. Sasuke didn't respond. He knew. Surya vanished in a flare of script fire. Only Zhang Fei remained, whistling. Gods making contracts with humans. World really is ending, huh? Sasuke turned. We'll see. Back at the domain of dying stars, Hinata looked up. The tail of duality split open. And a pulse of golden black script shot toward Naruto's body. The fable beneath him sang. And though no one heard it, the shell's fingers twitched. The auction house was one of the few safe zones that retained bureaucratic sanctity, even amid the divine chaos of Scenario 55. In this particular pocket of peace, wealth and narrative weight were king. Metal Lee stood above the crowd on a raised obsidian platform, a red velvet cloak over one shoulder, and his oversized auctioneer's mallet slung across his back. He was smiling far too much for someone who'd been stuck with overtime observer duty. Welcome, competitors and star-fattened guests. This is the 8,611th Constellation Auction, and this time we're proud to say, yes, truly yes. Olympus has agreed to play nice. The audience chuckled. Gods and nobles clustered around each other in skyboxes and hovering thrones. Some incarnations whispered prayers before bidding, others sat silent, ready to gut rivals through coin alone. At the back of the room, Hinata Senju adjusted her hood. She felt it again. That faint pull. Naruto's husk remained in the bastion, comatose, motionless, forgotten, but her soul kept remembering something the world refused to name. Beside her, Sasuke was eyeing the crowd with thinly veiled irritation. His hair was longer now, tied into a loose tail. The storm behind his eyes never settled, not even when he was smiling. You're tense, Hinata whispered. I'm surrounded by gods who think war is a party. I'd be more worried if I wasn't. A shadow passed overhead as the screen ignited. Metal Lee held up the first item. A fine start. The Fong of Yamata Naroki's drowned vessel, retrieved from the sealed waters beneath the Pillar of Regret. Starting bid 200,000 coins. The auction began in earnest. Gods of minor domains began clashing through their champions. Celestial nobles from realms like the Kingdom of Masks, the Grave of Words, and even the distant House of Enoch were flinging coins like bullets. Hinata didn't bid. Not yet. She was watching someone else. Far above, a golden-clad prophet sat under the aegis of a radiant halo. Her veil shimmered with oracular script. The rings on her fingers spun independently of her hands. The prophet of Olympus. To most, she was known simply as Selene, last scion of the line of Helios. But to Hinata, she was a paradox. Because Selene had once spoken Naruto's name before anyone remembered it. A ripple passed through the auction house as a new item descended on a velvet platform, suspended by floating chains. Old to new toad, grade star relic. This, Metal Lee said, is one hell of a frog. Laughter from the Olympus box. Even the constellation of theater and wretched irony, lounging nearby, gave an amused twitch of his mask. Starting bid, 500,000 coins. I'll offer 600,000, Selene said at once. A light flashed above her head. And I'll offer 700,000, said Sasuke, lazily. The crowd stilled. Selene's golden eyes narrowed. Uchiha. Sasuke tilted his head and smirked. Sun Princess. Oh my gods, Hinata whispered. You're enjoying this. Sasuke shrugged. I could use a new frog. Selene made a motion, and one of her divine retainers leaned in. More coins flowed like blood through the system. 800,000, Selene said calmly. 9, Sasuke replied before Lee even repeated it. Hinata turned. Wait, are we actually buying this? No, Sasuke said. We're baiting. From across the room, another voice chimed in. 2 million. The crowd gasped. Every eye turned toward the speaker. Her hood was pushed back, revealing wild, dark hair streaked with silver threads and bright inked eyes. Wyman dressed in the traditional robes of the Dawn Script Order, she radiated authority older than the scenario itself. Who is that? Someone muttered. She's the one who wrote the tale of the utterly gutsy shinobi, someone else whispered. The book that knows the ending. Selene blinked. Her halo pulsed. Wyman gave a casual wave. Do go on, prophet. Or do you already know the ending to this scene? Selene said nothing. She turned back to her scribe. Future sight failed again. It was happening more often. The world was shifting under her feet. Old prophecies broke like glass. Still, pride was not so easily lost. 3 million coins, Selene said. This item belongs to Olympus. Sold. Metal Lee declared, far too cheerfully. To the golden goddess upstairs with the sun complex. Then he paused. Oh, wait. Right, I forgot. One last thing. The contributor of this item. He squinted at the manifest, flipping a few pages. A silence fell. Isn't anyone in this room? Celine stood up. Impossible. No, really. It says right here, Lee grinned. Submitted via proxy from an unregistered star. Origin point unknown. Direct sponsor listed as. He trailed off. The paper he held in his hands was burning. Not with fire. With fable nullification. Words were being eaten off the parchment. Language devoured by darkness. Then, the doors opened. The air in the auction house turned hollow. Cold. The lights dimmed though no one touched the controls. And from that impossible absence stepped a figure clad in white, long coat trailing behind him like unraveling shadow. His face was hidden beneath a smooth, black mask marked only by 3 faint whisker lines. His hair ran like golden dusk, falling past his shoulders in wild waves. 9 tails of living shadow writhed behind him. No name accompanied him. No constellation dared announce him. But every divine being in the chamber felt it. Nocturne had entered the room. Metal Lee swallowed hard. Contributor confirmed. Bidder may step forward to receive payment. The figure said nothing. He walked past Hinata. She didn't move. Couldn't. Her entire soul screamed. Sasuke's breath caught in his throat. Lightning coiled around his fingertips. But the figure kept walking. When he reached the stage, he raised one gloved hand and said, in a voice like wind under a closed grave, 3 million coins. Then silence again. Celine's body shook. That's impossible. That's. You saw a future that never came, Wyman said softly. Because you forgot to write that thing in. She didn't finish the sentence. Because at that moment, the figure turned his masked face toward her, and even she faltered. No fable worked here. No story functioned. And still, Metal Lee cleared his throat and said, payment confirmed. Item transferred. The auction house, for the first time since its founding, ended in absolute silence. No applause. No closing remarks. Just the slow sound of footsteps receding, leaving shadow in their wake. The star pulsed like a wound in time. Between them, it floated. Unchosen, unbound. Neither had reached for it. Not yet. But its light tugged at them all the same, stretching their fables like shadow under flame. Sasuke's voice was the first to break the silence. Who is she? Hinata didn't look up right away. Her gaze was on the ripples the starlight left on the floor. It cast no warmth. Only reflection. You called her YMN, Sasuke continued. But she looked like you. Hinata inhaled slowly, then let out a breath that twisted the space around her. The air softened. Not with weakness. Only memory. She is me, Hinata said. Sasuke narrowed his eyes. I've seen clones. Duplicates. This wasn't a jutsu. That thing held something deeper. It's not a clone, she confirmed. It's a split. She turned to face him then. Her hair drifted slightly, as if the gravity in the chamber hadn't fully decided what direction to pull her in. You remember during the Battle of the Forgotten Spring? When I fought the avatar of Yagura? Sasuke said nothing, but he remembered. The battlefield had nearly come apart under her. Roots had torn the sky open. Her spiral had glowed. And she had screamed Naruto's name in a voice that didn't belong to this world. I awakened something then, she said. A fable mutation. The one who holds memory, she said it softly. But even the system trembled at its echo. Passive trait reconfirmed the one who holds memory. Authority level localized recreation. Status boundary violator. Hinata reached toward her chest, and for a moment, Sasuke thought he saw her hand pass through herself. Like she was reaching into a well of invisible branches. After that moment, she continued, I started to remember all the versions of me that had died. Every loop, every rewrite, even the ones where I was born into different clans. Or never born at all. Sasuke frowned. That sounds like what? No. No, she said sharply. Forgets. I remember. He paused. All of them. She nodded. I don't dream anymore. I just relive. The light above them dimmed slightly, as if the star too was listening. And one day, Hinata whispered, I wondered what would happen if I took all of that grief, all of those deaths, all of those memories, and separated them from myself. You try to get rid of them? I try to give them form. She looked back at him now, eyes shining with something that wasn't chakra. I thought it would look more like me. I thought it would carry the part of me that still believed in hope. But her voice broke slightly. Instead, she became YMN. Sasuke let the silence settle between them. Then, in the book, I didn't write it. Hinata, I didn't, she insisted. She did. I didn't even know what was in it until it appeared on my bed one night, wrapped in ribbon, with my handwriting. But you split her from yourself. Hinata nodded once, and she still remembered Naruto. A pause. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Sasuke looked away, jaw clenched. How did the split work? I used a memory recursion channel and pulled from the well of grief. That was the key. I poured everything into it. Pain, memory, love, shame, failure, faith. The system couldn't catalog it because it wasn't a power. It was loss. So you made a person out of the part of yourself that wouldn't let go of him. I thought she'd be like a guardian, Hinata said, or a guide. But the first time I saw her, her throat tightened. She was already writing. Sasuke's brows furrowed. Writing? Hinata nodded. A story. About a boy who kept dying, and a girl who couldn't forget. The star between them pulsed once. Then stopped. Frozen in indecision. Or waiting. YMN was never meant to be part of the system, Hinata continued. She doesn't appear in any alignment logs. She doesn't register under my ID. The observer said she's a rogue phenomenon. That means she's real, Sasuke finished. She's more than real. She's permanent. Another pause. Sasuke tilted his head. And the name? What name? YMN, he said. It stands for something. Hinata hesitated. Then, in a voice quieter than the stars flicker, you must not. You must not what? She met his eyes. Remember him. The system flinched. Hidden parameter unsealed the echo of refusal. Trigger detected memory divergence, inactive Pantheon member. Protective lock engaged narrative consistency at risk. Hinata closed her eyes. I made her so I'd never forget. Even if the world erased him. Even if the gods rewrote everything. She's the part of me that won't stop telling the story. Sasuke stepped back slightly. She looks like you. She looks like who I was before I gave up. And now? Hinata didn't smile. I'm who's left. Celine's face twisted. Not in horror, but in denial. This is fraud, she said, stepping down from her celestial dais. You used my pride as bait. You lured me into a coin war, into a future I never saw. I refused to pay for that thing. A tremor passed through the auction house. That thing, she repeated, pointing toward the retreating shadow, is not a contributor. It is a blight, a blasphemy. The moment she said it, the lights dimmed again. Not by force, but by fear. No one corrected her. No one stood beside her. No one dared. Even the constellations of Olympus, radiant behind golden veils, said nothing. Their eyes avoided the masked figure walking away from the stage. Not because they didn't recognize him, but because they didn't want to. Because none of them could name what he was. Because to name something was to bind it. And that thing could not be bound. Metal Lee tried to play mediator, his voice cracking beneath the pressure. Technically. Celine-sama, as the highest bidder, and with the bid accepted. Well, you are obligated to. I refuse, Celine spat. Her voice was wild with divinity. I will not let Olympus fund a monster. I withdraw. Withdraw? YMN tilted her head, curious, almost amused. From what? The auction? Or reality? Celine's glare snapped to her. Sasuke, standing not far from Hinata, glanced toward the still silent figure in white, then back to the Sun Priestess. His Sharingan didn't activate, but he watched her the way a blade watches a heartbeat. Celine turned on him. You knew, she snarled. You. Both of you. Knew. You baited me. We didn't force your hand, Sasuke replied, unfazed. Just nudged it. You threw me to that thing. And still you raised your hand. Lightning crackled near her fingertips. The gods in her entourage flinched back. She wasn't just angry. She was unraveling. Her future sight, always reliable, had failed her for the third time in one scenario. Olympus didn't tolerate broken mirrors. And you, she growled, shifting her focus toward the masked figure at the center of it all. You have no right. No name. No place. What are you? The figure did not stop walking. He didn't turn. But the shadows behind him paused, tails curling like ink in water, stretching longer, darker, hungrier. And all the fables in the room went silent. No titles floated above him. No flavor text scrolled. Even the auction UI flickered with static. Hinata didn't speak. Couldn't. Not here. Not now. Sasuke lowered his gaze. Not in submission, but in mourning. Because he remembered the sound of Naruto's laughter. And this wasn't it. This wasn't him. This was the version of him that had been left behind at the end of a dying story. The one who walked past conclusions and found no meaning in applause. A hollow page given form. This was Nocturne. The world without song. Celine's voice cracked. I will not fund that void spawn. I invoke divine objection. Olympus will not pay. The shadows stopped. Ninetales froze mid-sway. The masked head tilted, just slightly, toward her. Metal Lee made a noise. It may have been a cough. Or a cry. Objection. Noted. Celine turned to storm off. But then she noticed the paper. The auction manifest. It was gone. No. Burnt. Not by fire, but absence. The record of the transaction had devoured itself. There was no longer any proof of her bid. No contract. No outcome. The story had eaten itself. She opened her mouth. And tasted static. A system message blinked into view. Error fable access denied. Error story context undefined. You are attempting to speak of a narrative no longer registered. Her lips froze. Her throat locked. She could feel it. Her memory of the auction was slipping. Why you? The figure vanished. Not through a portal. Not through teleportation. But as if the frame he existed in had been cut out of the world and discarded. Only the silence remained. YMN turned to Metal Lee. So, about the frog. Metal Lee stared at her like she'd asked for a drink in a graveyard. But then, surprisingly, he nodded. Transfer complete. Narratively speaking, it never happened. Celine dropped to her knees. Sasuke glanced to Hinata, his voice quiet. Who was that? Hinata didn't answer immediately. She was staring at her hand, the palm where the tale of duality had burned her earlier. The script was gone. But the scar remained. What was that? Akatsuki. And across the silent auction house, a new whisper passed. A rumor. A title. New Outer God Nocturne. The world without song. No one claimed it. No one denied it. And the bidding war of gods ended with silence as its only victor. The silence that followed Nocturne's disappearance wasn't stillness. It was something worse. A kind of static pressure, like the moment before a scream you weren't sure you heard. Selena Kim was still on her knees, the air humming around her like a speaker struggling to play a song that no longer existed. The system had stopped responding to her. Her fable access was denied. The context she had invested in, bent every resource to control, had been devoured. She had lost, not by battle, but by narrative. And someone, had made her play herself. The moment cracked when the auction house's lights finally reset. Metal Lee was speaking, though it took several repetitions for the words to register. Participants of the 8,611th auction, thank you for your patience. A formal scenario resolution has been logged. Coin transfers are being processed now. Selena didn't move. YMN stood to the side with her arms folded, as if she were trying to look casual and blend into the curtains despite being the only person in the auction hall still glowing faintly. Sasuke exhaled once through his nose. He could sense it. Something was coming. Something beyond the tremor in the ground or the silence of the gods. It wasn't from Olympus or Asgard or even the systems above. It was coming from her. Selena rose. And when she spoke, her voice sounded nothing like the girl from the auction prelude. You too. Hinata didn't flinch. Sasuke said nothing. You think this is a joke, don't you? Her lips curled in a breathless laugh, like she had to remind herself how to make the sound. You baited me. You made me waste everything I had. On that thing. We didn't know what he was going to do, Hinata said quietly. He wasn't with us. You weren't bidding on your own item, huh? Selena asked. It just happened to fall into your hands? Just happened to trigger a memory lock? Just happened to drive the narrative off its track while you watched it burn? Sasuke stepped in front of Hinata slightly. We didn't force you to bid. Selena's teeth ground together. Her head tilted toward YMN and you. What are you even? A fake Hinata from another timeline? Technically, I'm a fragment. YMN didn't seem bothered. But I've also been published. Bestseller in a few scattered hells. That didn't help. Selena raised her hand. And the golden light of Olympus gathered above her palm, script forming the authority of narrative fraud. I, Selena Kim, Speaker of House Nemesis, sponsor of judgment. Invoke divine reprisal. The accused are Hinata Senju, Sasuke Uchiha, and the unnamed author avatar. YMN I invoke Clause 73 of the auction code inducing a bid through narrative misrepresentation. Metal Lee's expression fell like a stone. Wait. Hold on, we can talk this through. Invoke it. Selena screamed. Warning. You are calling upon high justice. Do you wish to proceed? Proceeding will place the named parties into temporary divine custody. Do you wish to continue? Selena didn't hesitate. Divine custody initiated. Above the heads of the accused, narrative rings formed. Golden bands spiraling like chains constructed from burned parchment. The system whispered its judgment. Fable seal preliminary custodial lock. Scenario context bound. Movement restricted. Status frozen. Hinata didn't fight it. Sasuke looked at the band around his wrist like it offended him just by existing. And YMN let out a theatrical sigh. Oh well, guess it's one of those arcs. You'll pay for this, Selena muttered, staring not at them, but at the empty air where Nocturne had been. You'll all pay for this. Because it wasn't about the coins. Not really. It was about the fact that she still didn't know what had happened. That a fable had entered the room, erased the record, and left her standing in the ashes of her own self-assurance. That thing. Nocturne. It hadn't just stolen the item. It had rewritten the memory of its own existence. And Selena Kim had nothing left but the fear that she might be next. Take them to Tartarus, she whispered. And the system obeyed. A pillar of dark gold flame erupted beneath the three of them. Hinata, Sasuke, YMN. And in a blink of burned script, they were gone. There was no light in Olympus prison, only metaphors for it. The corridor they arrived in was made of memory stone and oaths. Walls that echoed not with sound, but with broken truths. The divine prison of Olympus was not a place for bodies. It was for narratives. YMN was the first to move, flexing her fingers as if checking whether she could still write. Hinata sat cross-legged on the floor, not resisting, only thinking. And Sasuke? Sasuke was already examining the locks. How long do we have before judgment? He asked. YMN shrugged. Depends how dramatic they want to make it. Sometimes you get a full hearing with jury constellations and tearful backstories. Other times, snap decision, exile to the pit. Sasuke didn't blink. And YMN grinned. I brought a pen. That's not reassuring. I also brought your file. You'd be amazed what the pantheon of Akasha keeps indexed under rebellious Uchiha. Hinata finally spoke. There's something wrong. Both turned to her. She wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the wall. Nocturne shouldn't be awake yet, she whispered. Not fully. And the tale of duality. It shouldn't have responded to him. YMN paled just slightly. That wasn't the plan, Hinata said. Sasuke knelt down beside her. Then what is the plan? Hinata didn't answer immediately. Her eyes traced the lines in the wall. Not stone, but layers of scenario threading. Someone had tried to seal this place not just with power, but with stories too old to remember. I thought we were ahead of the cycle, she finally said. That we had time to prepare. But if he's already moving. Wyman knelt down beside them. Her voice was quieter now. Then we need to find the real him. Not the mask. Not the fable. But the one that still remembers why he started all this. You think there's anything left of him? Sasuke asked. Wyman looked at the scar on Hinata's palm, where the tale of duality had burned through the skin and left no script. If there isn't, she said, then there won't be a story left for us either. Outside the prison walls, the gods were silent. The bidding war had ended, not with victory, but with memory loss. And above them, in a place where fables did not reach and stories feared to tread, the shadow of Nocturne drifted like a severed page, carrying a song that could no longer be sung. There was no door, just a breath. And then she was there, a woman made of dusk and pomegranate seeds, walking barefoot across a prison that devoured gods for fun. Her dress wasn't woven. It was remembered. Each thread hummed with fables that never reached their climax. Stories of wives who waited too long, of springtimes that never returned. Her presence didn't announce itself. It simply unfolded, like the slow blink of grief learning to walk again. Wyman was the first to kneel, not out of fear, out of recognition. Persephone, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The queen of the underworld tilted her head. Do I know you? No, Wyman replied. But I remember you in the stories where you died first. Persephone smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had outlived every metaphor about light and darkness. She stepped forward. The walls did not open. The seals did not unbind. They simply moved out of her way. Authority Persephone, the queen of bloomless graves, has bypassed system locks. Narrative seal suspended. Custodial status inverted. You are no longer prisoners. You are guests. Sasuke stood, tense. You work with Olympus? Persephone's eyes glimmered like withered leaves catching final sunlight. No, I tend Olympus. Like one tends to a garden that's grown too arrogant. Hinata remained seated. Then why are you helping us? The goddess crouched beside her. Because my husband is tired. And because I am not. Her voice lowered. Because I remember what it was like to be locked in a room while gods debated the worth of your suffering. Wyman met her gaze. You're going to open the path, aren't you? Persephone didn't answer. She opened it. The floor beneath them unraveled. Not into chaos, but into a spiral staircase paved in promises no god ever intended to keep. The scent of wet stone and salt-blooded iron drifted upward. A cavern older than Olympus opened its throat. The sealed floor, where the giants dreamed, where the titans rotted, where stories were buried alive so Olympus could pretend their victories were never stolen. Persephone descended first, as if this was always meant to happen. I can't free them, she said, but I can show you where they were caged. Hinata followed. Wyman behind her. Sasuke last. His lightning sparking in quiet arcs that spoke of a mind refusing to rest. They walked in silence, until the walls began to whisper, not with words, with names. Antaeus, Briareus, Phoebe, Ceus, Hyperion, each name etched into rusted myth steel, each syllable sealed with chains made from failed victories and falsified endings. Persephone brushed one cell as they passed. This one, she said, was the first to ask me why I stayed married to a man who only remembered spring when I wasn't there. She looked ahead. They don't hate you, she said to no one in particular. They hate Olympus. They hate the story that forgot what they were before being villains. Hinata's voice was soft. Can they still fight? Persephone's smile faded. They don't need to. They just need to remember. A final door loomed, built not from metal, but from authorship. The last seal, a fable forged by the 12 thrones themselves. An eternal injunction that this story must never reawaken. Persephone reached for it, then paused, and looked at Hinata. You carry it, she said. Don't you? Hinata nodded. The tale of duality shimmered beneath her fingertips. Ink still fresh, script still humming. Persephone stepped back. This is your rebellion now, she whispered. I'm only the gardener. Hinata touched the seal, and the world remembered. The chain screamed, not from breaking, from relief. Because fables, even broken ones, want to be told again. The seal fell away. The cell opened, and inside, a giant raised his head. Not monstrous, not grotesque, just forgotten. He looked up with eyes that had not blinked in centuries. Who called me? He rasped. Hinata stepped forward, and said we didn't come to free you. We came to ask. The air turned thick. The other cells began to stir, and from deep below, something older than Olympus shifted. Not in rage, but in recognition. Narrative synchronization detected. Scenario 55, Gate of Olympus subsegment activated. True Gigantomachia, fragment 1 The Waking of the Bound. Participants Hinata Senju, Sasuke Uchiha. Wyman, there was no keyhole. Only a pulse, like breath caught between sentences. Waiting for someone to ask the right question. The gate to the 77th floor of Tartarus stood taller than Olympus itself, a seamless obsidian slab etched with sigils no god remembered how to pronounce. Carved into its surface were faces. Human, giant, godlike. Pressed flat as if the door itself had swallowed their identities and used them for decoration. Sasuke stared at it, arms crossed. You said this wasn't Olympus prison. It isn't, Persephone murmured. It's what Olympus locked away when they realized they couldn't kill it. Wyman approached the door. And this is where you want us to go? Persephone didn't answer. She simply stepped aside. Hinata drew in a breath and reached for the tail of duality. The moment her fingers brushed its cover, the door pulsed once, then opened. The void beyond was not dark. It was heavy. Each step into that space wasn't a movement. It was a confession. The air carried weight not of gravity, but of forgotten declarations, whispered rebellions, and oaths that had been sealed before language knew how to rhyme. In the center of the chamber, a figure sat chained to a throne that was not a throne. A man, a giant. His skin was burnt bronze, cracked with veins of dormant magma. His hair spilled down his back like a collapsed river of silver. 9 spears pierced his chest, each one inscribed with the names of the 12 thrones. And yet he lived, and yet he waited. And when he spoke, the sound made Tartarus blink. Who dares walk into my sentence? Sasuke stepped forward. Sasuke Uchiha, I am not here to beg. I am here to break your chains. The giant didn't laugh. He listened. Hinata followed. You were written as monsters. We're here to give you a rewrite. Still, no laughter. Wyman raised her pen. And this time, the giant smiled. You brought a scribe, he said. Good. Olympus forgot that before the first war was fought, there was a treaty. He shifted slightly. The chains groaned. You seek gigantomachia, he said, but you know nothing of what it costs. Hinata stepped forward. We're not here to play war. We're here to end the story that started one. The giant turned his head toward her. One of his eyes was gone, gouged out by Athena herself during the first war. The other still shimmered like a star caught behind a storm cloud. Then give me your name, he said. Hinata did not hesitate. Hina, of the house that no longer has one. Scribe of the memoryless spring. The giant paused, then nodded. And you? He said, turning to Sasuke. Sasuke's voice was quiet. Sasuke Uchiha. No house. No god. No history I didn't burn. And finally, he looked at Wyman. I know what you are. Wyman didn't answer. You're the one who kept his name. The one the system forgot. Still, she said nothing. The giant smiled again. I like you least of all. The air changed. The gate slammed shut behind them. Persephone was gone. And Tartarus. Tartarus moved. The walls shifted. The sigils pulsed. And the giant's chains snapped. But he didn't stand. He sank down into the ground, his body melting like a sentence folding itself into a new paragraph. And above them, the ceiling opened, not with light, but with memory. A voice echoed from above. Not divine, not structured, just tired. If you want our help, then earn it. The room split open, and behind the fragments, the Giganis waited. Some stood like statues. Others burned with locked status. One reached forward and cracked the air just by breathing. Hinata clutched her book. Sasuke drew no sword. Wyman whispered to the paper in her hand, let them speak. And the giants spoke. Scenario fragment activated gigantomachia, the second rebellion. Objective convince the bound. Condition you must name the story they have been denied. Warning failure will lead to total erasure from all divine archives. The test begins. Participants Hinata Senju. Sasuke Uchiha. Wyman. Objective name the story the giants have been denied. The words hovered like divine script suspended in judgment. Around them, Tartarus held its breath. Above them, the walls folded inward. Not collapsing, but listening. Before them, the Cinemanes watched with 300 eyes and no expression. And beneath it all, narrative gravity surged. Hinata took a step forward. The tail of duality trembled in her grip, its ribbon of forgotten ink spiraling like a wound that never healed. She could feel the weight of every failed rebellion, every mock battle Olympus had staged in their name. Her voice caught, but didn't falter. We thought it was gigantomachia, she said, but we were wrong. Sasuke exhaled, static peeling off his skin like shed armor. He had faced gods, killed avatars, rewritten destinies with lightning sharper than history. But this moment made his breath pause. These wars, they weren't gigantomachia. They were dress rehearsals, ritualized humiliation. Wyman didn't speak. Not yet. She only let her pen bleed across the fabric of her sleeve, where names that had never existed began to take form. The giant said nothing, but the pressure in the room intensified. It wasn't rage. It was hope trying not to rise. Hinata raised the tail of duality, and a page, half torn, half inked, lifted itself open like an injured bird. In the story Olympus tells, she said, you are monsters. In the story we are writing. She glanced back at Sasuke and Wyman. They nodded. You are witnesses. The room cracked. Not physically, narratively, because the system didn't know how to categorize that. The prompt has changed. The story is shifting. Scenario condition modified. Say the name of your story. Sasuke took the lead. He stepped forward, eyes glowing with the silver-blue storm of his rebellion. He didn't shout. He declared, our story is not gigantomachia. It's the war that was never meant to end. Wyman's pen twitched. She tapped her chest, right above where the signature of a forgotten child still lingered beneath layers of fable script. It's called the rewrite that shouldn't be possible. Hinata whispered the final line, voice soft, steady. It's the memory of the world that refused to forget you. A silence. Then, the chains did not break. They unraveled. As if shamed. As if tired of themselves. The Titans did not rise. They stood. Briareus, he of 100 arms, tilted his head, expression unreadable. That story. It's not one we've heard before. Codis murmured. That story doesn't promise victory. Gyges, tired and eternal, closed his eyes. But it doesn't demand our deaths either, for the first time in 10,000 years. The three Titans looked at each other, not as characters, but as men, and Briareus said, then speak it, write it, and we will follow. Above Tartarus, something screamed. A narrative axis shifted. Olympus felt it first. 12 divine thrones flickered in unison. The story of the gods had been touched. Scenario 55 fragment completed the rejected rewrite. Giants participation flag lifted. Condition met. 3 Titans have acknowledged the new story. The true Gigantomachia is awakening. There is a place not charted on any constellation map. A city where stories go to decay. Where unclaimed fables pile like snow against empty windows. Where not even the system sends broadcast. They call it the world that never was. And inside its black cathedral of abandoned context, something was watching. Nocturne sat in a chair that didn't exist. The window behind him looked out on a city of broken myths. Street lamps flickered with script that had been rejected, and clock towers spun backward, desperate to rewind the fate of dead protagonists. Around him, the Akatsuki gathered, not in formation, in entropy. Conan floated to the side, paper wings folded like unopened letters. Her eyes traced the shifting skyline of fable storms crashing against memory towers. They spoke it, she said. Which story? Asked Kimimaro, perched on the ceiling like a discarded idea. The one that shouldn't exist, Conan replied. The one that doesn't belong to Olympus. Or to us. Guren twirled a fragment of crystal between her fingers. So it's real, then. The rewrite. Yugo said nothing. His body trembled faintly. Unstable. Not from rage. From resonance. Even Kisame leaned against the wall, greatsword humming in its wrappings. If it's waking the giants, then the storm's almost here. Nocturne did not move, but his mask pulsed faintly. Whisker marks twitching like ink resisting its page. He did not look out the window. He did not speak. But the room listened to him anyway. Kabuto tapped a projection orb, showing a ghostly map of Scenario 55. Golden script burned and twisted along the edges, and Tartarus glowed like a rupture in divine narrative fabric. They broke containment, Kabuto muttered. Not with power. With naming. Obito stood in a corner, arms crossed. His voice was tired. Dry? Of course they did. Names are the last thing Olympus doesn't own. Silence. Then, Conan again. He's watching it now, isn't he? Her eyes flicked toward Nocturne. Toward the motionless, throne-shaped idea. Nocturne did not answer. But the room dimmed anyway. Madara spoke last. His voice like torn paper that refused to burn. They think they've escaped the story. They think by naming it something new, it becomes their own. He stepped forward. Looked down at the spiraling black map. They're wrong. Conan frowned. You think this ends the same? No, Madara said, smiling with no joy. I think it finally ends. Outside the window, a ripple spread. A tremor felt not in the bones, but in the closing paragraph of a book that hasn't been written yet. And Nocturne finally stirred. He raised a single hand. 9 shadowy tails flickered into view behind him. Faint, quiet, uncurled. And he whispered, the epilogue has weight. Let's harvest it. Nocturne's domain, the world that never was, activated. Narrative parasitism engaged. Targeted Scenario 55, Gate of Olympus. Epilogue consumption pending. Far below, where Tartarus still echoed with names long denied. The gods had no idea who had just taken a seat. In the highest chamber of Olympus, the thrones flickered. 12 pillars of light, burning with rewritten legends and sharpened lies, began to shake. A crack ran through the Hall of Triumphs, where constellations were meant to gather and vote on narrative structure. None dared speak, because something ancient had moved, and it had not moved with permission. Hermes arrived first, his sandals flickering with patch teleportation and haste coding, robes still dripping with narrative delay. They've risen, he whispered. The true ones. Not the actors. Not the bound performers. Poseidon clenched the shaft of his trident. They were supposed to be broken. Apollo didn't even look up from his shattered lyre. Everything breaks when you rehearse it too many times. Ares smirked. Let them come. We've killed them before. We'll kill them again. Athena didn't speak. She was listening. Not to the gods. To the tremor. That distant chant echoing from the underworld like a drumbeat of inevitability. Zeus finally spoke, his voice layered in script-laced thunder. There are only 4 of them. Then who, Athena said slowly, is the 5th? Above the constellation map, the scenario tree trembled. One branch had been blacked out, redacted from divine sight. A void. A place where names were supposed to be. Instead, there was only redacted, status forgotten, category half-giant, origin outside Tartarus, and then an operator of Olympus burst into the chamber, cloak of flame, with failing authority. My lords, one of the giants in this year's Gigantomachia is unregistered. What do you mean unregistered? Hades appeared from the shadow just behind the pillar of broken truths, voice quiet. The operator stammered. He wasn't summoned. He wasn't pulled from Tartarus. He walked in on his own. He just arrived. Zeus's eyes narrowed. What is his name? The operator trembled. He doesn't have one. A scenario tremor has been detected. The fifth giant is already in play. Classification unknown. Alignment unknown. Origin no record. Warning divine territory integrity compromised. In Olympus' scrying pool, the Gigantomachia field shimmered into view. A massive arena stitched from warped myths and false victories. 4 giants stood shackled at the center, already fitted with suppression cuffs made of divine script. But at the far edge of the scenario stage, someone was walking. No chains, no title, only shadow. A massive figure, humanoid in silhouette, but blurred at the edges like memory wrapped in fog. A blade of molten silence slung across his back. The scenario engine didn't recognize him, but the world did. He raised his hand once, and lightning fell upward. Poseidon stood. Who is that? No one answered, until Athena whispered. The one that never broke the wall. Below Olympus, where Tartarus still trembled. Hinata flinched. Waimin dropped her pen. Sasuke's eyes widened in a storm of silver and ash. Nocturne, he said. A new scenario thread has spawned within Gigantomachia. Origin the world that never was. Narrative alignment outer god, a world without song. Epilogue harvest mode engaged. The story had already begun. The fifth giant was already here. And he wasn't waiting for permission. He was here to end it. The screen shimmered. The stage groaned. A pale light poured from the Colosseum dome as the first giant was revealed. But what came through wasn't a beast. It wasn't a titan. It wasn't anything they were prepared for. It was just a silhouette. A man. No. Something shaped like a man. He walked slowly, like gravity was heavier around him. Like each step didn't land, but tore loose. The system tried to speak, but the script jammed. Introduct. Analyzing any. Error designation not recognized. The announcer stuttered. Achilles, who had been yawning moments before, straightened. What is this? Nocturne stood at the center of Olympus Coliseum. Not as a participant, not as prey, but as the story they weren't supposed to tell. His mask, etched with whisker-like lines, reflected nothing. His 9 tails of darkness spread gently across the floor like shadows cast by memory. Behind him, no chains, no cuffs, no support staff. He had not been summoned. He had arrived. Some incarnations laughed awkwardly. Is this part of the event? Maybe it's a hidden quest? But their sponsor messages had gone silent. The system was lagging. The amusement park's stage mechanisms had stalled. Even the banners in the sky flickered. Then came the announcement. Not from Olympus. Not from any deity. But from the starstream itself. A new fable is being written. The fifth giant has appeared. Name unknown. Alias Nocturne. The world without song. Status epilogue collector. Outer god fragment. Narrative anomaly. Nocturne raised his head. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it erased the silence. This isn't your story anymore. This is the ending. Achilles reacted first. He leapt from the edge of the platform, ash spear humming with inherited glory. A god-blooded weapon of the highest myth grade, designed to pierce even giants from the old wars. He aimed straight for Nocturne's heart. The crowd leaned forward. Hinata didn't move. She was already watching something else. Nocturne didn't dodge. He simply walked forward. The spear struck, and the world rejected it. The moment the weapon touched his chest, the ash spear disintegrated. Not shattered. Unwritten. Like it had never existed in the first place. Achilles screamed as his arm fractured from the feedback. A golden system notification tried to stabilize the collapse. But the system's own formatting warped in Nocturne's presence. Narrative authority null field active. Fables cannot manifest in proximity to Nocturne. All myth-type artifacts are currently being overwritten. System error presence suppresses structured storytelling. Nocturne turned slightly. His voice was quiet. You tried to kill a fable. He stepped forward. I devour them. Achilles fell to one knee, wheezing. Nocturne reached for him with one shadowed hand. And Achilles was gone. Not killed. Just absent. As if he had never been part of the stage. As if his myth had been revoked. The announcer's script sputtered violently. Please refrain from unauthorized scenario alteration. Please refrain from unauthorized scena. Please refrain from unauthorizzed scenario. Nocturne looked up. Through the screen. Through Olympus. Through the heavens themselves. And said, let your gods come. Let them remember who built their throne. The crowd screamed. The scenario ruptured. And above them, the theme park finally shattered. Scenario 60. Gigantomachia has entered critical phase. The fifth giant has declared dominion. Myth subversion achieved. Beginning war without glory. The moment Achilles disappeared, Olympus broke. The crowd screamed. The arena cracked. The banners that once floated in divine wind. Golden words etched in praise of false victory. Burned into silence. The fable announcing the first game never finished its script. It didn't need to. The fifth giant had declared war. Across the system, every fable shuddered. The constellations watching from divine realms scrambled to disconnect. But it was too late. A field had descended, not of silence, but of anti-story. Narrative authority engaged world without song. All local myth constructs are now within suppression field. Scenario priority overridden by outer code nocturne. All fable alignment scores equals null. Narrative context erased. 9 tails of pure shadow whipped through the air like knives through parchment. They weren't tails. They were erasures. Each one an execution sentence made manifest. One coiled through the air and lanced into the chest of an incarnate hero shouting a name. He was gone before the last syllable left his lips. No blood, no scream, just a notification flickering behind empty eyes. Yours oblivion. Your epilogue has been devoured. Hinata watched from the fragmented edge of the platform, not with fear, but with recognition. That shape, that silence. That was him, or whatever was left of him now. 2 constellations, emboldened by pride and divine contracts, leapt from the sky. Ares and Apollo, blades drawn, radiating ancient war and sun-choked radiance. Their voices boomed together. Olympus will not be defied by a shadow. Nocturne raised one hand. The tails didn't move. Instead, he spoke. The sun does not rise in a world without song. And reality gave way. Ares landed first, flame blazing across his sword. He swung. The moment his blade connected with Nocturne's mask, it reversed. The sword shattered backwards. Time itself folded inward around the swing. Apollo fired a bolt of radiant fire from the sky, a sun-wrapped arrow meant to cleanse entire mythic planes. Nocturne raised a finger. The light bent and turned inward. Apollo's scream was cut short as the solar fable consumed him whole. System alert. The constellation Apollo, bearer of flame, has reached narrative 0. Yours oblivion. Your epilogue has been consumed. Ares tried to run. He made it 5 steps. A single tail caught his ankle. He didn't fall. He unraveled, thread by thread, muscle by muscle, until all that remained was a half-finished poem. And even that was taken. The constellation Ares, blade of ruin, has been devoured. No credits remain. No tomb shall be written. There will be no legend. There will be no memory. Screams. Thousands of them. From participants, gods, and constellations still bound to Olympus. They tried to escape. They tried to disconnect. But the field held them. The tails moved like judgment. One through the chest of a Valkyrie sponsor. One through a name-etched relic. One through the sky itself. The world without song was expanding. Swords bounced off it. Spells flickered out inside it. Eulogies backfired, igniting their casters. Even the system began to stutter. The script that defined Scenario 60 began to flicker. Then warp. Then tear. Initiating emergency rollback. Error. The scenario cannot be reverted. The scenario is no longer owned by Olympus. The current owner is Nocturne. Hinata's voice finally broke through the trembling silence. Stop. He's not going to stop. Sasuke stood beside her, fists clenched, jaw trembling. He could barely breathe beneath the weight of what he was witnessing. It wasn't the massacre. It was what was missing. There were no screams, no names. Just one phrase, written again and again in flickering, burned-out fable script. Yours oblivion. Yours oblivion. Yours. A great god stepped forward. Hera, queen of Olympus, wrapped in 10,000 veils of divine law, her eyes crowned in silver. She shouted not with authority, but with fear. You do not belong here. Nocturne walked past the corpses of her sons. Walked past the shattered lion of Nemea, now mute in death. Walked through the field of thunder her staff called forth. And placed one hand against her face. No malice. No sorrow. Just end. The great fable queen of the sky has concluded. This epilogue has no reader. It has been devoured. Hera ceased to exist. Above the battlefield, the sky fell silent. Not with clouds, but with blank pages. Dozens. Hundreds. A rain of unfinished stories. They fell like ash. The pages that had once bound this scenario, burned by a song that could no longer be sung. Nocturne stood among the ruins of Olympus' pride. 9 tails spiraled behind him, now longer, darker, broader. Wide enough to blot out the throne hall. His mask turned slightly, toward the gods still watching, toward the system still twitching, toward the next page. And he whispered, "You gave me a loop. I gave it back without a melody." Epilogue harvest 31.02% complete. Singularity state increasing. The world without song is evolving. The battlefield lay in ruin. There were no victory flags, no divine commentary, only the long, crawling silence of unfinished eulogies. Nocturne stood at the epicenter. His 9 tails still fanned out behind him, each one coiled through space like a god's last regret. Fragments of myth floated around him, failing to take shape. Hera was gone. Achilles, gone. Ares, Apollo, countless unnamed constellations. Devoured. The stage meant for celebration now looked like a library burned down before anyone could read it. Epilogue harvest 32.79% complete. Narrative field saturation 87.3%. Outer code Nocturne remains unchallenged. The system screamed in the background, but no longer in resistance. Only in recording. It had become an archivist of extinction. Nocturne turned again. There were more voices, more witnesses, more endings. He could feel them. Incarnations still hiding behind vendor stalls. Constellations shivering inside fractured relics. False demigods trembling behind decorative pavilions with hero training banners half torn in the wind. His mask turned. A whisper left his lips, voiceless yet binding. One more. He stepped forward, but froze. Not because something blocked his path, but because something pulled on him, like a forgotten string of melody from a song he once sang. Something alive, something he had not devoured. His gaze shifted, and found her, Hinata. She wasn't hiding. She stood in the open, blood in her eyes from witnessing gods collapse like puppets without strings. But her feet didn't move. Her arms trembled, not from fear, but recognition. In her hand, a book, not one she read, but one that wrote her. The Tale of Duality. Nocturne stared at it, his head tilted, and for the first time since his arrival, he flinched. Warning. Interference detected. Tale detected. The Tale of Duality. Sealed memory. Alignment memory-bound type restorative narrative construct. His leftmost tail began to flicker, then curl inward. Something moved behind his mask. His hand twitched. He took another step toward her. The wind began to howl. Not from his presence, but from hers. Hinata said nothing. She didn't raise the book. She didn't call his name. She simply held it. And that was enough. Nocturne staggered. Like the page she carried was pressing into his core. Like the name inside, it was cutting through the void of his identity. His fingertips flexed open. A hairline fracture etched across the bottom of his mask, too fine for the eye, but not for the system. A memory surfaced, fragile and echoing, of a little boy standing alone in the dark, his voice trembling as he whispered a single plea: please don't forget me. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even hope. It was the raw, aching fear of vanishing, of existing so quietly that the world might move on without ever knowing he was there. System warning: behavioral drift detected. Fragmented identity attempting reconstruction. Host structure rejection 83.9%. Instability rising. Nocturne stumbled forward. One knee hit the ground. The moment his shadow touched the base of the Tale of Duality, his own fable screamed. Your is oblivion. Your is not compatible. Your is remembered. Stop. The word escaped like broken glass through his teeth. The mask cracked slightly along the jaw. His head pounded. Echoes surged in reverse. Hands held in sunlit afternoons. Laughter in the rain. A ramen stand. And a girl who once believed in him when he didn't. The smell of paper. The color blue. Her voice when she said you matter. He screamed. And the scream did not echo. Because there was no world to carry it. World without song. Collision event detected. Foreign narrative attempting to root. Tale of Duality incompatible with host layer. Shadow tales have begun to destabilize. One of the tales collapsed. Then another. Two more folded in on themselves, sparking trails of inverted script like rejected verses. He turned. And for the first time since arriving, Nocturne ran. Not out of fear, but out of self-preservation. Because to stay here, to stay in her presence, meant remembering everything he was before he lost the right to sing. The system followed him in silence. One tail remained wrapped around a corpse, and he had to rip it free. It screamed. So did he. The sound didn't carry. The silence did. Hinata stepped forward as the last echo of his presence folded inward. 9 shadows vanished. Only ink remained on the ground, and the open page in her hands trembled. She looked down at the line that had rewritten itself, and the boy who forgot who he was paused, not because he was stopped, but because he remembered someone who hadn't. The 5th giant has withdrawn. Scenario 55 Gigantomachia is not over. World without song receding. Epilogue harvest frozen at 36.92%, far above the ruins. The gods who had not yet died stared in horror, and the audience of constellations who had dared to watch from their palaces of safety knew that the true war was just beginning. The shadow of Nocturne had vanished, but the silence he left behind, that didn't fade. It deepened. The air grew still, too still, like the breath of the world had caught in its throat. And then, it cracked. System alert: Tartarus is destabilizing. Structural integrity 62%, 41%, 19%. Warning: Class Omega break imminent. Across the bones of Olympus battlefield, the ground began to fracture. Not from above, but below. The storybook heavens trembled. And far beneath it, in the sealed black gut of Tartarus, something moved. First a hand, then a breath, then an eye, blind and glowing with prophecy, and then a roar, not of fury, but of remembrance. The narrative chains of Tartarus have begun to snap. The bounds of story-forged confinement are eroding. Myth-class titans and giants have begun to awaken. One crack became 1,000. A prison became a graveyard, and the graveyard became a gate. From the deepest, lowest pit of forgotten myth, a scream of narrative reversal split the underworld. And in that moment, the old names began to stir: Ceus, Crius, Hyperion, Iapetus, the ones Olympus buried beneath fabricated endings, the ones they said would never rise again. And from the field above, Hinata felt it first. The shaking under her feet was an aftershock. It was marching. A message blazed in the sky. Gigantomachia, sub-event liberation of the bound ones has begun. The seal of Tartarus has been breached. The story, Giants Liberator, has invoked a chain collapse. The lost epics have re-entered the narrative. A column of red dust erupted at the edge of the battlefield. Followed by another, then another, like volcanoes vomiting names. Something colossal tore its way into the visible world. It wasn't a titan. It wasn't a god. It was the idea of resistance itself. The Centimanes, arms like forests, faces like mountains, stepped free of their millennia of silence, and the ground broke to let them rise. One of them knelt, not to the gods, but to the girl who had held the book. Briareus' voice carried like a landslide, "We are no longer prisoners." In Olympus, constellations began to scream. Ares, his body still broken, tried to stand. Apollo reached for his bow. Hermes vanished mid-sentence. And across the star stream, observers scrambled for purchase. Because what was coming now wasn't just a war. It was the return of stories buried alive. Scenario alert: the stage of Gigantomachia has expanded. Participants 12 gods of Olympus, giants of the forgotten war, outer class entities. Hostile anomaly previously known as Nocturne has withdrawn. Secondary authority has passed to the Giants Liberator. The battlefield shifted. The sky turned a violent shade of red. And from the cracks of Tartarus, a city began to emerge. Not a city of stone, but a city of myth, buried beneath 1,000 false histories. And at its heart a throne made of unspoken regrets. A keeper of the underworld stepped through the final light of the underworld's open ceiling, just as the gate behind him collapsed. Not closed, collapsed. The last thing he heard as he emerged was Briareus' voice, "You gave us story. Now we will return fate." He landed on the battlefield, breath heaving, heart racing, knowing. This was no longer the scenario he had read. This was no longer the war they thought they had prepared for. This was the real Gigantomachia, and it had finally begun. The ceiling of Tartarus was opening. Warning cracks have occurred across 5 anchor points of Tartarus. Dimensional anchors destabilized. External exit gate forming. A low tremor rippled through the underworld. But tremor was the wrong word. It wasn't movement. It was recognition. The prison of gods was not being broken. It was being allowed to open. And that was worse. Above the chained giants, above the frost-furred crypts and sulfur-lit catwalks of Tartarus, a circular tear in the ceiling began to shimmer. Not cut. Not exploded. Shimmered, like a door being peeled open from the narrative's blind spot. At its center stood Persephone. She raised one hand. Her eyes glowed not with wrath, but with plausible deniability. "This is a one-time concession," she said quietly, her voice sharp as a bell toll in fog. "Take it before Olympus notices." Sasuke stepped forward, lightning arcing off his knuckles, voice low. "Why are you helping us?" The queen of the underworld gave no answer, but a message echoed in the air. "The judges of the underworld have taken notice of your rebellion. The queen has permitted a corridor. She accepts no blame." And then, boom, one of the lower gates exploded outward. 100 arms burst from the flames, dragging with them the hulking mass of a creature half-titan, half-nightmare. Briareus, the giant of the 100 limbs, crawled into the air like a demon escaping a drowning dream. He laughed. "You summoned Tartarus Liberator. What did you offer her?" Hinata narrowed her eyes. "Just a few truths." "Threats," Sasuke muttered. 30 minutes earlier, Wyman had written a single line in the Tale of Duality and slipped it beneath Persephone's throne. "If you do not open the gate, Olympus will know the underworld has already chosen its side." And that was enough. Briareus grinned with 29 of his faces. She always wanted an excuse. War with Olympus? Finally fashionable again. The cracked ceiling widened. Reality peeled open like glass melting over flame. Beyond it, the sky of the surface, and more than that, the battlefield. A message flared. "You have accepted the giant's oath. You have acquired the myth-tier story Giants Liberator." A rebellion long silenced begins anew. Wyman whispered, almost reverently, "We made it." Sasuke wasn't so sure. Behind them, the gates of Tartarus opened fully. And from every sealed corridor, every forgotten trench and locked myth-relic prison, came giants. Some were twisted. Some were whole. All of them remembered what Olympus did. And they were no longer interested in forgiveness. Sub-scenario triggered the March of the 100. Entering Phase 1 of Gigantomachia, Briareus towered above them now, his limbs fusing and fanning outward like wings made of fists. "I will lead the charge. You 3. He pointed to Sasuke, Hinata, and Wyman. "You're our witnesses." "What does that mean?" Sasuke asked. Briareus only grinned wider. "It means history will write down what you choose to save." And with that, he leapt. The sky of the overworld split. Lightning ran through the veins of Olympus like blood rejecting a body. On the plains before the Silver Bastion, where Olympus' artificial gate stood, thunder exploded. The first of the giants breached the surface. They didn't roar. They didn't declare their war. They simply walked. And the world remembered what it meant to fear something older than gods. Sasuke, Hinata, and Wyman emerged behind them, climbing the wind-split staircase that Persephone had opened. Light blinded them for a moment. True sunlight for the first time in 3 arcs. But the warmth didn't last. Because Olympus was already watching, and they were not pleased. A ripple of thunder bent the air. System alert, divine forces in opposition. Scenario 55, Gigantomachia. Main battle phase engaged. Selection trials bypassed. Olympus has declared hostile acquisition. Hinata's hand went to her heart. The tail of duality had fused back into her body, whispering names too old to pronounce. Wyman held her breath. And Sasuke? Sasuke reached into the air, and it answered. Lightning met his palm like a pet returning home. And he whispered, if this is the end of the gods, then let them scream. Behind him, a giant raised its axe and brought it down on the silver bastion's wall. The age of Olympus was ending, and the war of unwritten titans had just begun. The silver bastion's wall cracked, not from force, from disbelief. The axe of the first giant split the bastion like prophecy splitting scripture. Slowly at first, and then all at once. The sound wasn't metal breaking. It was authority surrendering. Barrier of Olympus integrity 97%, 82%, 59%. Divine shields buckled. Wards screamed like living things. The bastion's outer edge flared with golden light. Then dimmed. 1,000 divine incarnations rose from the citadel below, wings unfurling, weapons drawn. Some bore spears wreathed in starlight. Others, hammers made from celestial ore. They were not heroes. They were enforcers. The curators of Olympus. And they had no idea who they were about to fight. Sasuke moved first. His body blurred forward in a streak of white and violet, Reijinchu activating across every nerve in his frame. His cloak billowed behind him. Black with silver trim, marked not with Uchiha crest, but with lightning seals. He did not summon a storm. He was the storm. 3 Olympian archons descended toward him, shouting names of false justice, gods of punishment. Sasuke didn't answer. He moved. Once. One flash of movement. One flick of his fingers. The sky split. Raijin, variant distant judgment. A bolt of condensed wrath tore down from the heavens like a verdict being carried out. One archon dissolved midair. The second turned to ash. The third dropped their staff and fled, only to be struck from behind by a falling titan's fist. Below them, Olympus roared. Hinata landed like falling scripture. Her eyes blazed with Azura's threefold breath. Wind circled her like a funeral hymn given wings. Where she walked, the battlefield bent. Not from gravity, from memory. The tale of duality has begun to resonate. Her presence is being recorded by the system. A nymph in golden armor lunged at her. Hinata extended 2 fingers. And the air cracked. A single strike. Gentle, clean. The nymph's body crumpled like paper. Not dead. Forgotten. The wind carried her name away. Behind her, 2 titans fought side by side. Both formerly imprisoned. One had lost his tongue to Zeus, the other his eyes to Apollo. But now they laughed. Because someone remembered them. Because someone said no, and above them all. Wyman floated. Pages of the tale unspooled from her sleeves like ribbons of rewritten fate. She was not fighting. Not directly. She was writing. And her words became law. The gods will bleed. The mountain will fall. The first to scream will be the loudest. Let Olympus remember what it feels like to beg. Her hands trembled. Not with fear, but narrative weight. Because every word she wrote here could not be taken back. And then, divine transmission Poseidon of Olympus, a massive trident tore the clouds apart. From the sea, he rose. Poseidon, not as myth described him, as fear described him, wreathed in storms, shaped by all the nightmares sailors had ever dreamed. His eyes were black coral. His veins carried salt and prophecy. He spoke with the voice of earthquakes. So, he said, the rats have breached heaven. Sasuke stood atop a half-destroyed pillar, lightning hissing at his feet. And the gods still talked too much. Poseidon raised his hand. And the sea itself rose. A tidal wave curved like a serpent, fangs of coral and leviathan bone lining its edge. Hinata stepped forward. Her eyes narrowed. A whisper passed between her and the wind. Let it break. As the wave descended, Hinata struck once. Just once. The wave stopped. Then turned sideways. Then shattered. Backward. Time stuttered. Poseidon recoiled. A hidden fable has begun to take shape. The girl who drowned the sea. Wyman smiled. Keep writing, she muttered. Make them remember this story. From above, Briareus howled laughter through 30 mouths. Do you see it, gods of Olympus? He bellowed. Do you see what the mortals bring? They don't come with prayers. They come with corrections. From the eastern flank of the bastion, more titans breached. Typhon, his snake limbs shrieking in 1,000 tongues. Enceladus, who burned every syllable he spoke. And Gaia's own proxy, a woman with no eyes and a blade made of roots. They charged, and Olympus answered. The mountain's core lit gold. Heroes rained from the clouds. Divine music roared. But their war hymns could not hide the truth. Olympus was bleeding. And in the center of it all, Sasuke's eyes gleamed. Not red, but violet gold. Not Sharingan. Something older. Something he would not name yet. Because this time, it was not about fate. It was about choice. The Covenant has confirmed the emergence of a new gigantomachia. The reconstruction of lost myths has begun. Stage transformation has exceeded expected parameters, somewhere far above the chaos. Beyond Tartarus, beyond Olympus, beyond the war-torn sky. A screen flickered open, not to the gods, to the audience, to the ones watching. Inside the Heavenly Bureau of Broadcast Observation, the high-ranking observer, known only as Lee, tilted his head. The feed was blurry at first. Giants screaming, gods falling, and Sasuke cutting fate with lightning. But then it crystallized. Blood, fire, betrayal. Perfect signal. This is no longer a reenactment, Lee said quietly. He turned to his subordinate, a junior observer whose horns were still half-formed and blinking with static. Do we have commentary clearance? Not officially, the junior whispered, but they'll want a voice to narrate it once the votes finish. The Divine Bureau's still debating whether this counts as a true myth. Then they're late. Lee stood from his viewing throne, shrugged off the kimono that marked him as a retired observer, and poured himself a fresh cup of memory tea. Brewed from the dreams of failed constellations. On the screen, Wyman had begun rewriting narrative law mid-battle. Her ink bled into prophecy. The camera angle panned toward her, then deliberately cut away. Already censoring her, Lee murmured. Another screen opened beside the first. On it, Poseidon's trident tore through a titan's chest. Beside it, Hinata smiled at a wall of wind that wasn't supposed to obey her. Beneath them, Sasuke stood amidst corpses. Half divine, half mortal. His eyes not yet named, but seen. Lee clicked his tongue. You never gave him a good sponsor, he muttered to the system. So he sponsored himself. And still, it wasn't enough. Because now the gods were mobilizing. Far from the battlefield, inside the Temple of 12. Hidden above Mount Othries. The remaining gods gathered. They were not bodies. They were weapons. Symbols. Abstracts. A trident spoke first. The lightning throne has not answered our summons. And Dionysus is missing. Poseidon is engaged. Athena is watching. And yet, Tartarus has opened. A pair of mirrored scales turned in the air, suspended in silver equilibrium. The giants have not acted alone. A myth ritual was enacted. Briareus is free. Worse. He was witnessed. There was silence. Then, a sun, blazing with the heat of a dying supernova, pulsed with fury. They turned our punishment into a spectacle. They want to rewrite Gigantomachia. 1,000 data windows opened around them, showing the faces of rebellious players. Hinata, Sasuke, YMN, the fallen Achilles, the dying divine infrastructure of the Bastion. This was supposed to be their lesson. Now it's their stage. From the edge of the room, a winged sandal hovered into the center. Its data trails were already calculating something beyond comprehension. We must deploy the story weapon and appoint a commander. We will not be mocked. Votes passed silently. Some gods abstained. Some, like Artemis and Hestia, simply faded from view. Others, Ares, Apollo, Hephaestus, voted yes. In the end, motion passed. 5-2. The weapon will be released. Outside, the sea boiled. A weapon forged from the bones of forgotten titans rose in the distance. A story engine, powered not by chakra or divine power, but by the accumulated pain of 1,000 failed wars. And then, a voice spoke. I will go. The symbol that moved forward was not just divine. It was N-class. They wore no face, only a mirrored helm, etched with the names of every story that had been erased from Olympus records. Their designation. The erasure that walks. A pause fell over the gods. Even the sun dimmed. Approved. And so the weapon was sent. Back on the battlefield, Sasuke tilted his head. Something changed. He didn't hear it. He felt it. Like a story he hadn't read being written in real time. About him, Hinata's expression shifted. YMN's quill paused. And in the sky, the system trembled. Warning story weapon deployed. System acknowledgement presence of N-class incarnation confirmed. Recommended action survive. Recommended action survive. But Sasuke didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, violet gold eyes narrowing as the world itself seemed to slow around him. Wind pulled tight across the battlefield. The thunder stopped. Even YMN's ink froze midair. Because the N-class incarnation had arrived. And everyone. Gods, mortals, titans, even the giants that remembered nothing but hate. Felt it. It did not walk. It replaced space. It did not emit pressure. It negated causality. One moment, there was a trench carved by the axe blade of a fallen titan. The next, it was gone. Replaced by something draped in robes that did not move, a helm reflecting no light, and a silence so absolute even fables forgot how to speak. The system cannot render this entity's introduction. Initiating narrative override. The scenario trembled. And in that stillness, someone laughed. Not a god. Not a giant. A man with a spear too large for the screen to fully frame. His beard caught the ash in the air like it was glory. You are a splendid constellation. Do you think you can contend with Olympus? The laughter boomed from behind the lines of hesitant incarnations. Those who had stood in the middle, uncertain if rebellion was worth the myth. Sasuke turned. So did Hinata. Even YMN, midward. There, standing like a general at the edge of a forgotten battlefield, was a man Sasuke had only read about in hidden scrolls once discarded by the Fire Temple. Bushy beard, unyielding smile, eyes like calligraphy ink, wild and alive. The giant spear hit the ground. I am the protector of Changban, the man roared, but today, I march with titans. Silence cracked, then broke. YMN stared at him, and in her ink, words began to scribe themselves without her permission, one who could have been a hero of Olympus, but chose to fall into history instead. Sasuke smirked. Zhang Fei, you may call me that. He walked through the rain of fire like it wasn't even there. On his back, a golden fleece split down the middle. In one hand, a fake hydra's head, still dripping sap and divine mimicry. In the other, a peeled apple with bite marks from 100 mythic cheats. He tossed it all into the dirt. I'm tired of their toys, Zhang Fei said. Let's write something real. Sasuke turned to the hesitating incarnations behind him, those trembling between Olympus and annihilation. You heard him, Sasuke said. Then, softer, as he turned to YMN, rewrite the field. Give them a choice. YMN didn't nod. She didn't have to. The tail of duality flared open midair, and system prompts rained down like divine ash. Hidden scenario myth subversion has affected the main scenario. Main scenario 55 Gigantomachia. The war to end fables. Type main clear condition, choose your allegiance. Olympus or the giants. Cut the neck of the enemy leader and declare the beginning of a new myth. Bonus condition, rewrite the interpretation of a pre-existing myth. Failure, partial collapse of the Gigantomachia fable. Reward, a new giant story. You are now recognized as leader of the myth subversion frontline. Your actions may permanently alter the pantheon table. A green arrow lit above Sasuke's head, and another above Hinata, and another. Above YMN, the incarnations stepped back. One by one, system messages began flashing over them. You are being asked to choose. Side Olympus, side giants. Warning, choosing the giants will place you in direct opposition to several active gods. Reward level uncapped. Sasuke pointed toward the sky where the N-class incarnation still waited. Its presence distorted the code of heaven. I won't kneel to that. Then, louder, we are not players. We are not pawns. We are not parts of Olympus retold fables. He raised his blade, and the lightning followed. We are the rewrite. A ripple moved through the battlefield like a fault line splitting open in narrative logic itself. System alert, multiple incarnations have switched allegiance. Warning, anomalous subfaction, myth subversion frontline has exceeded expected growth. Olympus Command Corps has initiated crisis override. From the collapsing walls of the Silver Bastion to the ghost-lit ships behind them, the battlefield began to shift. Entire story zones bled into one another. Ancient coastlines became mythic mountains, trial arenas overlapped with underworld spires, and floating system windows screamed to resolve spatial conflicts they were never coded to handle. And in the eye of that narrative storm, a swirling black portal opened in the sky. It did not roar. It invited. The constellation Queen of the Drowned Spring is watching. Hinata's eyes flicked upward. Something's coming. No, Wyman whispered. Someone. The portal shimmered like a pool of ink stirred by tremors in the multiverse. There was no shape, only shadow. Only a summoning circle stalling in real time. Hey, Grasshopper. The voice was unmistakable. Arrogant. Unfiltered. Alive. Memorize the chant right this time, would you? I've only got 10 minutes left on my system clock. Sasuke blinked. It was coming from the portal. Also. Giants kinda trampled my runes. So can you stall the guy with the lion blanket? Hinata raised her eyes toward the sky as if asking the gods for a refund on all recent developments. And then the battlefield lurched. Because across the blood-soaked hills, above a wall of twisted pillars and divine-grade corpses, someone had finally stepped forward to answer Sasuke's declaration. A figure radiating with tenfold narrative pressure. Bronze skin glowing like Olympian gold. A club taller than most buildings strapped across his back, and around his feet. Ashes that used to be gods. The constellation Scion of the 12 Trials has activated his true status. Warning, leader class authority detected. Sasuke looked up slowly. Heracles. And the sky screamed. Stories began activating without pause. Not 1, not 3, but 12. The fable Lion Slayer who could not die has begun. The fable He who carried the heavens has begun. The fable Labors of Olympus has begun. The fable. Yeah, we get it, Sasuke muttered, cracking his neck. You've got a dozen quest completions. Here's mine. The storm around his body snapped inward. Myth subversion, the lightning that refused the gods. Hazangan. The eye that breaks what remains. Is activating. A bolt shot from his sword, missed Heracles entirely. And instead hit the scenario framework behind him. The sky glitched. For a single second, Heracles' aura flickered. And Sasuke charged. The battlefield paused. Heracles, the gilded war engine of Olympus, took a single step forward. The ground caved. 12 labors. 12 stories. 12 layers of probability stacked like divine armor around his skin. The story man who wrestled the sky has begun. The story, He Who Tore Atlas from the Stars, has begun. Myths spiraled around him like solar flares. Lightning kissed his heels. Even the giants stepped back. And across from him, Sasuke exhaled. Lightning did not crackle. It inverted. Hazangan activated, fracturing the logic of the battlefield like a broken pane of cause. Let it end. The eye without a chain glowed dimly in Sasuke's socket. No swirling tomo, no spinning sigils. Just jagged violet gold fractures through a black scara, a gaze that had seen what no god should. The myth weapon hadn't arrived yet. The spear that tore through Olympians. The one he had stolen. Not physically, but narratively. Yamin turned toward him, writing with her hands, her sleeves dripping ink into the sky. The spear once wielded by Olympus' golden warhound was a lie. But if a lie is told long enough, can a liar steal it back? Above them, the covenant that engraves history flickered. The constellation queen of the hollow refrain is watching. The spear of Heracles has lost its story ownership, transferring authority. You may now wield the myth weapon, the first broken truth. Sasuke didn't look back. His hand extended, and the weapon arrived, not with noise, but with a kind of grim, merciful silence. The spear appeared in his grip, barbed, heavier than it should be, burdened with stories it never finished telling. Heracles paused mid-charge. He recognized it. Of course he did, because once, before Olympus had chosen him, he had thrown it, too. The two moved. No audience. Only impact. The first clash was not seen. It was remembered. Heracles' club met the broken truth mid-swing. Sparks didn't fly. They hesitated. The story breaker of holy chains has begun. Hazangan flared. The battlefield cracked. Yamin's voice reached Sasuke through the system. You can't beat him with force. I know, Sasuke murmured. The second strike came. This time, Sasuke didn't block. He leaned into the strike. Let the club crash into his ribs. And in that moment, placed the tip of the spear into Heracles' side. A fable activated. Once, a war god feared the boy who refused his fate. Once, the war god was pierced where he was proud. And for once, he bled. The spear dug in. Heracles roared, status surging, but the momentum faltered. The club shook. And in that stillness, Sasuke whispered, "You're not a god. You're a story." Heracles lunged. Sasuke threw the broken truth into the sky and vanished. Reijinchu flared behind him as he appeared above the club, blade drawn, lightning laced with story, the eye without a chain burning. Let this fable fail. He fell like thunder. Blade met neck. And Heracles fell. You have pierced the Olympian narrative construct. Story weapon Heracles has been dismantled. The star relic club of the false task has been acquired. Warning, a god is descending. Sasuke stood over Heracles' fallen frame, breath shallow, ribs fractured from the earlier strike. But his hand was steady. The broken truth flickered in his grip. A false spear, stolen back from liars. A myth he had rewritten with his own hand. The battlefield didn't erupt in cheers. It froze. Even the giants didn't know how to process what they were seeing. Olympus had never fallen in their stories. Not once. Not like this. And yet, warning, counterbalance required. System conflict detected. Probability vacuum present. The system was panicking, trying to rewrite itself around Sasuke's decision. Deploying divine recompense in 3, 2. The countdown stopped. Because the world rippled. Not from Olympus. Not from the system. But from something already here. Wind kicked up across the ash-choked field. Not divine wind. Not fable wind. Real wind. The kind that came before a storm you chose to walk through. Sasuke's spine straightened before he even looked. Hinata stopped mid-step. Her wind bent inward. Yamin's ink paused in the air, refusing to fall. Because he was back. The martial king has entered the battlefield. There was no fanfare. No trumpets. Just footfalls. Might Guy walked through the smoke. His uniform burned at the edges. Blood dried at his jawline. His sandals crunched through the shattered remains of Heracles' narrative frame like they were pebbles. He didn't glow. He didn't need to. The system struggled to read him again, even though it already knew who he was. Incarnation Might Guy, the martial king. Faction none. Title 1, who opens the 8th gate and survives. Affiliation pre-scenario 55, alignment giants. Story, the man who burns through heaven with his body alone. Sasuke stared, disbelief flickering beneath the violet gold of Hazangan. You weren't supposed to come in yet. Might Guy tilted his head with that same crooked grin. Didn't you say we were rewriting things? Hinata stepped forward, brow furrowed. You opened the 8th already? I haven't needed to, Guy replied calmly, cracking his knuckles. Not yet. Yamin turned to him, her voice low. We thought you were stationed on the eastern front. I was, Guy said. Then I saw a myth fall. He walked past them toward the center of the battlefield. A line of Olympian elites. Shaken, furious, but still armed. Blocked his way. He raised a single hand. Not in peace. In challenge. You know what I am. No one answered. The ground beneath him scorched without fire. The pressure in the air became something honest. Not divine, not written, not coded. Earned. A single message scrolled slowly across the system feed. Warning, the martial king does not belong in this hierarchy. The Olympus elites charged. Guy vanished. A breath later, 4 of them were unconscious. One was screaming. A spear of light flew toward him from above. Poseidon's retainer, armed with a divine relic. Guy caught it, bent it, dropped it. Then, he stood before Sasuke again, expression unchanging. You did good, he said. Sasuke nodded once, breathing through the pain. Not done yet. Good, Guy replied. Neither am I. Behind them, the broken Heracles construct twitched once. Its final failsafe flaring. A last countermeasure. A built-in self-destruct to bury the battlefield in divine backlash. Wyman reached for her ink. Sasuke raised his hand. Guy put a hand on their shoulders. I'll handle it. And then he walked into the fire again. Damn it. The ocean had vanished. No. That was wrong. The ocean was still there. But it was no longer ours. The horizon had bent. The tides were inverted. And in its place stood Poseidon. The myth-tier constellation spear that parts the sea has descended in full. Probability overload. Scenario distortion rate 93.1%. Warning, all surrounding narratives may collapse. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The world bent toward him. The sea curved inward like an eye dilating under his gaze. Every drop of water was his. The waves didn't rise. They knelt. Whirlpools bloomed in symmetrical halos around his form like sanctified wounds in the ocean. Every ship shattered just from seeing him. Even the clouds fled. This wasn't a god descending. This was a myth realizing itself. And for the first time in the entire scenario, the giants fell silent. Even Briareus, chained in probability and roaring war cries from 50 mouths, stopped. Wyman tried to write. And her quill snapped midair. The tale of duality flickered, distorted, overwritten. Sasuke's knees dipped. Not from fear. From the weight. Rasengan surged. But it couldn't see Poseidon. It couldn't define him. And Hinata. Her wind refused to approach. Don't. She started to say. But the sky answered first. A beam of light fell from Olympus. Apollon. His radiance gilding Poseidon's form like a second sun, a divine reinforcement. And then Athena came with him. 2 gods. Myth tier. 1 battlefield. We were going to die? The covenant that engraves history was already trying to end the scenario preemptively. A system purge. Clean failure logging. System alert catastrophic imbalance. Suggested solution emergency narrative termination. And in that moment, the sea cracked. Not from Poseidon. From footsteps. Boom, boom, boom. It was sound without logic. Like thunder walking. Sasuke's eyes widened. Rasengan twitched. And Poseidon. Poseidon turned. He noticed. Because it was that kind of arrival. The kind you could feel in your bones. The martial king has activated final technique limitless weight. A man stepped across the boundary Poseidon had created. He was burning. But not with flame. With effort. With pain. His muscles were torn, repaired, torn again. His breath was wind. His fists were stories. My guy. He didn't run. He walked. Through the ocean that didn't belong to humans. Through Olympus-sanctioned battlefield. Through Poseidon's gaze. And he smiled. Sorry I'm late. Sasuke nearly dropped his blade. You. Had to warm up, Guy said, and cracked his neck. The martial king has declared hostile intent against the myth-tier god Poseidon. Warning, this is not advised. Warning, this is not advised. Warning this. Guy lifted his leg. And the ocean bent up. One kick. It didn't land on Poseidon. It landed on the concept of proximity. And Poseidon. Poseidon blinked. Not in pain. In acknowledgement. Because he felt it. Even gods knew how to measure threats. And my guy wasn't equal. He was wrong. A man who should have died the moment he opened the gate of death. A man who spat in the mouth of myth and walked it off. The covenant that engraves history stopped blinking. New story initialized. The man who would not be written. Wyman, barely standing, whispered he's burning a fable just by walking. Sasuke nodded once, shoulders steady. That's why he's the martial king. And Guy stopped 3 meters from Poseidon. Fish god, he said cheerfully. Want to see what it means when someone fights fate with their body alone? Poseidon didn't reply. Instead, the sea rose behind him. Not a wave. A leviathan. It screamed. And Guy moved. His body ignited with every memory of loss. Every burn. Every bone ever broken in training. Every punch his student survived. Every time he told a dying shinobi to stand back up. He leapt. Straight at a god. And the battle between man and myth began. The sky could not contain it. My guy moved. And the world broke. Not from divine pressure. From sheer physical commitment. Poseidon's spear, the trident that measured the abyss, fell like the judgment of the sea. The waves parted midair. Space tore open in ribbons of salted stormlight. And Guy? He was laughing. The martial king has activated 8-fold reversal. 4th meridian searing pulse. His veins lit up like molten iron. The spear struck. And Guy blocked it. With one hand. One hand. The trident pushed. A myth-tier spearhead. A weapon that once drove titans into the earth's marrow. And Guy's palm just held. His feet didn't budge. His bones creaked like temples collapsing inside themselves. Blood filled his lungs. He coughed once and smiled anyway. Fish god, he said again. I felt worse. I once sparred my inner self full of youth. Poseidon's gaze narrowed. The god tilted his weapon, and behind him, the Leviathan lunged. The myth-grade beast Charybdra of tidal memory has entered the scenario. Sasuke saw it first. His anger sparked. Hinata. I see it. Wind bled from her skin. Azura's pupils spun like memory gears behind her irises. The tail of duality flared from her spine in golden script. They moved together. Hinata vanished in a gust. Sasuke lunged in lightning. Together, they struck the beast. Before it reached Guy, and the Leviathan screamed. Not from pain, from recognition, because something was wrong. These weren't just incarnations. These were narrative fractures. Sasuke's blade bit into the beast's jaw, slicing Fable wide. Hinata's palm found the center of its throat and rewrote its momentum. Wind flowed backward. The fable, when memory refuses death, has begun. The beast crashed into its own ocean. It fell. Sasuke landed, panting. Hinata touched down beside him, already weaving a new sigil of reversal. Guy, still smiling, flexed his fingers. The martial king has activated heaven-breaking flow. Second form crushing horizon. He spun. The sea lifted. It didn't just rise. It folded. Poseidon's trident twisted. Water wrapped around him like myth-made silk. The ocean roared, aligning to his breath. He stepped once, and the world reeled. It was like gravity lost interest in being constant. Poseidon surged forward. This time, he wasn't testing. He was ending. His spear spun in 3 concentric arcs. One horizontal, one vertical, one curved like a serpent about to devour the sky. The myth fable, when the sea remembers why it rages, has activated. He thrust. And Guy met it. Fists only. Flesh only. The trident sheared the air. The waves screamed hymns older than language. And Guy laughed, cocked back, and threw a punch. The martial king has activated eightfold reversal. Final meridian, crimson root. His fist connected. The spear stopped. Poseidon did not fall, but he stumbled. A god stumbled. The trident cracked. Just a hairline. A fracture. A whisper. But it was there. And the battlefield stopped pretending this was normal. YMN, blood dripping from her ink-drenched fingers, stared at the sky. The tail of duality flickered violently behind her. He can't keep that up, she whispered. Not unless. She turned. Her eyes burned with frantic invention. If she could just rewrite the resonance field. If she could realign the story frequencies, tune the battlefield to man over god, use the cracks in Poseidon's identity. She might make the impossible viable, even for 30 seconds. Enough for Sasuke. Enough for Hinata. Enough for Guy. Enough for a single strike. She raised her quill. The tail of duality is overriding sea without limit. New phrase initialized. There was a man who refused to drown. Above, Guy's feet dragged twin vortexes through the sky. He was already moving again. Poseidon raised his trident. And Might Guy smiled like a man who had already died and decided that didn't mean anything. Let's go again, fish god. The next blow hadn't even landed. But Olympus was already screaming. Poseidon's bellow split the sky. The sea recoiled as if struck. His trident veered off course. And for the first time in millennia, the god of oceans breathed unevenly. Not from pain. From the weight of a memory. The fable breaker of mythline blood has been triggered, and still. He stood. Wounded, yes. But Poseidon was a god of tides. Wounding him was like punching the concept of return, of inevitability. He staggered once. Then the sea answered him. All the ocean that Guy had folded with his fists, all the waves Hinata had unspun, all the vectors Sasuke had split with his Zangan, came back, like wrath with a memory. Poseidon rose, not in body, in scale. The myth fable, where Leviathan fails, the sea endures, is beginning. His body disappeared into light. Then reformed bigger, trident reforged, world forged. Sasuke fell to one knee, coughing blood. Hinata, hands still traced with reverse wind symbols, couldn't stand. Her breath caught like a broken branch. Even Guy, the martial king, paused. He stood, barefoot, bleeding, burning in every tendon. The martial king has activated heaven-breaking flow. Sixth form, eternal collapse. He stepped forward, but his knees buckled. He staggered. Sensei, Sasuke called out. Don't. Guy held up a hand, fingers twitching. I'm fine, he said, then spat blood. It's just another step. This body isn't made for eternity. Poseidon aimed his trident, then stopped, because Guy was still smiling. Let's go again, fish god. And just as the spear moved, a new war came. But it wasn't from a god. It wasn't a roar of rage. It was a declaration. A shout made only by humans who no longer feared gods. Guy shifted his stance. His back straightened. His fingers reset. And in the moment Poseidon struck, Guy vanished. He reappeared at Poseidon's head. The martial king has activated eightfold reversal. Hidden meridian azure spine. It was a movement no one had seen before. Even the observers watching couldn't keep up. Poseidon's trident missed. For the first time in this scenario, it missed. And Guy's leg came down. A simple axe kick. But the sea split. Again, the clouds howled. And Poseidon's shoulder shattered. The myth tier fable, the sea remembers its shape, is in disarray. Probability spike detected. Warning narrative fracture imminent. Above them, Wyman screamed now. Her ink exploded into starlight. The tale of duality has rewritten the sea's domain. New override the sea can break. And Hinata, her hands outstretched, activated the seal she'd been preparing through blood, reversal wind, and divinely fractured air. Hinata has activated Wind Seal Matrix. Style memory binds tides. 8 symbols. Each one forged from fable. Surrounded Poseidon's feet. They didn't hold him. They held the myth surrounding him. A shudder ran through the ocean. And Guy? Moved again. The martial king has activated heaven-breaking flow. 7th form final harmony. His body collapsed inward. Muscle to mantra. Blood to breath. Flame to motion. It was not a strike. It was peace. The kind of peace only the strongest can deliver. His fist landed against Poseidon's core. Not the heart. Not the trident. But the story. The one Poseidon thought unbreakable. The reason the sea believed it could never fall. You have struck a myth. You have fractured a tier 0 signature. Poseidon gasped. A god gasped. And then, the ocean fell. Not just parted. Not just broken. It surrendered. The sea bowed. The trident cracked. Poseidon fell backward, caught by the very waves that once worshipped him. The sky turned quiet. And my Guy, barely breathing, covered in heat scars and charred skin, stood, just barely, 1 foot planted where myth once reigned. He looked at Hinata, then at Sasuke. I think, he whispered, that's enough training for today. And then, he collapsed. The martial king has entered critical threshold. The myth-tier constellation spear that parts the sea has been defeated. Scenario 55. Gigantomachia has entered final phase. Poseidon's scream tore the tide from the world. And then, the ocean stilled. Not because it had calmed, but because it had been shamed. The myth-tier fable that once made every ship tremble, every mortal pray, every scenario shrink away from its coastline, had collapsed. Not in concept, but in narrative. The myth fable, where Leviathan fails, the sea endures, has been dismantled. Warning, a tier 0 constellation has lost its signature fable. Poseidon's eyes were wide with disbelief. The martial king, Might Guy, lay unconscious, barely alive. His body burned black with exertion, his chakra centers shattered like brittle stars. But around him, the waves refused to rise. Even the sea had knelt. Even gods could lose. And Olympus had just learned. Above, the sky cracked. Not metaphorically, not narratively, physically. Hinata stared at the fracture lines spreading across the clouds, as though the heavens themselves were rejecting what had happened. Sasuke's fingers tightened around the broken hilt of his Zangan, blood still dripping from where the blade had cut his palm during the final reversal parry. He's gone, Sasuke murmured, eyes still glowing faintly. Not yet, Hinata whispered, because they could both feel it. Poseidon's body had fallen, but Poseidon's presence still lingered, fragments of the god's essence. The raw tide that sustained Olympus' oceanic domain were still here, flooding the scenario. They weren't attached to a form anymore. They were fableless. That was what made it dangerous. When a myth-tier god fell, the power didn't vanish. It became wild. And wild myth wasn't divine. It was apocalyptic. The world began to shake, no longer with narrative intent, but with instinct. The storm clouds circled, pulled downward into the whirlpool where Poseidon had collapsed. The myth was trying to reform itself, but it was failing, because someone else had already claimed its center. System override. A myth-tier fable has been replaced. New core fable recognized the man who burned the sea. The battlefield didn't cheer. It didn't know how. Too much had been lost, and too much was still breaking. Observers all across the world watched from their invisible altitudes. The silent ones, the counters, the ones who marked narrative weight not by glory, but by its cost. And the cost here was unprecedented. Their voices echoed, unseen, like whispers through ash. Observer Vassal of the Broken Tusk has logged scenario distortion levels. Observer Twilight Ledger notes the myth realignment in progress. Observer Umbra, Last of the Seven Eyes, files emergency report: a fable has been assassinated. Back on the ground, Hinata stumbled. Sasuke caught her arm. The threads of her final Wind Seal Matrix were still flickering in the air. It's over, she said. No, Sasuke said, voice hoarse. It's about to be. Because the collapse had done more than shatter a god. It had left a void, and the one Olympus had placed to fill it. Their engineered successor, the hero of the labyrinth, was still alive. Theseus, half-formed from Poseidon's echo, stood bleeding and trembling before the corpse of a myth that had just abandoned him. He was no longer glowing. His trident had rusted. The sea no longer listened, but the system still did. Final subjugation: kill the remaining host of the myth. Reward: rewrite the empty fable. Warning: the host is unstable. Narrative infection has begun. Sasuke stepped forward. I'll do it, he said, lightning humming quietly from his cracked bones. No, Hinata's voice was calm, but firm. You're at your limit. Sasuke's grip faltered. Then another voice spoke. Then let me. Wyman descended like ink falling from the clouds. Her coat was half burned, her sleeves torn, but her eyes. Oh, Her eyes were gleaming with story. Not memory. Not revenge. Just purpose. The tale of duality was meant to preserve memory, she said. To bind the opposing halves of a myth. To allow it to evolve. She raised her hand. But sometimes, to write the future. Her quill flared, blazing in gold. You have to kill the past. The myth engine has accepted override authority. You are now eligible to finalize the Gigantomachia narrative. Please select a title for the replacement myth. YMN looked at the dying Theseus. Then she looked at Sasuke, Hinata, and the martial king who had collapsed against a reef of shattered ocean. And she said, let it be known. She drew a single word. Freedom. The quill snapped. Theseus screamed. Not out of pain, but out of release. Final scenario result Olympus myth deconstructed. New great fable acquired Godsbane. New myth fable registered the scourge of tides. Myth tier replaced. New name narrative class Sasuke. He who refused to kneel. New name narrative class Hinata. Breath between rights. New name narrative class YMN. Architect of the false act, the seaside, and Gigantomachia, after eons. Was finally done. YMN didn't vanish in flame. She simply stepped out of Olympus. And into memory. The world she returned to was not the one she left. Konoha had changed. Not in shape. In weight. The skies above the bastion still shimmered with residual divine light. Threads of narrative stretching toward Olympus, linking gods to their puppets. But beneath those clouds, inside the sealed heart of the Akasha pantheon, the air was thick. With silence. With waiting. With something she didn't yet understand. She didn't stop to greet the guards. She didn't greet anyone. The stardust-etched vial of nectar trembled faintly in her palm, script pulses rising and falling like a heartbeat she didn't trust. The other hand carried the tale of duality, now bound shut in red and black silk. She had what they needed to bring him back. But something felt wrong. Every corridor felt warmer than it should. Every step closer to the husk. The body of the boy who once fractured stars. Pulled against her like the memory of drowning. The ward was already open when she arrived. No, she breathed. Inside, Naruto's husk was still. Exactly as she left him. But the room beside his. One sealed by 4 overlapping security fables. Was unlocked. Lit from within. And screaming. She ran before she could be stopped. And what she found was blood. Red silk sheets. A pool beneath the medic's trembling hands. Kushina Uzumaki, half conscious, was dying on the floor. Her eyes were wild with pain, her body trembling with narrative backlash. Beside her, a newborn child, crying. And beside them both, Minato, silent, broken, hands shaking as he pressed uselessly against a wound too deep for even divine chakra to close. YMN stopped in the doorway. A nurse turned, eyes wide. Who the hell are you? I have nectar, YMN said. The room froze. Minato didn't look up. It's too late. No, it's not. Minato turned. And for the first time in years, he saw her. Hinata? YMN didn't answer. She stepped forward, eyes locked on Kushina. The system screamed. System alert divine nectar, ambrosial core in hand. Target Uzumaki Naruto, status hollow vessel. Target Uzumaki Kushina, status terminal critical. Only one viable application detected. Warning, this resource cannot be split. Choose. Silence followed. Not even the child cried. Only the system spoke, and it asked with no mercy. Will you save the mother who bled her story into the world? Or the son who no longer remembers he had one? Kushina looked up. Her voice was ragged. Don't waste it on me. Save him. YMN couldn't speak. Because part of her wanted to scream, he's not in there anymore. Because part of her wanted to believe she was wrong. And then, another message. New option detected, third path. Seal memory into the tale of duality. Result, neither will live. But both will be remembered. Probability of future recovery unknown. The tale of duality burned in her other hand. The book shook, as if it knew what was at stake. As if it could remember what even gods wanted to forget. The child kept crying. Kushina reached out with a bloody hand and whispered, tell him. I don't regret it. YMN stood at the crossroads of fate. One vial. One book. 2 souls. And a silence too cruel to describe. She looked down at her hands. And chose. The vial clicked shut. The nectar was poured. The system flared. Just once. And then went still. The divine ambrosia has been administered. Target Uzumaki Kushina. Status stabilizing. Life function restoration 37%. 64%. 91%. Warning, long-term damage to fable structure sustained. Survival confirmed. Kushina gasped. Her chakra surged out in an arc, uncontrolled, like a sea untethered from its tides. YMN grabbed her hand. Not out of mercy, but to ground the backlash into herself. And Kushina lived. But he didn't stir. Naruto. Still collapsed, still hollow. Still in that unmoving husk. Still held by nothing. The tale she'd once read aloud. The one that became legend in fragments and lost pages. This was not how it ended. YMN didn't look at Minato. Didn't explain. Didn't wait for a thank you. She walked straight past him, the tale of duality under one arm. Hinata. Minato's voice cracked behind her. But she wasn't Hinata. Not anymore. She had shed that name the moment she returned from Olympus with the power to rewrite gods. She had buried it when she inked down a world without Naruto. She had cast it aside when she chose the mother instead of the myth. And now she reached for what no one else could take. Naruto's husk. Minato turned too late. Kushina opened her eyes too slowly. By the time anyone realized the cradle was empty, the woman with violet eyes and dusk-drenched sleeves had already vanished into the smoke of fable. Naruto's husk in her arms, the tale of duality whispering behind her like a cloak woven from half-remembered endings. The nurses screamed. Minato rose, stumbling, blood on his hands. Where's my son? Kushina, still weak, whispered Minato. But he was already moving. Find her. Seal the exits. She took him. But there were no seals strong enough to hold someone who had rewritten Olympus. There were no doors she couldn't open with ink and resolve. There were no gods fast enough to intercept a story already written. By the time the alarms reached the tower, Wyman was gone. And Naruto Uzumaki. The one they called the husk, the one they left behind, the one no longer meant to be part of the story, had vanished with her. The tale of duality has been reopened. New entry detected a life the world forgot to write. Ink compatibility 100%. Subject Uzumaki Naruto. Resonance with author confirmed. Initiating narrative restoration. Estimated time unknown. The tale did not end with her choice. Because stories do not end with mercy. They fracture. They echo. They follow. And she was already halfway gone. Dust kicked up along the forgotten road that curved beneath Konoha's western ridge. A caravan might have called it a path. But for YMN, it was memory. She walked with a steady gait, worn boots pressing into the earth like punctuation marks at the edge of a sentence. In her arms the husk of the boy the world had stopped remembering. Wrapped in layered blankets, a spiral insignia barely visible. Uzumaki Naruto. The inked veil around her wrists shifted with each step, whispering faint excerpts from a book only she still held. The tale of duality was silent most days. But not with him. Not when he was near. At dusk, she told him stories. Some were real. Some were rewritten. Some were the kind the world was afraid to read. And that's how the boy outran the sun, she murmured one evening, sitting by a quiet stream. He didn't need speed. He needed belief. And that was harder to catch. Naruto didn't speak. He didn't move. But she believed he heard her. The fire crackled. The wind whistled through the reeds. And in the absence of gods, a woman and a boy kept walking. Back in Konoha, the sun had barely crested the horizon when the alarm echoed across the bastion walls. A seal had been broken. The secured nursery was empty. The fourth Hokage's son. Gone. The Hokage himself collapsed in the corridor, unable to speak through grief and confusion. Minato Namikaze had seen many things. He had fought demon lords and stared down eldritch war gods. But this? He did not understand this. She took him, he muttered. She looked like Hinata. No one understood what he meant. Not until she walked in. The arrival was sudden. The air shimmered. And they appeared. Sasuke stepped through the gate first. His Mangekyo still burned faintly from the Olympus aftershock. Behind him, wind peeled from open space and Hinata landed softly beside him. The real Hinata, breath short, but heart steady. The guards raised their weapons immediately. Identify yourselves. Sasuke said nothing. His presence spoke for him. Hinata stepped forward. I'm here to see the Hokage. The guards flinched. That voice. That face. The chakra signature. They recognized it. Too late. Minato arrived in a blur of yellow, cloak billowing, face stricken. And when he saw her, he hesitated. Where is he? His voice cracked. Hinata blinked. Hokage-sama. Where's my son? He was there. In front of her in less than a second. His kunai was at her throat. Chakra surged like a dying star behind his eyes. You stole him. You took my son. You. His voice broke again. Hinata didn't move. She didn't even raise a hand. Minato, Sasuke said behind her. The name fell like a final word. Minato froze. His eyes twitched. The blade didn't lower. Let her speak. She looks just like. Minato gritted his teeth. She is. She's not, Sasuke said. Wyman was never her. She took him, Minato repeated, his voice cracking with something far worse than fury. And I let her go. The silence that followed felt like a funeral. Hinata's voice, soft and steady. I wasn't here. But if she looked like me, and she took Naruto. She bowed her head. Then she's trying to save him. Minato staggered back. His blade dropped. He collapsed to one knee, breathing like a man who had just been pulled from drowning. Kushina's voice still echoed in his head. The choice. The silence. The cradle that had gone still too fast. Sasuke turned toward the guard captain. We need a full lockdown on all outer gate signatures. Check the leyline pulses. She may have traveled along narrative seams. We're already scanning, sir, but... The captain hesitated. She's not anywhere. No trace. No residue. Then she's not hiding. Sasuke's Sharingan flickered once. She's rewriting the route. Minato looked up, finally speaking with clarity. If she can rewrite Olympus. He didn't finish the sentence. Because they all knew the end. If she could rewrite Olympus, Then finding Naruto now wasn't about seals, or tracking, or even divination. It was about waiting for the story to loop around again. Hinata looked toward the western mountains. The same path she once took out of Konoha so long ago. System update primary narrative. Rewritten. Subject Uzumaki Naruto. Current status disconnected from Fable thread. Tale of duality, entry ongoing. Watcher class YMN guide level absolute. Return estimated unknown. In a caravan without name, beneath stars no god dared claim, a boy slept beneath a story. And somewhere, in the still burning ruins of Olympus, an empty cradle rocked quietly in the wind. There was no sky in the world that never was. Only the faint pressure of narrative recoil. A city of shattered spires hung upside down above its own ruins, like a reflection of a story that forgot what direction grief should fall. Cracked streets coiled around monoliths of unclaimed lore. The buildings were hollow. Windowless constructs made of failed endings. No wind moved through the alleys. Only judgment. The cathedral at its heart was shaped like a blade stabbed through a book. Inside, they waited. Not in prayer. In entropy. It's been too long, Conan murmured, folding another paper wing. He should have harvested already. He was sloppy, Kimimaro said from the ceiling, his voice dispassionate. Letting himself get rattled by the girl. Letting that fable touch him. You would have died just standing in the room with her, Giran muttered, flicking a shard of reflective crystal between her fingers. Don't get cocky. Yugo said nothing. His body trembled with stored imbalance. His eyes were closed, like he was listening for a rhythm no one else could hear. Kabuto turned another page in a projection scroll that wrote itself in decaying script. He was never supposed to leave the field incomplete. Even you wouldn't have retreated like that, Obito. From the far wall, cloaked in layers of dust and disapproval, Obito answered with only a glance. His voice was sandpaper shaped like a sigh. He didn't retreat. He paused. You know what he is. It was either pause or get rewritten. TCH. Kisame leaned his sword against the pew, its wrappings twitching like they remembered slaughter. He used to eat names for breakfast. Now he's flinching at books? Not just any book, Conan replied. That girl was holding memory. A sealed construct with his name in it. A memory? Giran said. That's it. What? Did he see a happy flashback and forget how to kill? No, said Madara, stepping forward from the highest ledge of the cathedral choir loft, his voice like broken gods rearranged into mockery. He remembered how to feel. Silence fell like snow made of burnt script. He should have devoured her, Kimimaro whispered. She was the variable. No, Madara said again. The variable was him. He turned. His eyes glimmered with the cracked fire of an ancient fable long stripped of its throne. You want him to go back, Conan said softly. He already is. They turned toward the pulpit. It was empty. Until it wasn't. A figure stepped through the chapel doors. No breeze. No entrance sound. Just absence. He didn't walk. He arrived. White coat trailing behind him like a forgotten prologue. 9 shadows floated where his tail should be. His face was veiled. Not by cloth, but by a veil of the cosmos at the end of the world, refracting nothing. No eyes. No mouth. Only the suggestion of a face behind collapsed constellations. The fabric of his body wasn't fabric. It was silence. And the mask. Still smooth. Still black. Still etched with 3 whisker lines. It looked like a child's. It made the world sick just to see it. You're late, Kisame muttered. The gods are already gossiping. Nocturne said nothing. Kabuto tilted his head. Harvest window closed. You left it at 36%. Still nothing. Conan rose, paper wings unfurling. Do you remember what she said? This time, Nocturne moved. Not with a nod. Not with a word. Just a tilt of the head that made the entire cathedral creak. Kimimaro exhaled. Pathetic. Kisame chuckled. You really did let her get to you, huh? Madara stared down from the heights. You left a god half-formed, he said. Nocturne's shadows began to stir. A low sound. Like the death of a lullaby. Echoed through the chamber. Madara grinned. And now you're going back. The outer code. Nocturne has resumed the epilogue harvest. Target Poseidon, myth-tier god of the tide cycle. Objective conclude the unfinished harvest. Giran scoffed. All this for a fish. Obito stepped forward, sharing one glance with the figure. It wasn't a question. It was an understanding. You're going to finish it this time. The shadow didn't respond. It didn't need to. The tails began to uncurl. One by one, the world outside the cathedral started to blur. Nocturne stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was a place where music once lived. I left Olympus half-eaten. He turned toward the horizon, where Olympus still tried to rewrite its own massacre. And he said, I am hungry again. The sea had died. And yet, it was trying to breathe. Somewhere beyond the shores Olympus once ruled, at the heart of a broken mythscape, where the sky bled narrative residue, and the tide no longer knew which direction it belonged to. Poseidon crawled. There was no body left. Only shape. A shape made of story. Of collapsed identity. Of wrath without a vessel. Fragments of his trident spiraled around him like teeth looking for a jaw. His title, Spear That Parts the Sea, was flickering in the air, unstable, glitching like a cursed sigil. Poseidon's voice, a deep tectonic rumble, cracked through the silence. I am not finished. The world didn't answer. Even Olympus, tethered by 1,000 fables to his myth, did not speak. He reached for the water, and the water recoiled. The sea, his domain, shrank from him like prey recognizing a predator. The fable he once wore like divine flesh was now ash. He reached into the void with his essence and tried to write himself back in. He summoned an identity, a title, a concept, but the system, still shaken from his collapse, only replied with blank text. You are attempting to reform a myth fable. Your designation is ? Warning narrative inversion detected. Myth level error code 000000. Void fragment. Recovery 2%. 4%. 6%. Then the tide paused. The sea, which had turned its back on its master, went still again. Not in fear, in submission. And Poseidon, the one who had watched Atlantis rise, the one who walked storms into empires, felt something he had not felt since he first grasped the trident. He felt watched. A presence arrived, not as a form, but as a revision. A place where the universe had once ended but decided to keep writing anyway. The waters folded in on themselves like origami in the hands of entropy. And then he saw it. A figure stood across the surf, shaped like a man, clothed in shadow, but where his face should have been, there was only sky. Not blue sky, not starless night, but a veil of the cosmos. A storm of dying galaxies, threads of fate stretched past heat death, a shroud woven from the screaming edge of every unfinished story. Suns fell into it and were never seen again. His hood, stitched in the shape of a constellation no god dared name. His coat, formed from the spinal cords of failed fables, stitched by the silence between chapters. And where his eyes should have been, a blindfold of space, nebulas swirled across it, not reflecting stars, but erasing them. And Poseidon, myth-tier Poseidon, lord of the oceanic domain, storm splitter, herald of Leviathan's womb, staggered. You, he said, not aloud, but in the language only gods knew, the trembling voice of recognition. Because he remembered, not the name, never the name. The name was not allowed, but the weight of a presence erased from myth, not by time, but by design. Nocturne said nothing. He simply stood. Wherever he stepped, the world forgot. Behind him, waves turned to glass. Fish stopped moving. Air wept. Poseidon tried to speak, but the words unraveled in his mouth. Warning, you are gazing upon a tier 0 narrative signature. Your narrative resistance is insufficient. Your mind is being overwritten. He backed away. I didn't mean to. Nocturne extended a hand, and for the first time in all of history, Poseidon begged. Please. The god whispered. If you came for Olympus, I can help you. I owe you my reform. I can offer you my domain, a fragment of my... He stopped, because Nocturne had tilted his head, and where his name should have been. The system screamed. Your ... is the silence after the story screams. Your ... is the ending that was forgotten. Your ... is oblivion. Your ... is oblivion. Poseidon's myth fractured again. Warning, your fable is collapsing. Warning, you are being consumed by an incomplete narrative. Nocturne's hand was not a hand. It was void with intent. It reached forward, and Poseidon vanished. You have reached your ... not in fire, not in light, not even in death. He was simply unwritten. Nocturne's blindfold flared once. A ripple passed through the sea, and Poseidon, god of oceans, ceased to be. No soul, no death, no trace. Only this. You have devoured a myth-tier signature. You have consumed a tier 0 identity. You have earned a new fable devourer of gods. The veil of stars blinked once across Nocturne's face. And the sky, a sky Olympus no longer owned, shivered. The sea remained bowed. And outside, the wall at the end of the world. Yes, even the heavenly demon paused its observation, because there were some stories too horrifying to narrate. And Nocturne was a reader that no book survived. Naruto alone. The road began not with footsteps, but with silence. A silence too vast to be broken by wind, too thick for birdsong, too real to feel fictional. And in that silence walked two figures. One of them was a boy who no longer moved, no longer remembered, no longer breathed with the rhythm of the world. The world, in turn, had forgotten him. He was wrapped in bandages that once were prayers, carried not like a burden, but like a story waiting to be told. And beside him, walking always a step ahead, yet never too far, was Wyman. She had long since stopped calling him Naruto. The boy she carried had no name anymore. Just titles left behind. Just fragments. Just wait. They crossed lands that no longer believed in gods. Cities where no one had heard of Konoha. Fields burned clean of chakra. Forests where echoes went to die. Some places feared her. Others knelt. Some offered food or scrolls or questions, but never answers. Wyman didn't speak much. But every night, when the stars were quiet and the wind curled around the fire in apology, she would open the tale of duality. She would sit across from him, his empty eyes facing hers, and begin. Let me tell you a story. Sometimes they were short. Sometimes they lasted days. One night, She told him the story of the boy who climbed the moon to steal its name, just so his village could have a second son. Another night, it was about a girl who loved a sword more than her own heartbeat. Once, she even recited the myth of the child born from a frog's eye, whose tears turned into birds when he cried. She told these stories not because he asked, but because she needed them to be heard. And even if the boy never blinked, never stirred, never made a sound, she believed that somewhere, beneath that motionless skin, past the ruined memory, past the sealed chakra coils and redacted fables, Naruto still listened. And that was enough. It had to be, because the world had already given up. Konoha whispered of betrayal. Minato whispered of vengeance. Even the gods of the Covenant began to reroute stories around him, treating his absence as canon, as if he had never been real. But YMN refused. Do you remember, she whispered one evening beneath a bleeding eclipse, how your laugh cracked open the world once? He didn't reply, so she opened the tale of duality and wrote it down instead. The boy didn't remember, but I did, and that was enough. She looked at him. His head lolled slightly against her shoulder, mouth parted slightly, as if trying to speak in a dream he no longer knew how to have. We'll get there, she said. The world was vast. The story was longer than she had feared, and the years were only just beginning. But every step she walked beside him was a word returned. Every breath she spoke near him was a line rewritten. And in time, she believed he would remember, even if the whole world forgot. He twitched at the scent of smoke. It wasn't much, just a flicker in his nostrils. Chemicals and wood fire and the tang of leaf oil from a chakra bomb not made to kill, but to disable. Still he twitched. Naruto, who no longer breathed. Naruto, who no longer was. The husk lay draped over one end's back like a forgotten banner, pale and ragdoll silent, his maskless face lit only by the soft pulse of unlit fables across his scars. No chakra, no awareness, only the faint shimmer of something waiting. YMN froze halfway across a broken aqueduct that once carried water to a country whose name had been lost to ink. She heard them first, for chakra signatures, then the silence that came with military tracking. Konoha. They didn't call his name. They didn't dare. But she heard the command, kill her if she runs. And the husk? Recover it. Orders are to bring the body back to the bastion for secondary review. They still thought he was dead. They still thought he could die. YMN exhaled once and stepped forward, still carrying him. She didn't raise a weapon, didn't summon wind or ink. Don't, she said. The kunoichi in front froze. Move. YMN continued. And this world will regret remembering you. The youngest of the team saw only her silhouette. Her coat torn and blackened, her bare legs wrapped in travel-stained bindings. Her back was hunched, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of something terrible, something ancient, something that should not have survived a fable collapse and walked free. But she was just one woman. So he moved. He flickered into the shadow of a fallen pillar and struck for Naruto's side, hoping to disable her grip. The blade pierced Naruto's neck, and Naruto moved. Not like a living thing. Not like a corpse either. He didn't scream, didn't bleed, didn't jerk. The blade went through, and Naruto's throat, ripped open and silent, simply reformed. The Konoha Shinobi fell back in horror, eyes wide, chakra flaring with instinctual recoil. What the hell? Naruto still didn't speak, but his eyes were open now, pale gold, not glowing, not flickering, just watching without seeing, watching without mercy. A hand lifted, twitching not with technique, but with echo. Get back. One of the trackers screamed. He's not human. That's not Naruto Uzumaki. YMN didn't speak. She lifted him from her shoulders and cradled him against her chest. Not gently, not motherly, just carefully, as if holding a bomb made of memory. Go, she said again. And this time, they listened. They didn't run. They fled. Even as Naruto's neck finished stitching itself back together like it had never been cut. Even as his lips parted and a sound came from them. Not a voice, but a wind. A memory of breath. It smelled like paper. YMN pressed her palm against his chest. It's okay, she whispered. He didn't react. He never did. But her voice still sounded like a story being told to someone who might, someday, awaken. Later, she walked alone again. Naruto's body on her back, his arms around her neck, head slumped over her shoulder like a child asleep in the arms of a guardian who would never age. Above them, the stars shifted. Below them, the dust of ruined temples told stories no one had time to hear. She did not look back. The world was already behind them. Once, she whispered to him, there was a boy who saved a world. But no one remembers his name. Her voice cracked. Let me tell you how the story should have gone. And so she walked. And the wind carried her voice through empty places. And the boy on her back listened, even if he didn't yet know how. The third continent was more sky than stone. YMN called it Kurenai, though it had no name in any covenant registry. The wind here had no borders. The rivers ran upside down, curling around floating cliffs like forgotten brushstrokes in a child's painting. Lightning birds nested in the clouds. Entire civilizations rode on the backs of sky-faring whales. And still, no one here had ever heard the name Naruto Uzumaki. which meant they were safe. For now, Naruto rode on her back again. The burn scars down his jaw were still visible. Scars he had regenerated from, impossibly, wordlessly. But healing hadn't brought him back. Not to her. Not yet. He hung limp but warm, his breath shallow and steady, a living testament to something the world should never have forgotten. She walked with him through the echoing cliffs. And she told stories. This one is about a boy, she whispered, adjusting the tail of duality in her left hand while her right steadied him across her shoulder. He lived in a place called Sunagakure. Everyone feared him because of the sand. His head didn't move. But there was a girl, Temari. She was fierce, loud, smarter than all of them. And she looked at him and saw not a monster, but her brother. She saw him, and he learned to see himself. Naruto didn't stir, but the wind did. A memory pressed against the breeze. Somewhere, an old scroll fluttered open. Wyman walked on. They stopped beside a willow grove that had grown in the spine of a dead colossus. An old titan of the Gigantomachia, long fossilized, its ribs housing monks and its skull a bell tower. There, she let Naruto rest on a blanket she stitched from old shrine flags. At sunset, she told another tale. This one's about someone who died for you. Over and over again. He wasn't brave. He didn't know jutsu. He didn't have fangs or flame. She paused, looked up at the sun. But he had you. The tale of duality glowed at that. A single word etched itself into the parchment Irika. Naruto blinked. Just once. Slow. Mechanical. Wyman turned her face away. She didn't cry. Not yet. By the 7th month in Kurenai, they passed the Foxwood Range. It was dusk. A silence heavier than history fell across the hills. The air was warmer here. Sweet. Old. The kind of warmth found in childhood, buried in the scent of fried fish and home. Foxes watched them from the ridgelines. Their coats were copper. Their eyes were gold. One had 3 tails. Wyman felt it first. A tension rippled through the body against her back. Naruto didn't breathe faster. He didn't move. But the tear slid anyway. His eyes remained glassed. Blank. Void of cognition. But the tear rolled. Down his cheek. Off his chin. Onto her shoulder. Wyman froze. Then, very softly, she turned and sat down in the foxgrass. Naruto's head rested on her lap now, and she brushed his hair as the foxes gathered around them, silent as witnesses. She whispered a story she had sworn she'd never say aloud. This one's about a god, she said. But not the kind that built Olympus. Not the kind that demands prayers or sacrifices. He was loud, messy, clumsy. He didn't want to be divine. He just wanted ramen. The tear didn't stop, and the world said he wasn't worthy. So he made himself into a home. Another tear joined the first. He gave himself to everyone. And when there was nothing left, he smiled. Just smiled and said, "Believe it." A shiver went through Naruto's chest. No heartbeat change. No sudden awakening. But the tail noticed. Ink sink. 1.4% initiated. Wyman bent her head low and wept into the crook of his neck. "I will tell a story for eternity," she whispered, voice barely human. "I will give the world just for Naruto." The foxes howled. The night sky responded. And in the distance, Konoha burned in effigy. Search parties lighting the coastlines, futile as myths trying to kill their authors. But the real story had already left, carried on the back of a girl with ink-stained fingers and a boy the world forgot. There were no roads that led to the spirit world. There were only questions. She crossed into the northern wastes beneath the twilight canopy of a thunder-blessed sky. By then, she'd walked for weeks. Her back ached from carrying him. Her feet cracked with ice from mountain rivers. But the moment the aurora parted and the moonlight carved a door in the canyon wall, she knew. A gate like mist. A doorway like memory. A whisper like the sea. "Do you seek what is lost?" She didn't answer. She stepped through and vanished. The spirit world here, mountains were upside down. Rivers flowed backward. Trees grew in salt instead of soil. And every shadow carried a name she didn't know. The tale of duality drifted beside her like a satellite. Naruto's husk remained behind, tethered to the world of matter. She had come here alone, to search for what could not be found. She walked for hours, or maybe days. Time didn't matter here. Not when you were in the realm of unformed thought. Not when every tree whispered a different version of what you used to believe. But no matter how far she walked, no matter how many echoes of gods, demons, or dead memories flickered past her, he was never there. She reached the center of a lake made of frozen ink and stood at its shore, heart hollow, arms shaking. And then someone else was there. A woman with soft pink hair, robes of woven lotus thread, and a lantern in her hand. She wasn't glowing. She wasn't ancient. She just was. Her presence settled like quiet rain. The stranger tilted her head. "You look lost," she said. Wyman turned. "I am." The woman walked beside her, setting the lantern in the lake. "Most people are, when they come here. I'm looking for someone. They never are here." Wyman flinched. "You knew that, didn't you?" the woman asked. "I wanted to be wrong." The pink-haired woman looked up at the stars above. If they were stars, more like stories that never finished being told. "I've waited in this place for so long. Sometimes I think I've forgotten the shape of the person I was trying to remember." "You're waiting for someone, too?" "I think so." Or maybe I'm just waiting for a reason to stop waiting. Wyman stepped beside her. Do you know how to find someone who isn't here? The woman smiled. You don't. So there's no way? No, she said softly. You don't find them. You walk with the pain until the idea of them becomes a part of your every step. Wyman closed her eyes. I don't want him to be an idea. You don't get to choose that, the woman said. You only get to choose if you'll carry him long enough to become something more than memory. Wyman shook. I've told him stories. I know. He never answers. He's still listening. He doesn't even know who I am. That's not what matters. She turned to face the stranger fully, eyes glinting with tears. Then what does? The woman bent down, picked up a small lantern shaped like a leaf. She placed it in Wyman's hand. The fact that you remember, she said. That's what will matter when nothing else is left. The spirit world began to fade. I don't even know your name, Wyman whispered. You don't need it, the woman said, smiling like dawn. I'm just another one of you. And then she was gone. The physical world Wyman collapsed by the edge of the river, soaked in sweat. Her fingernails dug into the soil. The tale of duality pulsed faintly beside her. Naruto lay where she'd left him. Still, but there were tears on his cheeks. Real ones. No breath stirred in him, no chakra flared. But the tears had fallen. Not from pain, not from knowledge. From something deep. Something only stories could touch. Wyman gathered him in her arms again, her throat dry, her chest tight with unshed words. I'll carry you forever if I have to, she whispered. I'll tell a story so long the sun forgets to rise. I'll give the world just for Naruto. She kissed his forehead and walked. They arrived in the village at the edge of nowhere with nothing but a name and the hush of a boy who didn't move. She told them her name was Mirai, that she and her husband had come from the north, that the mines had collapsed, that he hadn't spoken since. She didn't tell them about the war in Olympus. She didn't tell them about gods or fables or forgotten timelines. She just asked if there was work. The village was called Uzutsuki, Moon's Last Tide, built where the clouds rested low on the cliffs and the sea far below hummed lullabies through the stones. Uzutsuki was a place people passed through and forgot how to leave. Salt grew in the wind. Every house had one crooked window, and the fisher folk mended nets by the sound of waves instead of clocks. There was no chakra, no summoning beasts, no clans, just rope, wind, moss, and the work of living. She became their strongest hauler within the first month. A laborer, barefoot and bare-armed, carting salt from the brine beds, chopping wood for the lantern lighters. Some days she helped at the smokehouse, other days she worked the dye vats. Her hands thickened, her back ached. Her strength became myth among children too young to remember Shinobi. But every night, without fail, she returned to him. They lived in a cottage at the edge of the upper ridge, where the cliff winds sang hardest. Naruto's husk, his body, motionless, eyes empty, rested on a woven mat before the hearth. Wyman knelt beside him, changed his linens, rubbed healing oils into his palms, combed his hair, whispered stories as if each syllable could stitch back a part of his soul. Every night, a different tale. Some were grand epics from the age of the Third Pantheon. Some were lullabies once sung by Senja mothers. Some were fragments she invented, of children who once climbed to the stars because they missed their brothers. And always, she ended with, and when you wake up, I'll tell you the rest. Naruto never spoke, but his eyes would sometimes water. His hands would sometimes tremble. It was enough. The village accepted them slowly. They called him Tsurugi because he looked sharp once, like a sword left in the rain. They said she was too young to give up on a husband so hollow, too beautiful to stay in a place where the tide took more than it gave. One afternoon, a child named Kana followed her home. Kana was small, missing 3 front teeth, and always carried a satchel full of hand-drawn maps. She liked to ask questions that shouldn't have answers. Why do you carry him? Wyman paused, shifting Naruto's weight on her back. Because he once carried me farther than anyone else ever has. But he doesn't talk, or smile, or work, or even look at you. Wyman crouched to Kana's height. He gave me the world, she said simply. Kana blinked. When I was someone else. And he was someone no one else remembered. In time, Kana brought more children. They listened to her stories by the fire, sitting in a circle around Naruto like he was a monument. She told them tales of a fox boy who outran death, of a boy who ate the stars so his friends could live. She changed the names, hid the truths, but the truth in her voice never wavered. And in the quiet of those nights, when even the wind outside dared not interrupt, sometimes Naruto's finger would twitch, and sometimes she would cry, silently, so no one would see. The seasons passed. She painted their home red in spring, grew sweetroot in summer, shoveled paths in winter, and sang lullabies to his silence in autumn. The town built her a porch, called her Miss Mirai of the red-eared house, gave her new boots and a spindle carved from driftwood. They stopped asking why she stayed. They just brought food for 2. One evening, a storm blew in from the sea, and the whole village gathered in the community lodge. The wind howled through the windows, and old men muttered prayers to the tide gods of their youth. Wyman held Naruto's hand beneath a quilt someone else had sewn. Kana leaned against her side. Do you think he knows how much you care? Wyman looked down. I hope he forgets, she whispered. Why? Because remembering hurts. Kana frowned. But what if he forgets you? Wyman kissed Naruto's temple. Then I'll remember for him. That night, when the storm broke, a fox appeared at their door. Not a demon, just a fox. Silver-furred, three-tailed. It blinked at Naruto's body. Naruto didn't move. But his tears came again. Wyman didn't chase the fox away. She let it curl beside them, and told it a story too. Maybe tomorrow, someone would arrive from Konoha. Maybe tomorrow, she'd have to lie again. Maybe tomorrow, she'd have to decide whether to run or hide. But for tonight, there was fire. There was silence. There was the boy who once held gods in his hands. And the woman who chose to carry his story when no one else would. Wyman woke before the sun did. She always did. The village of Uzutsuki was quiet then. Still wrapped in mists that hung like cobwebs from the valley cliffs, the air cold enough to remember ghosts. She stepped into the morning without sound, her breath fogging around her as she tied her long sleeves behind her back and retrieved the woven basket. Chickens rustled. The river hummed. The wind, gentler than any kanai, blew across the hills that once saw war and now only watched over her. She passed through the narrow streets with practiced silence. Clay brick homes with thatched moss roofs dotted the slope, smoke already curling from chimneys. A child called out to her. "Morning, Aunt Yum." "Morning, Ko." She smiled as she passed him, fingers brushing his head. It had taken only a week for the children of the village to begin calling her that. It had taken her far longer to smile when they did. She returned by midday, arms full of herbs, roots, and a tin of powdered tea she bartered for with old stories. Naruto was exactly where she left him, in their little home. No larger than a shed, really, though Wyman had patched it with her own hands. He sat at the window, always the window. His posture never shifted. His head never turned. But the wind always knew how to find his face. She laid her things down and crouched beside him. The old floor creaked beneath her knees. With shaking hands, she smoothed back the edges of his golden hair, now grown long and unruly. Her fingers didn't tremble from fatigue. They trembled because they always did. Because touching him was always the same, like touching a memory that refused to fade. Today, she whispered, "We'll finish the story about the frog who became a prince." She lit the small hearth and boiled the tea. Outside, a woodpecker tapped at the branches. Inside, Wyman opened the tale of duality. Her ink had begun to curve with the years. Her handwriting more elegant now, each page carefully kept for him. She told the story slowly. She always did. Because even if he never blinked, even if he never moved, she believed he heard her. She had to. And as she told the tale of the frog who leapt between heavens and was kissed by the goddess of clouds, she turned her face away so he wouldn't see her tears. She cried anyway. And outside, the children ran through puddles and the leaves danced in the wind. And Uzutsuki did what Uzutsuki always did. It held them. Days passed like that. Weeks. Years. Sometimes the season skipped. Sometimes the sky broke into colors that had no name. But Wyman stayed. The fox stayed for 3 nights. It didn't howl. It didn't bite. It didn't speak in riddles or names. It only curled beside the hearth, beside the boy who never moved, and blinked when Wyman whispered. "It remembers him," she said once, fingers brushing the fur. "Even now. Even after." She didn't finish the sentence. There was no need. In Uzutsuki, there was no war. No memory of scenarios. No tales of calamity or pantheon fall. Only sea and salt and wind. And the boy called Tsurugi, who didn't speak. But sometimes, people asked. Not many, and not loudly, but they asked. Once, during the village's lantern tide. A time when everyone painted stories onto paper and sent them down the cliffs in boats of flame. An old woman named Maju, who carved oyster shells into charms, sat beside Mirai and asked softly, "Where did he go, child?" Wyman blinked. "He's here." "No, not the body. The part that listens." Her gnarled fingers traced the edge of her sake cup. "Where did he go?" Wyman looked to the fire, then to the man beside it. And then, she told the truth, or enough of it. "Tsurugi," she said, "was once a boy who was always hungry." The children quieted. Maju blinked. "Hungry?" "Yes." Her voice did not rise. It folded into the wind, like something shaped for whispers. Not for food, or not only for that. She looked down at Naruto's still form. The salt light caught the curve of his collarbone, where she'd wrapped his shawl again that morning. "There's a kind of hunger the world doesn't feed," she continued. "The kind that's born from being forgotten." A pause. He was forgotten? No, not just that. He was erased. She folded her hands. He was born into a village that needed a scapegoat more than it needed a child. So they named him a disaster. Called him the thing that ended their peace. The thing to fear. The boy was 5 when he first understood the word monster. A breeze stirred the lanterns outside. He trained. He smiled. He offered himself over and over. Like bark in a famine. Like a farmer who wakes before dawn knowing the land is dead and digs anyway, because his hands don't know how not to give. She looked up, and now even the wind seemed to still. He fought wars for a world that would not feed him. Ate meals alone. Laughed alone. Cried alone. And still he stood. "There is a hunger," she said, "that does not live in the belly. It lives in the bones. The kind where you want love more than bread. Where you give until nothing is left, and then you give again. Naruto didn't stir. But the fire cracked once. The last time he died, she whispered, it wasn't from an enemy. She looked to the children now. To Kana. To the boy with the maps. And the girl who carved kites from driftwood. It was from the world. A silence deeper than morning settled. Then Maju, the old woman, placed a hand over hers. Child, she said softly. That's not the story of a ghost. Wyman looked at her. Maju smiled. That's the story of a hero. The next morning, they left sea salt rice on the threshold. No one asked again. They just listened. Each evening, by the edge of the hearth, Wyman would tell stories. She began to name the fox. Just Shiro. Shiro sat beside Naruto's husk, like a shadow made of warmth. Its tail flicked whenever she reached the good parts. When spring came again, Wyman planted memory willow outside the porch. She carved Naruto a flute he couldn't play and tied it to the post with silver string. Children left him sea glass. One even left a song. In Uzutsuki, no one forgot him. He was the boy who was hungry and still gave. He was the sword that never swung. He was Tsurugi. But not all stories sleep forever. And some prayers reach higher places than they should. One evening, a man arrived. Cloaked. Hooded. His eyes too sharp for a fisherman. His sandals too clean for brine. He stopped at the edge of town and looked toward the ridge. Do you have a wife up there? Kana asked, curious. No, the man said, his voice stiff. I think. I'm too late for that. He climbed the ridge. He knocked once on the door of the red-eared house. And inside, where the fire still burned, Wyman opened the door with Naruto's head in her lap. Hello, Sasuke, she said. That evening, Sasuke stood on the outskirts of Uzutsuki, hand resting on the hilt of a sword he hadn't drawn in months. The wind was sharp with salt and spring bloom, but he felt neither warmth nor chill. The moment had been building for too long. Behind him, the sea whispered its ancient lullabies. Before him, the cottage's chimney whispered smoke. Wyman sat before the fire. Naruto. Tsurugi, as the villagers called him. Lay as he always had, wrapped in a worn blanket, a driftwood comb resting beside him, a fox curled at his feet like a memory no one dared name. Sit, Wyman said. Sasuke did. And then, she began. You want to know what this world is, she said. What he is. What I am. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Naruto, and her voice stayed soft. Then listen. Listen to the story of a boy who suffered so many times the world broke before he did. The flames crackled. This was a world with no gods. No observers. No covenant to write the endings. Just people. Just hurt. She exhaled. In the first life, he lived until 6. He never spoke. Not a word. He drew pictures in the dirt. Of suns, and foxes, and trees. His caretakers left him in the woods one night. He didn't come back. That was the first time he died. The villagers never found the body. Sasuke said nothing. In the second, he made it to the academy. A teacher named Mizuki gave him candy. Taught him extra jutsu. Pretended to care. When Iruka found out, Mizuki killed him in front of Naruto and told him it was his fault for being born cursed. The next day, Naruto threw himself off the Hokage monument. Still silence. In another life, a kind couple adopted him. He called them mother and father. They died a week later. The village called it a curse. In the fourth, he was adopted again. The man beat the woman every night. Naruto took the beatings in her place. One night, the man came at her with a knife. Naruto stabbed him. She screamed. She called him a monster. He ran. Wyman paused. In that life, he lived in the woods again. Slept under roots. Ate bark. He died of a fever in winter. The fire popped. Sasuke stared into it. And in the 6th life, she continued. He made it all the way to graduation. He was on a team with a boy named Shiro and a girl named Aiko. He thought they were his friends. Aiko kissed him once behind the academy. Shiro slit his throat in the forest the next day. The wind outside groaned against the cottage walls. There was a life where he passed the exam. Where he smiled for real. Where Hiruzen gave him his own apartment. And then Hiruzen died. The new Hokage was Danzo. He had Naruto taken away in the night. She turned to Sasuke. They dissected him, piece by piece, to understand the monster sealed inside. Sasuke's hands clenched. He came back from that. He remembered that. When the next loop began, he didn't speak for the first 5 years. He was afraid he'd say something wrong, and they'd cut him open again. She swallowed hard. There was a life where Kiba was his friend, and one where Kiba set his house on fire because his mother told him Naruto was a curse. A life where he was happy for exactly 13 days. That's how long it took before he found Kakashi's corpse in the river. The note said, I couldn't protect you. Her voice broke. But the worst. She looked at Naruto then, eyes soft, raw. Was the life where he was normal. No seal, no beast, no curse. Just a boy. A boy who lived in a small house with Minato and Kushina. They made bento boxes and fought over blankets. Kushina laughed when he spilled ink on the floor. Minato called him his moonlight. A breath. And then one night, the world rewound. And Naruto woke up alone, with a note that read it was better this way. Sasuke's mouth opened. No sound came out. He tried to die. Not once. Not twice. 6,418 times. Each one remembered. Each one etched into the fabric of the universe. until the universe screamed. She stood. That scream became the covenant. And that boy, she looked at Naruto, was rewritten. She stopped there, not because the story was done, but because the fire was low, and the fox had curled tighter around Naruto's unmoving feet, and her hands were trembling. Outside, the tide began to rise. Inside, the silence spoke more than any flame, and the question still hung in the air. Who was Naruto? Not the boy in the stories, not the boy in the blanket, but the boy beneath it all. And YMN, Mirai, would tell that story for as long as it took. Even if it took forever, YMN did not blink. She did not breathe in shallow. She simply stared at the fire, and then she spoke again. There was a life where he became a hero. Sasuke's eyes lifted. Saved the village from an attack that shouldn't have happened. Everyone called him champion. For 6 days. Until a rumor spread that he'd absorbed the power of the attackers. That the only way he'd won was by becoming one of them. YMN tapped her fingers once. Twice. Against the woven mat. They dragged him into the Hokage's tower. Danzo was there. So was Hamura. So was Koharu. They smiled like it was a funeral. Her voice went quiet. They told him heroes were dangerous. She exhaled. There was a life where he became Hokage. Not in title. In action. People started coming to him instead of the council. He resolved disputes. Prevented a clan war. Rebuilt 3 orphanages. They gave him a robe for the ceremony. It never reached his shoulders. They poisoned the tea. Sasuke turned, his jaw rigid. In another life, the seal broke early. When he was 8. And he fought it. He won. But the village blamed him anyway. Said it was because he was too close to the monster. They exiled him. YMN stared at the flames. He walked east until his feet bled. Slept beneath dead trees. When he made it to the next village, they saw his chakra and turned him away. One woman gave him a blanket. He used it to bury a squirrel that froze beside him that night. She smiled faintly. There was a life where he had a sister. Sasuke blinked. She was born during one of the rare timelines where both Minato and Kushina survived. She had his eyes. She loved him. But then the loop reset. And she wasn't born again. A pause. He looked for her in every life afterward. Never found her. Once he found a girl with the same name. Asked her if she remembered the stars. She didn't. Sasuke swallowed. YMN pressed her palm to Naruto's. There was a life where he became everything they wanted. Polite, quiet, powerful, loyal. They sent him to the border to fight Suna's puppet corps. He won. Single-handedly. They told him to stand down. He kept fighting. Not out of disobedience, but because he could hear screaming. They called it treason. Sasuke closed his eyes. He came home to a medal ceremony. And a funeral. One for every teammate who disobeyed orders to follow him. He never fought again. She paused, glancing out the window. The sea shimmered black and silver under the rising moon. There was a life where he fell in love. Sasuke turned toward her, but YMN didn't look back. Her name was Yui. She owned a tea shop. She taught him how to steep herbs to stop the shaking in his hands. He told her about his nightmares. She told him hers. She had scars on her wrists and no stories from childhood. They made a garden. She died in a landslide on their anniversary. Sasuke clenched his fist. There was a life where he never left the orphanage. Where he never met Irika. Never took the academy exams. He just stayed. Watched. Listened. The other kids called him mute. He wasn't. He just couldn't speak anymore. One day, a noble from the fire court visited. Asked to adopt a child. The matron offered Naruto. He smiled. She gave them another boy instead. Naruto's hand twitched. YMN felt it. She didn't look down. Her voice wavered only once. There was a life where he was happy. Just one. He had friends. He had a home. He had a book he was writing. It was a dumb fantasy story. About a boy who was half wind, half flame. He was going to name the boy Minma. She paused, and this time she smiled. He said it sounded cooler. Sasuke's breath caught. And then, the world rewound. Her hand curled into Naruto's. He forgot everything. But sometimes, when he wrote in his new timeline, he would write the name Minma without realizing it. She turned toward Sasuke. And then the real suffering began. She didn't stop. Because the stories didn't stop. Because they couldn't. Because they had been sealed, broken, scattered, denied. And finally, someone was telling them back. Not for glory, not for prophecy, but so that someone would remember. And Sasuke listened. And Naruto twitched. And the fire burned on. The fire had long burned past its warmth. It no longer offered heat. Only clarity. And in that clarity, YMN began again. Not softly. Not gently. Because what came next could not be softened. What came next had no mercy. There were timelines, she said, where he didn't even make it to the academy. Sasuke did not move. She continued. There were thousands. The wind outside howled like it remembered. Timelines where he was 6, and he jumped into the Naka River with rocks in his coat. Where he was 7, and he tied a rope from the Hokage monument to the scaffolding, because he thought if he died in view of the village, they'd finally see him. Where he was 8, and he drank a bottle of cleaning solution, then scrawled a goodbye note on the wall in crayon. Sasuke opened his mouth, but no words came. YMN didn't wait. Timelines where the villagers didn't even have to say anything. They just looked at him long enough. With enough silence. He learned the weight of that kind of gaze. The one that says you shouldn't be here. The one that doesn't raise a hand but lets you disappear. There was a timeline where Irika died before they met. There was a timeline where Irika lived but never turned around. There were timelines where his meals were stolen or poisoned or simply never given. There was one where he starved to death 3 days before his 9th birthday. She looked down at Naruto's unmoving face. His body was found with his arms wrapped around an empty ramen bowl. Sasuke's breath hitched. But still, Wyman did not stop. There was a timeline where the 4th Hokage had a son. She touched Naruto's cheek. But it wasn't him. It was another child. A replacement. Someone they could raise without fear. And in that world, Naruto still existed. Alone. Confined to a cellar beneath the orphanage. No birth certificate. No name. He scratched "I exist" into the walls. Over and over. Until his nails bled. Until he bled out. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And when they found him, days later, they erased the writing. There was a timeline where he stood at the edge of the village for 9 hours, waiting to be let in after getting lost in the woods. They never opened the gates. He died of exposure before sunrise. There were timelines where he built friends out of garbage. Timelines where he named rats. Timelines where he spent 4 winters in silence. Because speaking meant being noticed. There was a timeline where he broke every bone in his hands trying to dig a grave for a stray cat that had been his only friend. The cat's name was Tama. She looked at Sasuke then, and her eyes were fire. They burned the grave. There was a timeline where he tried to smile at a festival. Someone threw hot dango grease on him. He smiled anyway. That night, he found a kunai on the ground. She didn't say what happened after. She didn't need to. There were timelines where he was adopted. Sasuke blinked. But always by people who thought they could fix him, control him, use him, make him obedient. One couple made him kneel outside in winter for hours when he cried. One told him they loved him, then sold him to a traveling seal merchant. One used him as bait to catch chakra beasts. One made him fight their biological son every week for food. One mother loved him, but the father didn't. And one night, when Naruto stepped between them, he killed the father. Sasuke's eyes widened. Yaman's voice went still, and the mother threw him out. She ran her fingers through Naruto's hair. He wandered the outskirts for 3 days, then walked into the tide, and never came out. There were timelines where he never had a name, where the villagers called him it, where he wore a collar, where he slept in dog crates. There were timelines where he met Hiruzen, and Hiruzen said he was proud of him. And then Hiruzen left, and Naruto never saw him again. There were timelines where he made it to 10, and looked at the world, and just said no. Sasuke's jaw trembled. There were timelines where he carved tally marks into the floorboards of his room. Thousands of them. Some in blood. She swallowed. And there was one timeline. One I found carved into the roots of an abandoned tree, where he simply wrote, "I just want someone to know I was here." The room went silent. Even the fire dared not crackle. Yaman leaned forward, pressed her forehead to Naruto's chest. He died, she whispered, 2,133 times. Before he ever reached the age of 10. She looked up. Her face was wet with tears. But he never hurt anyone. Never lashed out. Never burned the world, even when it burned him. He never stopped trying. She broke. He just wanted to matter. Naruto didn't stir, but a tear slipped down his cheek. And this time, he wasn't the only one crying. Wyman did not blink. She stared into the fire, eyes unblinking, face lit not by warmth but by something else entirely. Something deeper, older. The kind of light that comes not from flame, but from memory. After the 2000, she said, came the long deaths. Sasuke did not speak. She continued. There was one loop where the world ended before he was born. Some kind of war. I don't know which one. When the system came back online. He was born alone. No villagers. No doctors. No parents. Just a cave, and an umbilical cord he had to gnaw through himself. Sasuke flinched. There was a loop where his chakra system developed backwards. Every breath he took drained energy instead of giving it. He lived 3 years. Spent most of them sleeping. Dreamed of warmth he never felt. Died with a smile. There was one loop, she said, where a god decided he didn't deserve to be born with hands. He was born with claws instead. People called him a demon before he could crawl. So he stopped crawling. Stopped moving. Stopped eating. Crawled into a hole under the orphanage floorboards and never came out. They only found him because the smell started leaking into the room above. There was one where the landlord fed him his own letters. Every note he tried to send. Every attempt at a birthday card. Every poem. When they found his stomach, it was filled with paper and ink. He had written "I love you" 94 times. There was one loop, Wyman said, where he was born blind. Not physically. Spiritually. Every face he saw blurred. Every voice sounded like water. No matter how hard he tried, no one would acknowledge him. Because even when he stood right in front of them, no one could remember what he looked like. They told him he was cursed. He started carving his name into the walls of public buildings, desperate to be seen. Then he carved it into himself. There was one loop where the Uchiha took him in. Sasuke froze. He lived in the compound, ate their food, laughed, and then the purge came. He saw every one of them die. Everyone but you. Sasuke's breath hitched. Because in that loop, she said softly, you were the one who did it. He choked. Wyman continued. He couldn't stop you. He tried. You didn't recognize him. You killed him too. But not before he whispered your name. Sasuke looked like he might be sick. There was one loop, she said, where he did become Hokage. But the cost was everything. To win the war, he made a deal with something that should never have listened. It gave him power. It took his voice. He ruled for 7 years. And then vanished. No one remembered him. Not even statues. Not even the stone. There was one where he learned to smile perfectly. Trained in the mirror every day. And everyone loved him. They adored him. Laughed when he laughed. Cried when he cried. But it was never for him. Only the performance. One day he stopped smiling. And the world turned away. So he smiled again. And never stopped. Until one night he walked into the forest. And didn't come back. There was one loop where he met a girl. She saw him. Really saw him. She brought him bread and honey. Braided his hair. Promised to stay. But the villagers found out. They said she'd been cursed. She stopped visiting. So he started bleeding in patterns. Thinking if he made a beautiful enough scar, she might notice again. She didn't. There was one where he was taken in by a man who loved him. Truly loved him. But the man was sick. Dying. Naruto spent years studying medicine. Chakra therapies. Forbidden seals. He tried everything. He failed. He buried him alone. And never tried again. There was one where he lived in a tower, far from the world. Monks raised him. Called him a holy vessel. They never let him outside. Not once. When he finally escaped, the sun burned him. His skin blistered within minutes. He died whispering, it was warm. There was one loop where he made it all the way to adulthood. Married. Had a daughter. She looked like her mother. But the war came again. It always came again. And when the time came, he was given a choice. Let the village die. Or give her up. He did what a shinobi should. And died screaming her name. There was one where the world had no chakra at all. He was just a boy. Bullied. Abandoned. Alone. One night, he put on a red coat he'd found in the garbage, tied a headband made of twine, and climbed the highest hill outside town. He shouted at the stars. And no one heard him. So he laid down. And waited to be remembered. He wasn't. There was one where he saved everyone. Stopped the apocalypse. Unraveled the cycle. Redeemed the world. And then, he woke up again. Back at the beginning. And this time, he remembered. Every death. Every name. Every scream. Every moment of grief. He remembered them all. And on that day, Wyman said, voice cracking, he smiled. And said, maybe this time, I'll die better. Sasuke's fist trembled. And he did. But it wasn't the last. There were loops where he swallowed his own tongue. Where he threw himself in front of runaway carts, hoping it'd look like an accident. Where he let bandits catch him, just to feel what it was like to be wanted, even for something terrible. Where he learned to smile while being hurt. Where he convinced others to kill him. Where he forgot who he was. And then forgot he wanted to remember. And then forgot he forgot. And then, she stopped. Sasuke stared at the fire, broken. Wyman whispered there were loops where I wasn't there. And those were the worst of all. The silence after her stories wasn't quiet. It was devastation. Ash shifted in the fire pit. The wind outside the lodge had gone still, as if even the sea dared not speak. Wyman sat unmoving, her face half-shadowed by flame. Across from her, Sasuke stared through the fire like he could see across timelines. His lips parted. And then, I remember one, he said. Wyman blinked. Sasuke's voice was low, but steady, measured, like someone laying down a sword and choosing, instead, to speak with both hands open. I remember a loop. He looked down at his fingers. There were people there. Real people. They were idiots. Every one of them. Loud. Clumsy. Too soft to survive the world that made them. But they stayed. Wyman watched him, unmoving. I gave everything for them, he said. And they gave everything for me. His voice did not rise. It fell. Each word heavier than the last. Each memory pulled from the marrow. There was a girl, he said, with a fierce heart and a broken home. She reminded me of fire. Always burning, even when it hurt. There was a boy, always charging ahead, with the worst plans. And the biggest smile. There was an old man who cooked me soup. A sensei who watched me fall and still held out his hand. A friend who fought beside me even when he should have run. There was a girl with wide eyes who shouldn't have loved me, but did. Wyman couldn't breathe. They stayed. They watched me lose my mind and didn't leave. They fought when I told them not to. Held me when I didn't deserve it. Died and came back and died again. Sasuke looked at her then. And Wyman, for all her certainty, all her divine ink and rewritten fate, broke. Because she knew what he was saying. And he wasn't talking about some past life. He was talking about this one. She opened her mouth to speak. He interrupted. There was a day I tried to end it all. You were there. Do you remember what you said? Wyman's lips trembled. You said if you're going to fall, fall somewhere I can catch you. I think about that every day. The fire cracked. Sasuke exhaled, shakily. I remember holding him back. When he was going to fight gods alone. I remember seeing him smile when he realized we survived. I remember a boy who held the whole world in his heart. I remember. His throat tightened. Wyman wiped her eyes, roughly. I remember Naruto. Sasuke looked down. His hands had curled into fists again. I don't remember the loops like you do, he said. But I remember him. And that was enough. Wyman shook. Her whole body trembled like she had held in a scream too long. He's gone, she whispered. Even now. He's not. He's not here. Not really. I know, Sasuke said. But maybe. He reached across the fire. He doesn't have to be alone. She stared at his hand. You remember him, she said. He nodded. Her fingers trembled. Say it again. Sasuke didn't hesitate. I remember Naruto. YMN closed her eyes. And wept. Not quietly. Not stoically. Like a woman who had held 6,000 lives in her hands and never once dropped the weight. Like someone who had told stories for years to someone who never blinked. Like someone who had carried the body of a godchild across the world, hoping to find even one other person who remembered he ever lived. And now she had. He sat across from her. Not as a god. Not as an avenger. But as a boy who remembered his best friend. And across the fire, the husk of Naruto didn't stir. But his fingers flexed. And his heartbeat, which had long gone faint, shuddered. They stayed by the fire long after the wind stopped shaking the shutters. Long after Kana fell asleep curled against the hearth, mumbling the name of the boy in the corner who never spoke. The fire had gone low, but the memory hadn't. YMN sat with a quill in her hand, unmoving, eyes rimmed with salt and flicker light. Sasuke didn't speak. He knew not to. She stared at the tale of the utterly gutsy shinobi, its cracked leather cover resting on her lap, its last page full of grief and static. It had been her prayer. It had been her warning. A book written to remember a boy the world tried to erase. But now, I was wrong, she whispered. Sasuke looked up. This book. Her voice cracked. It's not worthy of him. She turned it over. It's full of pain, of loops, of deaths, of stories that break and beg and still lose. Her fingers trembled. It doesn't deserve his name. Sasuke didn't speak. He watched her. YMN stood, walked slowly to the corner where Naruto's husk lay wrapped in blankets. She knelt beside him, gently brushing a curl of golden hair back from his face. I thought remembering was enough, she whispered. I thought that if I could just tell people what he suffered, they'd understand. Her hands trembled against his cheek. But no one should only be remembered for what they endured. She looked over her shoulder at Sasuke. He needs a new story. The room stilled. I'm going to write him another book. Sasuke's breath caught. A book that tells the truth not of how he died, but how he lived. She reached for her ink, her parchment, and for the first time in years, she didn't reach for the tale of duality. She didn't invoke the gods. She didn't call upon the fables of Olympus or the broken loops of memory. She reached for something new. The children would find her that morning still writing, her hands black with ink, her hair unbraided and wild, the fire still burning, her eyes full of light. She called the book The Boy Who Never Gave Up. Not the child of prophecy, not the monster of the leaf, not the husk, just a boy. She started with a boy who was born unloved, but not unmoved, who was called troublemaker, demon, nothing, and smiled anyway. A boy who failed every test, every friend, every dream, but tried again. She wrote of the boy who shared ramen with teachers that didn't see him, who gave umbrellas to girls who wouldn't meet his eyes, who picked up trash alone just to hear the village say thank you. She wrote of a boy who loved too much, who loved even the ones who hurt him, who loved a boy with eyes like winter and held his hand even when it burned, who stood in front of gods with no armor but his heartbeat and said, I will protect them anyway. She wrote a world that saw him, a world that laughed with him, a world that called him brother and son and hero, a world that didn't make him beg, a world that bowed to him not because he was strong, but because he stayed, because he got up, because he gave everything when he had nothing, because he taught them how. The ink soaked deep into the parchment, like it knew, like it had waited. She wrote of a Naruto who was loud, who was stubborn, who was foolish, who was kind, who changed everything. His story isn't finished, she whispered to Sasuke later that night. It never was. She held the pages against her chest, voice low. I wrote all these years to remember him, but now, I want to write so the world will deserve him. She looked to Naruto, his blank gaze turned slightly toward the fire. I want to give him a future. Sasuke said nothing, but in his silence, she found an answer. That night, YMN penned a final line. Not at the end of the story, but at its beginning. The boy who lived it was dawn when he stood to leave. The sun hadn't crested the cliffs yet, but the edge of the sea was silver, and the wind no longer carried storm. YMN was still at the desk. The book was closed beside her. Not finished. Never finished. Just waiting for its next sentence, as all the best lives do. She turned her head slowly when she heard the shift of his boots. Sasuke stood at the doorway, cloak draped over one shoulder, eyes unreadable beneath his lashes. You're leaving, she said. He nodded once. She looked back at Naruto, still wrapped in blankets, still silent. The sun's edge caught on the ends of his lashes. The light made him look younger. He's getting heavier, she whispered, fingers pressed to the pages of the book. Sasuke followed her gaze. His hand twitched. Then, he walked over, knelt once more beside the boy who had once been his rival, his friend, his foil, his opposite, his only mirror. He didn't touch him, just looked, and then looked back at her. I'll report it as a false alarm, he said. Some girl and her mute husband in a mining town by the cliffs. No ties, no threat. YMN's breath caught in her throat. You're sure? I'm not an observer, he said. Not anymore. He stood again, shouldered his pack, but then paused in the doorway. The wind stirred his cloak. The salt breeze tousled his hair. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. But I'll still be watching. She rose to her feet, slowly. I don't need protection, Sasuke. His eyes didn't leave the horizon. It's not you I'm trying to protect. A pause. I don't want him to ever suffer again, he said. Wyman exhaled. It wasn't a sigh. Not quite. It was something softer. Sadder. I tried, she whispered. I know. Sasuke turned his head. His left eye, no longer Sharingan. Now a thing far stranger, deeper, forged in fable and truth. Glinted faintly in the morning light. A dojutsu born from the belief that the world itself was broken, that it could be rewritten, that it must be. You're writing a new story for him, Sasuke said. That's good. He stepped out onto the path. I'll write one for the world. Wyman blinked. Sasuke kept walking. I'll become the protagonist, he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I'll make the kind of world where he doesn't need to be. His hand curled into a fist at his side. A world where he doesn't need to fight. Doesn't need to scream just to be seen. Doesn't have to prove anything. Not even once. His cloak flared as the wind lifted. Wyman followed him to the edge of the porch, heart heavy. I thought he was the protagonist, she said, voice shaking. He was, Sasuke answered without turning. In the last story. He paused on the trail. I'll be the villain if I have to. And for the first time, his voice faltered. Only slightly. But if I can become the hero. If I can write it well enough. Maybe. He looked back over his shoulder. Maybe he can just live. Then Sasuke Uchiha stepped into the fog. Into the wilderness. Into the next chapter of a world he intended to make better. For a boy who could not yet move. Wyman watched until the mist took him. She didn't cry. She returned to Naruto's side. Picked up the quill. Opened the book. And began to write. Because the world wasn't ready yet. But it would be. Not because of fate. Not because of prophecy. But because someone decided it should be. One page at a time. One memory at a time. One boy's story. Reclaimed. It was cold. Not a wind. Not a breathless chill. But the kind of cold that happens when narrative ends. Wyman opened her eyes. There was no sky. No ground. No stars. No names. Only the void. Trembling with the memory of forgotten loops. A cradle carved from silence. She sat up slowly. Her hands were smudged with ink. But her story was gone. The parchment she'd carried was blank. Not erased. Unwritten. She was alone. Until he appeared. A silhouette emerged from the dark. Not as flame, but as shadow given crown. Nine tails curled through the dark like nebulae dragging claws through time. Where his face should have been, a veil. Woven from the cosmos at the end of all things. Rippled like the last scream of a star. He was not light. He was not darkness. He was the thing after. The nine-tailed apocalypse of the end stepped forward, and the void bowed beneath him. Did you see everything you wanted to? He asked. His voice wasn't a voice. It was what words became after they failed. Wyman blinked. Her fingers twitched. She didn't answer. You told yourself you were writing stories, the god said, slowly. That you were remembering him. Giving him the world. I was. No. He tilted his head, veil rippling like a dying galaxy. You were trying to remember yourself. The silence deepened. Not emptiness. Wait. A pressure of too many things not said. Do you want to know what you are? Yes. The ninth tail lifted a single claw and the void parted. And she saw. The moment the first loop collapsed. The very first time the system opened and tried to contain what could not be contained. Naruto died. Not in battle. Not as a hero. Alone. In an orphanage. His name unspoken. Forgotten. A void between loops. In that fracture, Kurama broke. He screamed into the recursion, and that scream. His pain, his memory, his refusal to let Naruto die unnoticed. Fractured his soul. His apocalypse ascended. His mortal husk was left behind. But it didn't stay empty. A girl. A Hinata that never became anyone else. Fell into that shell. The only Hinata the system recorded from the first loop. She wasn't saved. She wasn't loved. But she saw him. And that was enough. That girl's soul took root in the fox's abandoned vessel. And then, the loops began. Over 6,000 cycles. Naruto died. Naruto suffered. Naruto endured. And in every one, a fragment of Foxtail remembered. She remembered his screams. His kindness. His silence. His failures. His fire. And so Wyman was born. You are not a girl, said the nine-tailed apocalypse of the end. You are not a god. You are not Hinata. He stepped forward, gaze burning behind the veil of the end. You are the foxtail of the first loop. The broken shell of the beast that once burned the world. Possessed by the last living kindness of a girl who died unseen. You are the memory of Naruto Uzumaki's suffering. She clutched her chest. Why do I care so much? She asked. The beast did not blink. Because that pain you carry, those stories you told, were not his. What? The tales began to drift around her like dying comets. They were yours. You were the only one who never forgot. Who felt it over and over again. You watched him break. Again. 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 You are the fourth wall of his pain. You are the storyteller who bled. And in the final cycle, when no one else remembered, he stepped closer. You decided someone should. She trembled. Her eyes stung. I thought I was Hinata. You were. Once. In the first version of her. The one who watched from the crowd. The one who never spoke. The one who prayed for him and died without being heard. He lowered his head. You became the myth because no one else would carry it. The void rippled, and Naruto's husk appeared. Still, silent, but present. He didn't move, but he was there, and that was enough. YMN looked at her hands. Ink pooled from her palms, forming letters in the void. The beginning of a new book. What am I supposed to do now? She asked. The nine-tailed apocalypse of the end turned away. Finish writing. She stared after him. That's it. That's everything. And with that, he vanished. YMN stood alone in the void. The last storyteller. The first myth reborn. And as ink bled from her fingers, she whispered into the dark. For Naruto Uzumaki. I'll write a world that doesn't forget. And the book began again. This time not with a scream, but with a page that turned. Years passed. Yuzutsuki changed, as all things must. Children grew. Crooked windows were replaced. A second well was dug at the edge of the cliff. Kana, once toothless and map-mad, grew into a teenage cartographer, mapping the stars above their ridge and the sea caves below. The villagers told new stories now. About Miss Mirai of the red-eared house who never left the cliffs, who once carried her husband across the world, and who still wrote every night beside his sleeping body. A book. Always a book. They stopped asking what she was writing. She didn't offer. But every time someone asked who the boy by the hearth was. The boy who didn't speak, who didn't blink, whose tears sometimes came without cause. She smiled and said, he's the reason I'm here. And kept writing. Years blurred. Salt clung to the shutters. Storms came and went. There were fewer foxes now. But sometimes, in early spring, one would still appear. Silver, silent, watching. Naruto. Tsurugi. Never changed. He remained exactly as he had the day she carried him away from Olympus. Still, silent, hollow, but YMN. Mirai kept writing, and writing, and writing, until finally, one winter night, with wind curling around the house and the fire warm and crackling, she set down her quill. Her hands were calloused beyond recognition, her face older, her hair streaked with silver and ash. But her eyes were the same. Eyes of someone who had once remembered the first boy who ever suffered. Eyes of someone who had crossed myth and memory and gods and war. Eyes of someone who had carried love and silence for a lifetime. And now, she was done. She held the book in her hands like a newborn. Its cover was bound in bark from the cliffs, dyed in the reds of 100 autumns. On the front, carved carefully in her hand the boy who lived. No gods, no fables, no prophecy, just him. She sat beside Naruto's husk, as she had for over 2 decades. He hadn't moved, not once. But tonight, something in the air felt different. YMN opened the book to its final page. Her hand trembled. She took out a small knife, drew a line across her palm, and bled. Not for pain, not for suffering, but for sharing. She pressed her hand to the page. And it accepted her. The ink shimmered. The parchment pulsed. A piece of her. Her voice, her sorrow, her hope, her story. Sank into the pages and did not return. She was still there, but less. A fragment gone. A soul thinned. A storyteller dimmed. She leaned forward, breath shallow, and placed the book gently on Naruto's unmoving chest. You don't have to wake up, she whispered. You don't have to fight. She closed his hand over the cover. You don't have to remember anything. Her breath hitched. But maybe, just maybe, you'll feel this. Her voice cracked. And if you do, it'll be enough. She kissed his forehead, a place she had kissed 1,000 times. I love you. And then she slumped beside him. The fire burned. The wind moaned through the eaves. Outside, frost danced over the garden stones. Inside, the boy who had not moved for years breathed. Once. Shallow. A flicker of air. Then again, his fingers tightened around the book. And slowly, eyes opened. Not golden. Not godlike. Just eyes. Soft. Human. Empty. He turned his head. Slow. Aching, like a puppet learning its strings. And looked at her. His lips parted. No sound came. But she was already crying. Because he was looking. Because he was here. Because after all the stories, after all the waiting, after all the pain and pen and pages, he was alive. Hello, she whispered. He blinked. Do you know your name? A pause. A slow shake of the head. That's okay. She brushed his hair back. You don't need to. She leaned against him, forehead to forehead, like she had done when she first stole him from a burning world. I'll give it back to you, she said, one story at a time, and for the first time since the world forgot him. He smiled. Not because he remembered, not because he knew, but because something in the warmth beside him felt like home. It was quiet, always. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of living. Naruto didn't remember who he was. Not the first day, not the second, not the 100th, not the year after that. He couldn't say chakra. He didn't flinch at the word leaf. He didn't know what a kunai was. He had never heard of gods. But he smiled at the sound of her voice. That was enough. They lived together in the little house with the red-eared shutters and the herb garden she kept stubbornly alive despite the salt wind. He rose when she rose. He ate what she cooked. He watched her mend nets on the porch, and sometimes sat beside her while she spun thread and told him stories. He never said anything back, but he listened, and sometimes his hand would twitch when she said the word perseverance. Sometimes he'd turn his head when she said hero. Sometimes she swore he almost laughed when she told him the one about the boy and the frog scroll. But no memories ever returned. And every third morning, he would forget again. He'd open his eyes and look at her like a stranger. He would flinch at her touch. He would step away from the warmth of the stove like it was unfamiliar. She always knew it was coming. And every time, she would smile anyway. Good morning, she'd say. It's okay. Do you know your name? He never did. That's all right. I remember for both of us. And she would sit him down. Make tea. Begin again. The story of a boy with hair like dawn who once wanted nothing more than to be seen. The tale of someone who changed the world not by being chosen, but by choosing. Again and again. To stay. She would tell him stories by firelight. Stories soaked in myth and heartache and blood and dreams. She told him of worlds he never remembered and lives he never asked to live. She told him about a boy who was hated and smiled anyway, who was abandoned and ran anyway, who starved and fought and kept going. He never said that was me, but sometimes tears would fall, not because he understood, but because some part of him felt. And she fell in love with every version of him. The one who smiled and nodded like a child. The one who stared blankly into the fire for hours. The one who woke with night terrors and screamed without knowing why. The one who asked if she was real. The one who forgot her name and still trusted her hand. She learned to love in silence. To cradle his trembling hands when he didn't understand why they shook. To sit beside him while he drew spirals in the dirt, never knowing he used to wear one on his back. To laugh when he tried to cook and burn the rice every single time. She would wake to him watching her sometimes, like he wanted to say something. But he never did. She stopped waiting for the old Naruto to return. This one who woke without a past, but tried to smile anyway, was enough. This one who didn't know her name, but always held her hand when she offered it, was enough. She still told the stories, still added chapters to the boy who made the world wait. But she stopped hoping they'd fix him. She wrote for herself, now. For the version of him that woke every few days a blank slate, and let her draw the world on him again. He loved when she told stories about the stars. He liked the one about the fox boy and the moon who waited. He liked anything that ended with her holding his hand. They never kissed. Not yet. He wasn't ready for that. And she never forced it. But once, when they were watching the sea from the edge of the ridge, he leaned his head against her shoulder and said, I know this wind. She didn't cry until later. She asked the gods for nothing anymore. She burned the tale of duality one night beneath the stars and didn't look back. It was never about restoring the old him. It was about loving this one. This quiet, gentle, ever-fracturing boy who gave her a new version of love every few days. A love she met again and again and again, and never got tired of. She taught him how to fish. He carved her a comb from driftwood. They painted their porch blue that spring. The villagers stopped calling him Tsurugi. They called him that quiet boy who follows her like a shadow. She called him Naruto, even though he didn't remember it, even though he never answered. It didn't matter, because she answered for both of them. And every time he forgot, she greeted him the same way. Good morning, Naruto. It's okay. You're home. Spring again. The red-eared house bloomed with moss roses. She painted the eaves with white clay mixed from shell dust and rainwater. Naruto held the bucket. He still didn't speak much. Still didn't ask who he was. Still didn't remember the fables or flames or fallen gods that once carved the world into timelines. But he held the bucket. And when she reached down from the ladder to pass her brush, his hand didn't tremble. Not anymore. Summer. The sea hissed louder in July. They walked the edge of the ridge during high tide, the air thick with salt and old memories. He never remembered the story she told him the night before. But sometimes he asked, will you tell me a story? And she always said yes. He liked stories about kindness. About travelers who shared tea on long roads. About strangers who offered coats in the snow. About people who stayed, even when they didn't have to. She stopped writing in the book. It was already done. She wrote in her mind instead. Wove sentences between sunrises. And recited them into his silence like mantras. He liked when she sang, even though he didn't know the words. Sometimes he hummed along anyway. Autumn. The maple by the stream turned gold too early. They sat beneath it every other evening. She brought him dried fruit in a little cloth pouch. He never asked for it, but he always ate it, one bite at a time. You don't like the sour ones, she said once. He blinked. I don't. You always scrunch your nose. He did it then, and she laughed. His mouth tugged upward for a moment, like a half-formed smile rising from muscle memory alone. She watched it like it was a miracle. Winter. The woodpile dwindled. Snow kissed the windows at dawn. He woke first most mornings now. Not always, but often enough that she stopped bracing for the blank stare. For the silence. He still didn't remember before, but he remembered her. He remembered her voice, her face, her name, the fragment she'd given him. That sliver of self had begun to take root. He never spoke of gods, or scenarios, or war. But he knew where the honey was stored. He knew how to make the tea she liked on sore days. He remembered how to thread a needle. Slowly, clumsily. But he remembered. Once, she dropped a cup. He caught it. She hadn't even realized it was falling. She stared at him for a long time after that. He tilted his head. I didn't want it to break, he said softly. And she just nodded. Her throat too tight to answer. Another year. They replanted the sweet root. Naruto remembered where it grew best. He helped mend the fence. She taught him how to slice brine leaf for stew. His fingers were still awkward. Still slow. But when he dropped a piece, he frowned. I'll get better, he muttered. She kissed the top of his head. You already have. That night, she woke to the sound of his voice. Mirai? She blinked. Yes. He was staring at the ceiling, his fingers twitching against the quilt. I don't know anything, he whispered. But I know you. She didn't cry. Not then. She waited until he was asleep again. Then she stepped outside, barefoot in the snow, and wept into her hands like she'd touched the edge of the sun. Time folded quietly. The seasons spun like a wheel through forgotten stars. Yuzutsuki remained unchanged. Children grew. Fishermen aged. A girl named Kana learned to sail. But Naruto did not change. He did not age. Did not remember more than he could hold. But every day, he held her. He remembered the garden. The taste of salt on the wind. The smell of her hair when it rained. The sound of her voice at dusk. Will you tell me a story? Always. Some nights, he asked, was I ever anything else? She paused. Would it matter if you were? He tilted his head. I don't know. You're you, she said. That's enough. Okay. And it was. He helped her hang laundry in the spring. He carved spoons for the neighbors in autumn. He stayed beside her on cold nights, curled on the hearth with his hand always slightly outstretched. Like he never wanted to wake alone again. They did not speak of gods. They did not speak of scars. She stopped calling him Naruto when others were around. But at night, when the lamps dimmed and the ocean whispered beneath the cliffs, she whispered the name like it was sacred. He never flinched. Another winter. He made her a necklace from red thread and a seashell. It reminded me of you. She held it like it was gold. He looked confused. Why are you crying? I'm not, she lied. You always say that. He didn't know why it made her smile. He didn't need to. Love wasn't always spoken between them. It was in the way she tied his boots each morning. In the way he waited outside the dye house to walk her home. In the stories she still told, even if he never remembered the endings. In the way he always looked at her like she was his ending. Even if he didn't remember the beginning. He was a boy the world had forgotten. She was the girl who refused to forget him. And together, they lived in the house with the red-eared shutters, at the edge of the world where no gods looked, no wars reached, and no time dared move them forward. The first frost came early that year, painting the village in hues of silver and white. Wyamin stood by the window, watching the snowflakes dance in the pale morning light. Beside her, Naruto sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the falling snow, a soft smile playing on his lips. He had not aged. Time seemed to pass around him, leaving him untouched. But within, something had changed. The fragment of Wyamin's soul she had given him had grown, anchoring him to the present, to her. He no longer lost his memories every few days. He remembered her, her stories, her kindness. He remembered the warmth of the hearth, the taste of her cooking, the sound of her laughter. They spent their days together in quiet companionship. Wyamin continued to write, her quill dancing across the parchment as she chronicled their lives, their moments. Naruto would sit beside her, sometimes reading, sometimes simply watching her with a serene expression. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sharing stories and memories. Naruto would listen intently, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. He never spoke of his past, of the loops and the pain. But he would often reach out, taking her hand in his, a silent gesture of gratitude and affection. One night, as the snow fell softly outside, Naruto turned to her and said, I don't remember everything, but I remember you. I remember your kindness, your stories. Wyamin smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. That's all that matters, she whispered. They sat in silence, the fire crackling softly, the snow continuing to fall outside. In that moment, surrounded by warmth, Naruto was not alone. This chapter marks the quietest arc in otherworldly rendering. It is a love letter to forgotten people, to characters erased by time, to trauma that doesn't scream, but waits. It is a whisper against oblivion, a breath of life into silence. A few things to keep in mind as we go forward. The nature of Naruto's condition. Naruto is not comatose. He is exuviated. His soul displaced, his narrative essence devoured during the fight against perverse fertility. What remains is a husk, a body that breathes, reacts, and slowly reawakens. But lacks cognition. This is not a magical sleep. There is no true love's kiss. This is the narrative aftermath of 6,000 recursive deaths and erasures. The fragment Wyamin gifted him, a piece of her own soul through the boy who never gave up, is acting as an artificial heart for his story. Every version of Naruto she nurtures is slightly different, a new sprout from the same root. He is recovering, but he is not healing in the way you think. He will not remember everything, but he will learn how to live again. Wyamin is not simply Hinata. She is the exuviated husk of Kurama, possessed by the first Hinata ever registered by the system. The one from the first failed loop, the girl who died praying someone would notice Naruto. When Kurama ascended to become the nine-tailed apocalypse of the end, his mortal shell remained, and Hinata's memory, denied peace, slipped into it. Over time, she inherited the memories of every foxtail instance. A storyteller made from grief. She is not a god. She is not a person. She is a refusal. She is the story that never stopped being told.